Water. Earth.
Baba Booey.
Fire. Air. My TV used to tell me stories about the old days. A time of peace, when the Avatar kept balance between the Water Tribes, Earth Kingdom, Fire Nation, and Air Nomads. But that all changed when my YouTube channel attacked. Only MattCMG mastered the Avatar YouTube video. Only he could stop the ruthless algorithm. But when the world needed him most, he vanished. Over 15 years have passed and Avatar has become one of the most popular series in the world. 7 years ago, I started Avatar Month to share my love for the series, leaving me as one of the first Avatar YouTubers. Some people believe that Avatar has gotten oversaturated and nothing will ever recapture its magic. But I haven't lost hope. I still believe that somehow, the Avatar will return to save the world. That'd have been cool if you could see it. Hello there. I just flew into frame because I'm epic. Bruh. Over the years, we've talked a lot about Avatar: The Last Airbender. It is my favorite show of all time, and it has kind of made my career here on YouTube. This show has garnered a reputation as one of the best animated shows ever made, perhaps even one of the best shows ever made, period. And it makes a lot of sense because there's just so much to love about the series. You know, there's so much lore, such deep characters, such a rich world, and a story for the ages. But you all knew that already. You guys love Avatar, I love Avatar. I always have, and I always will. But I'll be honest with you, ain't nobody loved this shit the way that I love it. You might think that you do because of all the pretentious video essays out there, but let me tell you, this pretentious video essay is the real fucking deal. Today is July 19th, 2023, which marks the 15-year anniversary of the finale of Avatar airing on television. So I think that it is only fitting this will also mark the last Avatar Month video that I will ever do. I'm MattCMG, and this is the Avatar video. I should have painted an arrow on my forehead. No, it's my Widow's Peak's the arrow. My fucking balding Widow's Peak. That's my arrow. That's my fucking... Before we actually get into the show itself, though, I first want to talk about how the show came to be, so let's go all the way back to the beginning. Call me the content cop, because what we do here is go back. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a 2005 Nickelodeon show created by Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko. The two met while attending the Rhode Island School of Design, where they both studied animation, and later would go on to direct and storyboard for shows like King of the Hill and Family Guy. Holy crap, Lois, it's the Avatar creators. Hey, Peter. The two became friends during this time, and thus the ultimate bromance, Bryke, was born. In 2002, Konietzko was storyboarding for Invader Zim, where Nick's then vice president, Eric Coleman, gave him the opportunity to pitch his own show. Konietzko got DiMartino involved with the project as well, and after throwing some ideas around, they eventually developed what we now know as Avatar: The Last Airbender. Bryke originally toyed around with a lot of ideas. At first, the series was intended to be futuristic in nature, set thousands of years in the future, which is a complete departure from the old East Asian vibe that it would eventually become, though that would partially be due to pressure from the network. Nickelodeon basically gave them two prompts: myths and legends, and kids POV, and their ideas were tweaked to fit that mold. It's honestly kind of wild to me how nonchalant Mike and Brian are about the development of Avatar, because every time they tell the story of its creation, it's always something along the lines of, oh yeah, we had this idea, then changed it around a little bit, and then it was that. Like, I can't tell if that's genius or laziness, but either way, it's based as fuck. This might be the most pretentious thing I have ever said on this channel, but I genuinely think that Bryke's process of throwing shit at a wall and seeing what sticks in this pre-production phase was a surefire way that they'd come up with one of the most unique and interesting ideas for a story ever told. These guys literally took some rough sketches with all kinds of ideas from robots in the future to ancient legends in the past, and through a process of seeing what worked with their character designs and the goal of the project and what didn't work, they developed something truly special. After this idea phase was mostly solidified, production began on the pilot. Avatar's pilot is a pretty interesting microcosm of what the show would eventually become. It features a lot of ideas crammed together at once and somehow manages to fit a ton of lore into just a 20-minute episode. A lot of ideas from the pilot would later be reused in episodes of the final show, but that's neither here nor there because we aren't here to talk about the pilot. We're here to talk about the actual fucking show. Crazy concept. Wow, it's almost like I have a video dedicated to the pilot or something. Oh, whoa, fucking crazy, dude. The pilot was finished in 2002, and upon positive reception, was later picked up for a full series, officially premiering on February 21st, 2005. It was the year 2005. My penis was fucking hard. The look and feel of Avatar is undeniably unique. While other Nicktoons of the time and even today focused on these wacky character designs and zany concepts, Avatar opted for a more realistic approach. All of the characters have realistic human proportions, everything from the colors of their skin to the clothes that they wear makes sense within the world that's being created, and even their voices just feel real. The animation of Avatar was highly inspired by Gainax's Fooly Cooly, an anime known for its expressive posing and generally fine sakuga.
Hi guys, I watch anime, I know what sakuga means. I'm gay also.
This can be seen in the pilot and most notably throughout Book 1, with its more comedic approach giving the animators a lot more leeway with their creative choices. Plus, with the series' emphasis on having a child's point of view, having Fooly Cooly as an influence is a no-brainer, since that is a series all about what it's like to be a kid. A lot of the movement of the series was inspired by Fooly Cooly, but in terms of vibe and world building, the team also took heavy inspiration from Studio Ghibli and the work of Hayao Miyazaki. These guys were weebs before weebs were a thing, and in doing so, they basically pioneered the whole Western cartoon inspired by anime trope that is commonplace today. You know, there's often talk within the fandom about if Avatar is an anime or not. The simple answer is no, it's just not. It's an American-made show with Korean animators. It's not Japanese at all. It just so happens to be heavily inspired by anime, which is not a bad thing at all. While I think the insistence on the show being better than everything else because of its art style is dumb and probably comes from people who only watch anime and nothing else, it's definitely an important piece of crafting the vibe of Avatar because it just wouldn't feel right with any other art style. That being said, the other half of the series' anime influence comes in its more cinematic approach, something that isn't really a thing in Western animation, at least not to this degree. You know, a lot of Western cartoons often have characters on a static background with this almost like sitcom-esque framing where they're always viewing the characters from a side view, you know, like Family Guy, other adult animated shows in that vein, right? It actually makes a lot of sense in hindsight why they'd want to avoid this type of style, since these two literally got their start on shows like Family Guy, meaning they probably wanted to flex their creative dicks a little bit, you know? As a result, Avatar opts for a much more cinematic feel by utilizing different camera angles, really thinking through their shot composition, and even taking into account what kind of camera lens they would be using if they were filming this in real life with a real camera. The camera angle will change to give more weight to a scene. Iconic shots like this one of Iroh and Zuko in the jail cell were framed with this concept in mind, and they utilize different filters and lens effects to portray things feeling otherworldly or strange. There are a ton of shots in the show that you don't really expect out of Western animation, and it really adds to the realism they were going for with this world. By having this sense of depth and scale to all of these different locales and all of these fight scenes, you feel much more immersed in the world. You know, this shit unironically does this better than some live-action movies I've seen, like no cap, not even an ounce of cap. Shot composition isn't really something you usually think about in animation, when it's arguably the best medium to be doing it in, and I love how Bryke and the rest of the team really embraced the medium. They managed to achieve a cinematic feel in animation on a TV budget, and that truly speaks to the versatility of animation as a whole. I would potentially argue that this is the show that proved that Western animation could be cinematic, and I am probably very wrong in saying that, but regardless, it's just a visually unique show in just its feel alone. The art itself is, like we discussed, heavily inspired by anime, and this carries through in a lot of different ways. Characters have realistic body proportions, but huge-ass eyes. It's understandable how so many people think this show is an anime with how well it replicates that type of style. Even then, there's still a lot of American flair that a lot of anime just don't have, or at least didn't have at the time. You know, it doesn't quite have the grain you'd get from old cell animations, but it also doesn't feel plasticky and sanitized like some modern anime does. And dude, the backgrounds go so fucking hard, dude. The way everything is so detailed and lively, you really get a sense of scale most of the time, you know? And plus there's some absolutely beautiful landscape shots. It is actually depressing to me how many amazing art pieces get used as an establishing shot for like 7 frames and are just never fucking used again. Somebody drew that. And that is fucking insane to me. There is the age-old saying, every frame a painting, and I can't think of a better example of this than Avatar, both because the art is so good and because of the shot composition. But now let's take this shit and put it into motion. This series was jointly animated by 3 Korean animation studios, DR Movie, JM Animation, and Moe Animation, none of which are around anymore to my knowledge, though I'm sure much of the staff is working elsewhere in other studios. In an effort to help cross the language barrier, Bryke would film themselves acting out scenes and send them to the animators as reference footage, which wasn't really something that any animated productions were known to do. This gave each motion a sense of realism to it because it was literally being based on actual movements. This was also used to help the storyboard artists at Nick to observe these scenes from different angles, and I mean that literally. Through this process, the board artists could get an idea of the different angles they can look at things from, which literally changed the perspective of the whole show. Like, you don't see shots like this in other shows. It just doesn't fucking happen. I think this is going to be putting it pretty lightly, but massive props to the art and animation teams for Avatar. The directors, storyboard artists, character designers, basically anybody who had a hand in the visuals of this show. Giancarlo Volpe, Joaquim Dos Santos, Angela Song-Mueller, Lauren McMullen, Dave Filoni. I could easily sit here and just read off the fucking IMDb page, but I highly implore you to find interviews with these people to get a taste of their creative processes, since each of them brings a unique style to the table, yet they all still somehow mesh together to create a cohesive and magical final product. The show looks good is my point. Show good. Crazy. End of the video. While the visuals are without a doubt impressive, I don't think it can be understated how important the music of Avatar is to the vibe of the show. The music of Avatar was composed by the Track Team, a musical duo of Jeremy Zuckerman and Benjamin Wynn, the latter of whom was Konietzko's roommate at the time the series was in development. And I don't think the word iconic even begins to describe how great it is. Most of the series' music was recorded with real instruments, which were then used to produce MIDI files that could be further edited, so it's a nice mix between modern-day music production and authentic instrumentation. The only exception to this is the finale, in which a live orchestra was used, and that shit goes so fucking hard. I'm hard right now, actually. It's making me erect. I'm fucking full blown. All the blood is in my penis right now. In an effort to be accurate to the cultures represented within the show and to give the show a more unique sound, they utilized some rather obscure instruments. The sound of the Sungi horn is actually a duduk, and I have no idea what the fuck that is, but I've never heard anything like it. The leitmotifs used throughout the series are a subtle yet super effective way to enhance the story. The 4 notes that compose the Fire Nation theme are used pretty much every time they show the Fire Nation emblem, so it instills this villainous feel. When you hear those 4 notes, you know some bad shit is going down, and you don't need the dialogue to tell you that. Aang's theme is used anytime he goes into the Avatar state, of course, but they also interpolate its main melody into other important Avatar moments to give you the impression that some real crazy spiritual shit is going down. A large number of episodes, mostly in Book 1, end with the track Peace, which has become one of the most iconic songs in all of animation. Like, dude, this song literally makes up like 95% of Avatar lo-fi mixes. Like, Jesus fuck, remix another song, but also this goes hard, so please keep doing it. And how could I possibly forget this one? Secret Tunnel! Secret Tunnel! I used to actually really hate Secret Tunnel when I was a kid, but it's grown on me a lot in recent years since it's become like a rallying cry for Avatar fans. Like, I honestly just fuck with it now. But on the topic of sound, let's talk about voice acting. I think I used this exact transition in the One Piece video, so now I want to see how many times I can use it before people start calling me a fucking hack. The answer is now. I'm a hack now. Hey guys, fucking talentless hack here. Anyways, Avatar has some of the best voice acting that I have ever heard in a cartoon, period. And I am not exaggerating. First up, the cast is stacked with some of the most talented and unique voice actors in the business. Of course, Dante Bosco as Zuko is probably the most iconic. Literally nobody else can play that character and do that character justice. So it makes sense that even when everybody else is getting recast for upcoming projects, they keep using Dante because they know he's the only one who can do it.
That's why he's the GOAT!
Mae Whitman was only a teenager when doing Avatar, and she was already an experienced voice actress by that point, and she gives Katara so much depth. Jack DeSena has one of the most unique voices in the business. You can identify him in literally anything, so the fact that Sokka is one of his most iconic characters gives Sokka one of the most unique voices out there. The fact that this man is not in a lot of other stuff is fucking wild to me, dude. Plus, you have D. Bradley Baker doing all of the animal noises with, like, little to no alterations. This man is a fucking anomaly in the best way possible. I love him. There have been plenty of guest voices as well, with Jason Isaac as Zhao, Mark Hamill as Firelord Ozai, Ron Perlman as Firelord Sozin, James Garrett as Avatar Roku, Jennifer Hale as Avatar Kyoshi and June, and they even got fucking Mick Foley to play the boulder. This shit is fucking insane, bro. Ooh, Hulkamania, brother! That's a different wrestler. Poop, brother, HH, what do you do? The crazy thing about some of these actors is that they are either people who don't do much voice work to begin with, or they have some of the most iconic voices in voice acting, so you really get the best of both worlds. But there are 2 characters here where their voices are literally once-in-a-lifetime performances because they are ones that we will never hear again. As we all know, the original voice of Uncle Iroh, Mako Iwamatsu, sadly passed away about halfway through Avatar's production, forcing the crew to recast the character. While Greg Baldwin does a great job, he's just ever so slightly different from Mako that you can kinda tell sometimes, so the fact that we will never hear Iroh with his original voice again is somewhat depressing. But what I think is more underrated is the voice of Aang. Zach Tyler Eisen was a young child when he played Aang, around the same age as the character actually, but since the show ended in 2008, he has taken a major shift in his career, now working behind the camera as a cinematographer. His voice was super unique for a child, giving Aang a super distinct voice, but even if he did want to come back to it, he has obviously grown out of the role, and it would be impossible for them to recast a child version of the character in any new material. Believe me, they've tried, and it don't sound too fucking good. Due to various circumstances, Child Aang and the original voice of Iroh are two voices that we will never hear again, which partially makes Avatar a once-in-a-lifetime show. I mean, they could probably use some crazy AI voice shit to bring them back if they really wanted to, but that shit is disrespectful and straight up fucking scary, bro. Do not deepfake Iroh talking about boy pussy, it will only end badly.
Prince Zuko, that boy clitty.
Give me that pussy. That's getting cut.
Look within yourself and ask why you have zero drip and zero bitches.
The voices themselves are one thing though, but let's focus on the acting half of things. These motherfuckers can act, yo. The performances in Avatar are honestly a cut above the rest of a lot of other animation. You know, a lot of dubbed anime, for example, has a very particular style to it that it just doesn't feel natural, and Western animation at the time had never really had a show of this style aimed at this specific demographic before. The biggest draw to these performances is that they're deep, powerful, and emotional, but they also feel natural. Not a single line feels forced or phoned in. Okay, except this one line in episode 1 where Aang is clearly being played by somebody else.
Sure am.
I feel like I'm the only person who notices this, and I literally cannot fucking unhear it. I think I'm going insane. I think I'm a schizophrenic. The quality of these performances obviously comes from the talent of the voice cast, like we just discussed, but also their direction. For fans of voice acting, by which I mean guys who go on IMDb and say, oh, they played that character and that character, the name Andrea Romano might ring a bell. Romano is a celebrity in the voice acting world, notorious for being one of the best ADR directors in the business. I am not going to pretend like I know what any of that means, but in every interview I've seen or heard with the cast of Avatar, they always sing this woman's high praises, and I think that says a lot. So, that has been the production side of Avatar, and while knowing any or all of this is mostly inconsequential to the grittier details we're about to get into, I still think it's really interesting. You know, we all know that the show is great for one reason or another, but I feel like you appreciate it a lot more when you understand how it all came to be. Mike and Brian seem to get all the credit all of the time by the larger fandom, and while yeah, they're the creators and showrunners, so of course they get a massive say in literally everything, but I think we also need to be paying our respects to everybody else who had a big hand in making the show what it is. You know, we wouldn't have some of the stuff that we've grown to love about the show without the larger staff being heavily involved with production, and I don't think that they get enough credit for that. In fairness, they do still get a lot of credit within the fandom, but not enough if you ask me. My larger point in going through all of this production stuff though is to point out how Avatar is really an amalgam of things that, when used together in harmony, help make it so special. The art and animation would be nothing without the shot composition, those shots would mean nothing without the great music and sound design, these characters would be nothing without the voice performances or the writing. You get the picture. Every aspect of production is important. You might even say that everything is connected. But now let's get into the real shit, the real meat and potatoes, the real nitty gritty. I'm hitting the gritty right now. I can't do the gritty in this fucking confined space. Let's get into the story and writing of Avatar. Of course, this is probably the main reason why the show is so well known and fondly remembered. It's just written so borderline perfectly that of course people are going to resonate with it. But what I don't see a lot of discussion about is why it's so well written. So let's get into that. Not to get too off topic or back on my bullshit again, but people often give The Legend of Korra shit for having seasonal arcs and stuff, but this is also the case for Avatar, though they do it a lot more subtly, which is probably why people don't have a problem with it. In an overarching sense, Avatar does follow your typical 3-act structure that you probably learned about in your fucking high school English class, and this can best be seen by looking at each book as its own entity. You know, a lot of YouTube critics these days, or even your old fucking decrepit English teacher, often go on about the 3-act structure. It's one of the oldest and most effective frameworks in all of storytelling, and while people's insistence on this being the only way to write a story puts way too much stock into it, it does make for a pretty functional format most of the time. Many movies feature this exact framework, with the beginning introducing the character's world story and stakes, the middle bringing those stakes to their natural climax and their characters to a turning point, with the end bringing everything together and resolving the conflict. When you say it like that, it's pretty fucking boring, hence why YouTube critics need to calm the fuck down. Anyways, plenty of movies fall under this framework, but TV series are a different story. While on an episode-to-episode basis this is typically the case, this framework is hard to pull off in a long-term format like a serialized TV show. If there is any show that I think implements this structure correctly, it's Avatar. And they do so by each season being one act of the much larger story. Book 1's your beginning, Book 2 is your middle, Book 3 is your end. It's fucking simple. Now I don't say this to talk down to you like a fucking brain-damaged infant, because in actuality I have never actually seen a TV show approach this structure in this way before. By each season being its own act, so to speak, it immediately resolves any pacing issue that could possibly arise, since now there can be episodes that are fully dedicated committed to fulfilling the structure and adding to the overall narrative, but the writers are also able to go on side tangents and tell self-contained stories that might not have anything to do with the grander story. The 3-act structure works perfectly in the context of the overarching narrative, and it still leaves room for exploration of things that don't necessarily bring it toward its conclusion. I don't necessarily like this structure or really give a fuck about writing structure in a broader context, but when it works, and it certainly works for Avatar. But overall, I think one of the defining reasons for why the narrative works as well as it does is that Bright planned the ending very early on in the process. They had an end goal in mind straight from the jump, and by setting up that end goal very early on, they create a sense of satisfaction for the viewer when that goal is finally achieved. By writing things this way, they were able to make these episodes pretty dense, since most things can now be written with the intent of bringing us closer to that end goal. If you know where you start and you know where you end, everything in the middle can be meticulously crafted to lead to that point, and that is exactly what they did. While I don't think they were thinking about this every single step of the way, knowing where the story will end gives everything a sense of progression that just makes it satisfying to watch. But now I want to discuss each season on an individual level, because each run of episodes has its own specific vibe, whether that be in the writing, the art, or whatever else, that make them distinct from each other in ways that I feel is hard to talk about in an overarching sense. Each season is referred to as a book, with episodes as chapters, so I think we should treat them distinctly like you would for a book. Not that I read books, because I'm fucking illiterate. I will get to the Kyoshi novels eventually, I promise you, but anyways, I don't know how to transition this. Here's book 1. Of course, Book 1, Water, is the introduction to our world and characters.
Oh wow, dude, season 1 introduces everything? Wow, that's fucking crazy, bro.
Condescension aside, I think it's actually really impressive. There's a fucking bug in my fucking face. Fuck you. Condescension aside, I think it's actually really impressive how masterfully the first few episodes set up the entire show so succinctly. The 2-part series premiere, The Boy in the Iceberg and The Avatar Returns, set up the character arcs of Aang, Katara, and to a lesser extent Zuko. Aang and Katara are pretty obvious. They kind of spell out what their stories will entail, but with Zuko you get hints of him having deeper motives that are later explored a few episodes later. The other 2 main characters, Sokka and Iroh, were also introduced quite well here, but in ways that are very different from how they would later be portrayed. Sokka is mostly used for comedic relief and as the straight man in these episodes, so he doesn't really get much in them as far as character goes. He's definitely the straight man throughout most of the season, and while his goofiness was balanced a lot better as they went on, there's a bit more contrast in the first episode. Iroh is also introduced here as a wise yet goofy old man, and while this is just a small facet of his character, since we later learn that he's hiding a lot more depth underneath that fat voluptuous gut, he feels rather generic in the beginning. Like, he just kind of feels like your average quirky mentor character that other shows had at the time. Like, it's kind of clear that they didn't quite know what to do with either of these characters yet, but even so, every one of these characters feels real, relatable, nuanced, and interesting right off the bat, and I ain't fucking complaining one goddamn bit. I have a penis. The opening narration, as iconic as it is kind of super dry, at least in a narrative sense. Like, it's really effective at explaining what the show is about and giving the viewer a quick rundown of the world we're about to enter, but it does so in the most direct way possible. Obviously, a typical cartoon theme song doesn't really work for a show of this style, so it makes sense why they'd go for a narration, you know what I mean? You know, it's a series based around East Asian cultures, so it's going for the vibe of somebody literally telling you a story. You know, it really makes it feel like it's an old legend. In just the first minute and a half, you get a really good idea of what the world of Avatar is like, including its history, politics, and magic system. Here's a quick lightning round of everything this intro tells us, without actually reading the intro, because I'm a fucking hack. The world is separated into 4 nations that each represent and bend a particular element. These 4 nations are currently entangled in a century-long war with the Fire Nation as the aggressors, which sets them up as the antagonists of the series. This war has had dire consequences in the entire world by forcing men away from their homes and their children to fend for themselves. The Avatar is the only one who can bend all 4 elements, which implies a rule that people usually are only able to bend 1 element. The Avatar has been gone for so long that many people believe is a myth, but it's the only provable case in case of save the wow. Yeah, I'm speaking fucking Simlish. What is happening? This bit fell apart the second I attempted to perform it. I want to I tried my best to not just reword the actual narration, but when you take a step back and look at it in a vacuum, it really does tell you a lot about the world. The story for Book 1 is actually pretty loose for the most part. While the overarching plot revolves around the gang making their way across the world to the North Pole, the season actually takes a much more episodic approach to things, with a group of standalone adventures that, while clearly connected, are still able to be enjoyed in a vacuum. No, you don't really need to understand the grander context of the series for episodes like King of Omashu or the Waterbending Scroll to make sense, because they work perfectly fine without that. It's just that having said context makes them way more enjoyable for reasons that I think are pretty fucking obvious. The plot is very loose and it isn't addressed in every single episode, but if you happen to be watching the show out of order for whatever reason, there are always things that hint at where we are in the larger narrative without just coming out and fucking saying it. Book 1 in general is way more enjoyable with hindsight, since you pick up on a lot of stuff that just goes over your head the first time around, whether that be plot details, foreshadowing, character moments, pretty much anything, really. This is a show that rewards repeat viewings in this way, to the point where even I, as somebody who has seen the show in its entirety multiple times since I was like 8 years old, can still find new things that I've never noticed before, and it's insane that the show is able to do that. Due to being episodic, there are also a lot of episodes that some would consider to be filler, while in actuality I think The Great Divide is the only true filler episode in the entire series, since it contributes basically nothing to the story or the characters. Some fans also consider episodes like The Fortune Teller or The Northern Air Temple to not be all that important in the grand scheme of things. And in many ways, I can understand that, even though you're fucking wrong. These are some of my personal least favorite episodes in the whole series, but a very reasonable argument can be made for every episode being important in some way, even if it doesn't seem so at first, whether it be by world building or some other important detail. The Warriors of Kyoshi introduces us to Suki and the Kyoshi Warriors, gives us an informal introduction to Avatar Kyoshi, and gives us great character development for Sokka and Aang. Imprisoned is probably my personal least favorite episode because of how slow it is, but it's one of the best Katara-focused episodes of Book 1, all with great world building. The Fortune Teller could probably be skipped if you're a psychopath who skips episodes, but without it, you miss out on a lot of Katang build-up and great character moments for Aang and Sokka. That and this Meng girl straight up calls Katara a whore. It's fucking wild.
Floozy.
She says, "You're a fucking slut. You're a slut. You're a whore. You're a harlot." Hell, bro, even The Great Divide, the most by-the-numbers, undisputed worst episode of the series, the only true filler episode, is still pretty enjoyable and has some decent character moments despite the ending being a bit out of character for Aang. This is why I maintain that aside from that episode, there is no filler in Avatar, as every single episode is important in some way, and though you could get away with skipping some of the less important ones, you still miss out on a ton of great stuff, whether it be lore, character moments, or something in between. If you watch this show and skip episodes, I hope you got a strong throat because you suck absolute dick.
You eating a glizzy, that's a violation number 1.
That being said, when Book 1 does focus on its overarching story, it goes pretty fucking hard. Well, the whole show goes pretty hard, but you already knew that. I already discussed the premiere episodes a bit, and they obviously set up the next 60 episodes of the series, but it wouldn't have been able to do so without its emotional moments. And I think that's where the series as a whole kind of shines. It has emotional moments that gets the audience invested, with Book 1 in particular needing to be way better at it since they really need to sell you on this world, its characters, and the story. Aang being banished from the village and Katara threatening to leave just goes so raw. Aang entering the Avatar state for the first time is still epic to this day, and the final scene with this exchange.
Why didn't you tell us you were the Avatar? Because I never wanted to be.
Just hits fucking different sometimes, bro. And okay, side tangent, because I'm fucking insane. Am I crazy, or has this scene been like George Lucas or something? Because I swear to fucking Christ that when I was a kid, this line was delivered much differently. Like, he had like some uptalk to it, like a different intonation. But now it sounds different to me, and I have no fucking clue why. I think I might be clinically insane. Now, I don't want to go episode by episode here and just do overanalyzing Avatar's job for him, but there are some standout episodes that I really love in this season. The premiere is followed by the Southern Air Temple, in which two plots simultaneously unfold. On one side, we have the gang visiting the titular Southern Air Temple, where Aang used to live, and quickly discover that no airbenders have survived the genocide. Aang spends most of his time trying to recapture his childhood, but he seems to kind of know what happened and just can't seem to admit it to himself. It's once he can no longer deny the truth by seeing Monkey Yonso's skeleton that he lashes out in a fit of blind rage. On the other side of things, we have Zuko dealing with the pompous Commander Zhao, who threatens to take over his hunt for the Avatar. This is the first time that Zuko isn't treated as a villain. Granted, it's only the third episode, but they actually get the audience to root for him here. By not treating Zuko as a villain, this is Bright planting the seeds of Zuko becoming the show's second protagonist alongside Aang, cemented by the fact that these two learn similar lessons by the end of the episode, that family are the people who will be there for you no matter your circumstances. It's the show's first time delving into the whole dual narrative deuteragonist thing, and it's very important for that. The King of Omashu, while mostly a self-contained romp, does give us some hints of stakes near the end with Bumi's name drop of Ozai, and those stakes are further expanded upon a few episodes later in the Winter Solstice 2-parter. We learn about Firelord Ozai, Sozin's comment, and get a vague idea of what he intends to do with it, along with some spirit world shenanigans and some background on Avatar Roku. Imprisoned shows us how the war has impacted the average person caught in the crossfire, and Jet shows us that same thing from the complete opposite angle. I've talked at length in previous videos about the Storm and the Blue Spirit, and I will continue to preach their fucking gospel in this video, but they not only give us background on our two protagonists, but they also plant the seeds for these two eventually teaming up. The Deserter is our first look at Fire Nation culture by showing us both the propaganda and those who see through it. And of course, the Siege of the North is a great season finale that builds on on everything the series has introduced thus far. If you have not gotten the point by now, there's a lot going on in Book 1 despite its episodic structure. There are a ton of new concepts and ideas introduced in each episode that really sets the groundwork for what's to come, and while I think the execution could have been a bit better, there's a bit of inconsistency here and there, which I'll totally be getting into. I appreciate that every episode is important in some way, even if it's not always by forwarding the plot or the characters. It's definitely a world-building heavy season, so it's got the vibes, you know what I mean? I could genuinely spend just hours going through every individual episode and all of the great shit in all of them, and I probably will touch on all of those things at some point in this video, just hopefully not in such a dry way. This is Book 1 water, so I hope it's not dry. I hope you're all real fucking moist right now. I hope you got fucking moist genitals right now. Anyways, I only briefly mentioned the season finale, Siege of the North, but now I want to go a little more in depth with it here because of how hard it goes. From just the start of the episode, we know that shit is about to go down, as black snow begins descending upon the Northern Water Tribe, signaling that the Fire Nation is approaching. Bro, these dudes are so evil that nature is literally warning people about them. It's fucking nutty. I know it's the soot, just let me fucking have this. Aang pulls up, does some Looney Tune shit, and starts taking out ships, but with the sheer amount of them, it all proves to be too much. Looking to the spirits for advice, Aang tries to head into the spirit world. In the meantime, everybody else is preparing for battle, during which Yue finds the perfect time to end her relationship with Sokka. Like, bitch, you're really gonna do this on the way into the war meeting? You couldn't have found a better time? What the fuck? Fuck you. I see why people don't like you. Fuck you. Anyways, they all do their thing, they prepare for battle, Aang talks to a fucking centipede man, it's great. Bro, it should actually be a literal fucking crime that this is Ko's only appearance, because he's one of the coolest fucking characters in all of Avatar, bro. I fucking love him. I love this big fucking insectoid. Anyways, fast forward a bit, Zhao captures one of the koi fish that are the physical forms of the moon and ocean spirits. This shit turns the fucking moon red. And then Zhao gets mad at Iroh for being completely reasonable, and then boom, kills the moon spirit, which deletes the moon from the fucking sky. Then it's just off the rails from there, bro. All the waterbenders lose their bending. Iroh goes fucking sicko mode, showing that he is secretly one of the good guys. Zuko fights Zhao in a rematch we've been waiting to see since their first fight in episode 3. Aang's prediction about a giant spirit monster coming to fight the Fire Nation ends up coming true as he temporarily teams up with the ocean spirit to go super kaiju avatar state mode and just starts clapping fucking cheeks. Yue turns into the moon. Zhao gets revenge killed by the literal ocean. It's been an all-around crazy fucking day. While I do joke a bit about some of these things, they are genuinely some of the greatest moments in all of Avatar, and I think they're really the first episodes in the series to even attempt something of this caliber. You know, a lot of stuff from Book 1 comes full circle in this episode, and it's wild to me that they were able to fit all of this into just 44 minutes. But more than that, the season 1 finale is actually one of the most important episodes in all of Avatar because it quite literally changes the status quo completely. In Book 1, there's an obvious status quo. The gang gets into some altercation with the Fire Nation or has some other type of conflict, they solve the problem and save the village, and they all fly away on Appa. Fucking peace plays in the background. I'm gonna fucking cry. The Northern Water Tribe arc, if you will, is different because now we're in one location. The gang can't leave because of Aang's training, and the Northern Water Tribe is one of the only places not touched by the Fire Nation thus far. They can't just fly away this time, they have to stick around to defend it. The other reason they can't fly away is because of Zhao. The gang knows that if they leave the area, Zuko or Zhao will usually just follow in pursuit because capturing the Avatar is their goal. This isn't the case during the siege because Zhao's goal is not to capture the Avatar, but to take out the Water Tribe entirely by destroying the moon. If the gang left hoping that he would follow, they'd just be letting him enact his plan. Aang also saves Zuko's life at one point, which is very important for both of their characters, and yet I feel isn't talked about as much. Granted, this is also not the first time this has happened, but it's good that he does it again to further emphasize this. This episode also makes it clear that, yeah, characters can fucking die in the show. Obviously, we already know this because we've heard other characters talk about lost family members and stuff like that, and obviously there was a whole genocide of an entire race, but there's never been like an on-screen death of a named character, let alone one that we knew and that our characters care for. I guess except for Monkey Atzo maybe, but Zhao literally dies on screen, and Yue's death sets a precedent that nobody, not even the heroes, are necessarily safe. Now, while I don't think you should be watching shows to see who lives and who dies, it's important that there are still stakes, you know what I mean? The season ends on a rather hopeful note, with the gang looking into the sunrise, ready to start the next leg of their journey. While we also get our first introduction to Azula, hinting that new problems are yet to come. It's just such a great season finale, and it really elevates the series to the next level. Bukwon, I put Bukwon in my pussy. That all being said, there are a lot of weird, minor inconsistencies throughout this first season that, while they affect absolutely nothing, are super noticeable, at least to a freak like me who's seen the show 500 fucking times. I could easily talk about some of the clear lore contradictions, such as the Earth Avatar before Roku being shown to be a man in the statue room, only for them to reveal Kyoshi in the very next episode, or that Katara just kind of randomly knows how to use ice for some reason. But aside from stuff like that, it's kind of clear that the lore was not fully figured out yet. Case in point, the spirit world. This shit makes absolutely no goddamn sense in Book 1. It's fixed by Book 2, and some would even argue by the end of Book 1, but its soft introduction in the 7th episode is so all over the place. In Part 1 of the Winter Solstice 2-parter, Heibai is abducting people into the spirit world, so Aang has to save them. He does so by chasing Heibai, but somehow ends up astral projecting his spirit out of his body and claims that he's in the spirit world.
I'm in the spirit world.
Like, bro, what? No, what the fuck? You're clearly in the physical world. You're just outside of your body. How is it in the spirit world? In Part 2, we go on this whole journey for Aang to meet Roku, but then Roku tells him, hey, you could have done this the whole time, actually. So, like, why even bother coming to this temple in the first place? Like, it just feels kind of like it defeats the purpose. Then we fast forward to the season finale, where Aang finally does enter the spirit world, but with rules that were clearly not yet established earlier in the season, yet they act like it has always worked that way. It still works completely fine because it doesn't really contradict his first spiritual encounter, but it does kind of change everything we think we know about how this works, you know what I mean? While I will admit, this is all just me nitpicking, and it doesn't really impede my love for the show in any way, I still think that these inconsistencies are worth noting, since they don't seem to always be addressed within the larger fandom. The biggest criticism that I could offer to Book 1, in case you couldn't have guessed by now, is that it's very inconsistent, specifically in its tone. Bright opts for a lot more comedy in Book 1, like we established, and while perfectly fine, it often conflicts with the show's more serious nature at times. While Books 2 and 3 are able to balance these two things way better, you can tell they were still finding their footing here. There are a lot of serious scenes that should be met with a ton of emotional weight and that just really aren't that funny, but then are immediately cut off by a joke of some kind that, while not necessarily killing the momentum of the scene dead, definitely impedes it. Even with that minor criticism though, they are still able to switch between tones masterfully. Like, this show at its worst is still leagues better than other shows at their best when it comes to this kind of thing. And in general, but you already kind of knew that. Overall, Book 1 is pretty good, but like I said, there's a lot of stuff that could have been tweaked just a bit to make it a lot better. Again, it's definitely the weakest season of the show for this reason, but even so, it's still better than most animated shows out there, so that's not really a diss on it or anything. You know, it says a lot when your worst season is better than another show's best season. You know what I mean? Even so, I don't think that Book 1 gets enough credit within the fandom. You know, most of the time, Avatar fans are off talking about Books 2 and 3 for various reasons, while Book 1 seems to be left in the dust a lot of the time, with only a few key moments being frequently mentioned, and a lot more moments being mentioned for the purpose of contrasting the later parts of the series or pointing out lore inconsistencies. And I think that's kind of a shame, because Book 1 is just as complex as the other two, just in a different way. Now, I'm not saying that nobody cares about Book 1 at all, because that's obviously not true, but it definitely doesn't get talked about as much as the other two and seems to only ever be brought up in an overarching context. While it definitely took a bit to find its footing, Book 1 of Avatar ends on a note that is much more similar to the rest of the series and lays the groundwork for a lot of what's to come. And speaking of come, that's what I'm gonna do when we talk about Book 2. I don't know if I'm gonna do like a cool transition or I'm just gonna say Book 2, but we're just gonna say Book 2. Put a transition in there, maybe. I don't know. I don't think that it's a very unpopular opinion to say that Book 2 is the best season of Avatar. Book 1 is great, but is way too all over the place, and I'll get into my biggest criticisms of Book 3 when we get to it, but I would honestly argue that Book 2 is kinda literally perfect. The way this season just flows from one beat to the next while having multiple arcs that are all intertwined, culminating in the best episode of the series, all while perfectly balancing comedy, character development, and the introduction of a new main cast member, is just utterly insane in the best way possible. Personally, I like to split Book 2 into 3 main arcs: the Omashu arc, the Toph arc, and the Conspiracy arc. The reason that I do this is because there are 4 major turning points in this season that push the story forward, and I think you'll see what I mean. The first arc of the season focuses on the gang making their way back to Omashu so that Aang can learn earthbending from King Bumi. This initial plotline gave the writers some great opportunities to have a last real go at the more self-contained episodes of Book 1, but this time with a bit more to them than just simply being filler episodes. Episodes like The Cave of Two Lovers and Avatar Avatar Day aren't necessary to the overall plot of the show. You know, you don't really need the Katang kiss or to know about the formation of Kyoshi Island or anything like that, but the way these episodes are handled makes you forget how ultimately inconsequential they are, and I don't mean this in a bad way at all. The world building in these two episodes specifically is astounding. You know, learning about Avatar Kyoshi and the legend behind the origins of earthbending help us feel more connected to those two concepts than ever before. The introduction of badger moles also serves as the perfect foreshadowing for Toph. In fact, Toph is foreshadowed a ton in the episodes leading up to her introduction, with the badger moles being blind just like her, King Boomy's advice to Aang about finding someone who waits and listens, the obvious hallucination in the swamp, and if you really wanted to stretch things, you could even argue that General Fong and his eagerness to rush into the Avatar state without thinking of the consequences is a prime example of how an earthbender should not be. Toph may be introduced 6 episodes in, but she makes her presence known even before that. That's how much of a bad bitch she is. But then we get to the Toph arc, as I like to call it, with the episode The Blind Bandit, a fan favorite episode that is without a doubt one of the best animated in the whole series. Like, I would unironically argue this episode has better animation than the fucking finale. Like, I will die on this hill, like, suck me soft. Like, I don't even... Anyways, the introduction of Toph as a permanent new cast member is wild to me, because it completely changes the gang's dynamic, yet the writers handle it in a way where it feels like she's been there the whole time. I think part of my issue with Book 1 honestly stems from the fact that Toph isn't there. Not that her absence makes the series worse per se, but that without her the group just doesn't feel complete. You know what I mean? I won't get too ahead of myself because I'll be talking about the characters on their own later in the video, but bro, Toph just improves the gang tenfold. One thing that I love about Toph's introduction is that after she joins the gang, things aren't immediately peachy like they are in other shows. You know, in other shows where a new character is introduced, they're usually just kind of cool with each other by the next episode. Avatar handles things differently because instead of just being cool with each other right off the bat, there's a bit of an adjustment period where these characters need to get used to each other, which happens over the course of multiple episodes, and some might even say the entire season. In The Chase, the first episode proper with Toph as part of the group, we find that she has problems with each of the main crew. She's just as snarky as Sokka, which he doesn't like when he's the butt of the joke. While she's mostly cool with Aang, she doesn't really like Appa very much as she isn't too fond of flying, both of which are addressed in later episodes. Of course, Toph and Katara do not get along at all, which makes sense because women never get along. Woman moment. They be shopping. That being said, there's a lot of nuance to this dynamic because both of them are kind of to blame. You know, Toph doesn't quite know what it's like being part of a team like this, so she has to adjust herself a bit. And Katara has to just stop being an asshole. Again, while this does apply into Toph's character development, which I will get to later, the fact that just this one aspect of the episode can be talked about on its own with way more stuff to talk about further is kind of wild. While I do think I'm getting majorly ahead of myself here, I think it's important to establish how Toph changes the way the core group functions, since I feel that it's part of what makes the season such a step up from the first. Interactions between the group feel way more real than ever before, and we have Toph to thank for that. Now, I call this stretch of episodes from 6 to 12 the Toph arc, when only 3 of those episodes really focus directly on Toph in any major way. The library and the Serpent's Pass have some smaller moments for Toph that I'll get into shortly, but it's never really focused on enough. She doesn't really get much in the desert, and the gang isn't even in Zuko alone. I call this the Toph arc despite only 25% of it actually focusing on her, because each episode shows us a different stage in Toph joining the team. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? Probably not. We're gonna keep that in. I'm keeping that take. I don't care. You know, she's introduced in one episode, she has some growing pains in the next. We see her actually do the thing she joined the group for by training Aang, and while the journey to Ba Sing Se doesn't focus on her directly, we're finally at a point where she's part of the team, and these episodes would have gone down very differently without her. Case in point, she holds an entire library with her bare hands, allowing her friends to escape, but in doing so allowed Appa to be captured. The loss of Appa is a major turning point in the season because it literally drives everything that happens after. They make this whole journey to Ba Sing Se to find him. The desperation felt throughout these episodes is incredibly important because it's the lowest point for our characters. Telemarketer, why don't you telemarket my dick in your mouth, you fucking dick? But for whatever reasons, placed smack dab in the middle of this Toph arc is the episode Zuko Alone, which many fans consider to be the best of the series. In an homage to old westerns, and thereby an homage to old samurai movies, this episode has Zuko as a lone outlaw strolling into an Earth Kingdom village and saving it from the thug soldiers who take advantage of the townsfolk. Voicemail, why don't you get fucking AIDS? Why don't you suck off a mail? This episode explores Zuko's past and how it's affecting his actions in the present, and how it will eventually shape his decisions in the future, while also calling into question who he even is. While I'm going to talk about this episode in depth later when it's most relevant, this is one of the best episodes in the entire series, just from the artistry alone, and this episode alone just kind of elevates the season to another level. Much of Zuko's arc throughout this season specifically doesn't work without this episode, but I'll leave it at that for now since, believe me, we're gonna mention this with the characters. I know that's probably a very disappointing, like, we'll talk about it later type thing. I know it's a fucking annoying. Bear with me. Please also suck me. But it's good. We're gamers. Hey guys, gamer here. Anyways, after the events of the library, Team Avatar is left without Appa when they desperately need to get to Ba Sing Se to give the Earth King some urgent information about the war. After making it out of the desert, the gang decide to take a ferry to Ba Sing Se alongside all of the other refugees heading there as well. I think this is a great way to show how many people the war has affected and how bad it really is, since up until this point, we haven't really seen a whole lot of that. You know, obviously we've met refugees and we've seen how the Fire Nation abuses the Earth Kingdom citizens in the villages they colonize, but we've never seen what happens to the people that somehow make it out or the people who didn't have the Avatar there to save their home. The shitty living conditions, the crimes people are willing to commit, the general lack of care by the people in charge, and on Zuko's side of things, we even see that there's some unspoken hierarchy that leaves the refugees at the bottom. In just this brief scene, we get our first real taste of the scale to which the Fire Nation has fucked up the Earth Kingdom, and we get to see it firsthand through the eyes of the gang. It's written in such a way where it says a lot while saying very little. The desperation that arises from this causes the gang and their new companions to cross the Serpent's Pass, a route infamous for being incredibly dangerous for reasons that in hindsight make perfect sense. Also, Suki is back in this episode, and I think we're all unanimously into that. And you know what? Honestly, the fact that Suki is only in this season like twice is a fucking crime, because she is such an absolute badass and helps the cast dynamic flourish even more when she is present. That being said though, I do like how her weaving in and out of the story makes sense, and that even when she isn't directly with the gang, she is still a major player in the story. What doesn't make sense though, how the fuck did she get back across the Serpent's Pass by herself? Wasn't there a fucking vast ocean with a sea monster in it? What the fuck? Unless she somehow caught a ferry back, which was not implied, then she might be more of a badass than we thought. Fucking legend. This is why we stand Suki. But after this arduous journey, the gang finally makes it to Ba Sing Se, the great city that they've been teasing all the way back since Book 1. Every time they have mentioned this place, it has been made out to be this perfect, impenetrable utopia of a city that has been untouched by the war. But as the gang immediately finds out, that is not the case. The literal first time we lay eyes on this so-called impenetrable city is the city literally being penetrated by a giant drill. What an absolute fucking crazy twist that the one place we thought was safe is very much not safe at all. What's even crazier is that this is the second time they've done this exact twist. They did it earlier with Omashu, and I think it's interesting how the latter seems to foreshadow the former. If Aang thought that Omashu was untouchable, then we are in for a real shock to learn that Ba Sing Se isn't either. This is a wonderfully written reveal, and I would not have done it any other way. After dealing with the drill, which might I add has some mighty fine action with the Aang vs Azula fight being particularly great, the gang is welcomed into the city, which as we'll learn is a lot more broken on the inside than it is on the outside. Ba Sing Se suffers from a severe class divide, has had its walls anally penetrated, and though by the looks of the upper ring you'd think the war hasn't affected them, it's clear that the war is more of an open secret that people don't mention out of fear or even blissfully unaware of. It's clear that there is some fuckery afoot, leading the gang to uncover a grand conspiracy within the city. And this leads into my absolute favorite plotline in all of Avatar, the Ba Sing Se conspiracy arc, as I like to call it. In my opinion, this is Avatar at its most compelling, and I'll obviously explain shortly, but I think the brunt of it is the fact that it's centered around a conspiracy. So we get to see all of these different plot lines intersect and how one character's actions have an effect on another character's actions and they don't even know it. Like we learned in the swamp, everything is connected. Right off the bat, as soon as the gang enters the city, there is an immediate sense of unease that slowly gets worse over the course of their first day there. Judy, the gang's tour guide, is creepy yet persistent on not mentioning the war, not causing a disturbance, and stops the gang anytime they attempt to see the Earth King. It's very clear that she's trying to hide something, and her robotic demeanor implies that there's definitely something more sinister going on than she'd lead you to believe. It's written to be pretty obvious, like it's really on the nose, but it sets the tone perfectly. China moment. Later that same night, while sneaking into a party to get to the king, Katara and Toph run into Long Feng, the cultural advisor of Ba Sing Se and the head of the Dai Li. He seems chill at first, for like 30 seconds, and then you soon get the impression that he knows way more than he lets on. He too thwarts any attempt to get close to the Earth King, but unlike Judy, he is upfront to the gang about what his goals are, to retain his political power by keeping the king in the dark and controlling the flow of information. This dude is a master manipulator, and honestly one of the most underrated Avatar villains. As we see through Jet's plotline, Long Feng and the Dai Li are no stranger to using things like brainwashing and torture among other things to get what they want. The dude straight up turns Jet into a sleeper agent with nothing but a fucking lamp. That's just skill right there, bro. Oh, I'm sorry, you got hypnotized? Fucking skill issue, bitch. suck me. Alongside all of this, we also have Azula's plan unfolding. After defeating Suki and her crew, Azula's crew disguised themselves as the Kyoshi warriors in order to get close to the king, made worse by the fact that Sokka and the gang vouched for them without even knowing the truth. No doubt in my mind that this was part of Azula's plan. Like, she's that good. This in and of itself is actually a fantastic reveal, since we don't actually know the outcome of Azula and Suki's fight from Appa's lost days. You know, it cuts away right in the middle of it, so seeing that it's Azula and friends in disguise reveals the winner, and also makes the viewer question what happened to Suki and if she's even still alive. Imagine seeing this for the first time, bro. It's fucking nutty. Azula plots a coup to overthrow the king and take over the city from the inside, which she does masterfully by taking control of the Dai Li. But she doesn't do so directly. She waits for Long Feng to be exposed and arrested by the gang, and then makes her grand entrance in disguise. She uses her false identity to get on the king's good side and get him to trust her the same way Long Feng did. She also takes advantage of the fact that Long Feng is still in power even though he's in prison, and takes over the entire Dai Li from right under his nose. Keep in mind, Long Feng has been shown to be a master manipulator in multiple ways, and Azula uses him as just another pawn in her much larger game. That's how fucking good she is.
You always refer to us as pawns in your big game, in your big master plan. You say I don't see people with emotions and families and lives, I see pawns.
I've been trying to avoid just recapping the plot in this segment because that's just fucking boring and kind of pointless, but it's kind of hard not to when saying it all out loud just makes everything come together like that, you know what I mean? The beauty of this arc is that each main group of characters, the gang, Zuko and Iroh, Azula's team, and the Dai Li, are all acting independently of one another for the most part, all out doing their own thing, but they end up having an effect on the other whether intentionally or not. Things in this arc are always so close yet so far away, if that makes sense. The truth is right under everyone's noses the whole time, but because everything is going on all at once, it all becomes muddied. As some examples, the literal first time we see the city, it's being attacked by the Fire Nation. The gang finally made it, but not really because now there's more shit to deal with. Jet meeting Zuko is a bit of a coincidence and a crazy reveal for fans at that, so seeing him grow ever paranoid that the Fire Nation has infiltrated the city plays right into the Dai Li's hands, yet in doing so, they unknowingly led the gang right to them. The closer Appa gets to reuniting with Aang, something bad happens that pushes them further apart. Yet, Appa's little solo excursion introduces the idea of Azula's disguise and the importance of Guru Patik. Aang dropping missing Appa posters from the sky leads Zuko back down the path of hunting the Avatar, which leads him to freeing Appa and thereby the gang overthrowing Long Feng, and this decision also had a major effect on Zuko's psyche, leading to his pivotal choice in the season finale. Like I said, everything is connected. And honestly, I think that's the beauty of this arc. Though it is mostly plot driven, you know, way more plot driven than the rest of the show is, it still has those intense character moments that drew us in to begin with. You know, it's super fun to see Jet and his crew interact with Zuko and Iroh, specifically the dynamic between Zuko and Jet, two very similar characters and personality that are entirely different in their goals and backgrounds. The iconic Tales of Ba Sing Se is filled with character moments, whether it be Toph and Katara finally connecting and having a genuinely nice moment together, Aang and Sokka showing off the more lighthearted sides of their personalities, Zuko being humbled by having a regular date as a regular person, and of course the one we all know, Iroh lamenting the death of his son on what would have been his birthday. Leaves from the Vine has become synonymous with Iroh's character, and it's clear to see why. Giving him this tragic backstory makes him much more sympathetic of a character, not that he wasn't already, but also knowing that this scene is one of the final performances of Mako Iwamatsu as Iroh definitely adds to the gut punch that many fans get when they get to this scene. That being said, and this might be a fucking massive hot take, but this is definitely not the saddest scene in Avatar for me. Boo yourselves, you fucking cliche bastards. Fuck you. Personally, I find Appa's lost days to be way more emotional. Maybe it's just me, but it absolutely destroys my soul seeing animals in distress, and this is like most of this episode. Like, bro, when Suki pulls up and sees Appa all disheveled and tries to help him, my heart fucking drops, dude. Like, it's just, I can't, bro. I fucking can't. But beside that, and getting back to the topic at hand, this episode really cements Appa as a character that can be fleshed out, which is fucking insane to me. Imagine a show with characters so good that even the giant fluffy monster that communicates through grunts and roars is more complex than half of all TV casts. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but also not really. A lot of character stuff does come to a head in the penultimate episode of the season, the Guru, and there's a lot going on in this one. Of all the different plotlines in this episode, we've got Aang opening all the chakras, Sokka is finally able to see his dad again, Toph is captured and being taken back to her parents, with Katara and Zuko caught in the crossfire of Azula's coup. There's a lot going on here at once, much like it does in the rest of the season. Aang's spiritual journey leads him to deal with some deeper parts of himself, you know, some emotions that we as the audience know he's dealing with, but even some that we don't. We get a pretty good idea of how Aang feels about a lot of the stuff that's happened in his life thus far. And he has to face many of his greatest mistakes head on, and he comes out of it as a much better person. Sokka finally reunites with his father, which is not only some monumental payoff from back in Book 1, but it's also a major moment for Sokka's growth. Much of his character is based around not feeling like he can live up to his father, but by Hakoda treating him as an equal, he begins to see that he is worthy of being a man and a warrior. Zuko and Iroh are just living their best fucking lives. That's a vibe. And bro, do I even need to say it? I'm gonna say it anyways. But Toph inventing metal bending on the spot is, and excuse the pun, metal as fuck. We stan an earthbending queen. These episodes are just so dense that they're able to fit all these great character moments into a 22-minute episode. It's just fucking wild. Leaves from the vine, falling so slow. I am a gay guy. Time to suck and blow. That's so fucking disrespectful. I'm cutting that. That is getting so cut. That is so fucked. No, shouts out Leaves from the Vine though. I cry from my eyes and my penis when I see that. Of course, the season finale is one of the best episodes in the entire series, and I think it might be my personal favorite. The way Aang and Zuko's character arcs are handled, the fight choreography is fucking great. Iroh teaming up with the gang again. There are like 12 fucking plot twists in this thing that I wish I could watch it for the first time again. The season ends on a pretty bleak note, which was not something you'd really expect of the show thus far. Okay, maybe season 2 would lead you to believe that since a lot of episodes end on really depressing notes, but compared to Book 1's more hopeful ending, Book 2 is the darkest the series gets tonally, in my opinion. I think you all get my point here by now. Book 2 strikes the perfect balance of plot-driven storytelling and character-driven drama that a lot of shows just wish they could have. The complex story never takes a backseat to the characters, and the character arcs and dilemmas never take a backseat to the story. They're woven together here in such a way that you forget that these two things are technically separate. Like I mentioned earlier, most of Book 1 took things back to the status quo, but going into Book 2 and onward, there is no status quo. Every single episode adds something new and important to the story. There are no longer these world-building heavy one-off adventures, but rather a highly serialized format where to fully understand one episode, you need to have seen the rest of them. And while these episodes can certainly stand on their own, it's not in the same way as Book 1. This is the season that first has the previously on Avatar segments, because these episodes just straight up require context to work most of the time. Meaning that even the self-contained ones aren't really self-contained. They can be viewed on their own since they do remind you of where we are in the story, but the fact that they have to do that implies that it's not really meant to be viewed that way. For example, the swamp works perfectly fine on its own as a kind of fun, spooky Halloween episode for most of it, and it doesn't really tie into the grander narrative all that much, but it introduces one of the most profound themes of the series and describes the season perfectly. Everything is connected. That is why Book 2 is the best season of Avatar, because there is nothing in it that doesn't somehow connect to something else in it. Like I said, this is peak Avatar, and I don't think anything will ever top that for me.
There's nothing that can be done here that can be improved on. This is peak!
And now we get to Book 3, which if you ask me, isn't quite on the same level as Book 2, but I still fucking love it. Okay, so there's kind of this weird trend I've noticed in Western animation throughout the 2000s and 2010s, where no matter how plot-driven a series is, the final season is typically filled with fun one-off episodes in the beginning, before finally winding down in the last few episodes, for like actual plot shit. Avatar seems to have been another victim of this trend, where the first half of Book 3 is essentially filler, even though it really is not, while the second half is mostly dedicated to the plot and finishing up the story. As a result of that, I've always found Book 3 to be a little bit messy. Not as messy as Book 1, mind you, but still sharing a lot of its lows, but with all of the highs of Book 2, if that makes sense. Like I mentioned, Book 3 is essentially split into two halves, with the first half being about the gang's journey through the Fire Nation in disguise and Zuko's troubles after being welcomed back, while the second half is the real endgame material. We're in the endgame now. It's me, Marvel. The first half's mostly episodic nature serves as a detailed look at what Fire Nation culture is like for both the common citizen and the royal family. There are a lot of Book 1-esque episodes here where it's the gang going from town to town and dealing with whatever Fire Nation injustice is going on there. But unlike Book 1, where things were a lot more cut and dry, being in the Fire Nation itself adds a little bit more nuance. The Fire Nation is bad, but the people living there are not. They're just regular people trying to get by, and even then they are still victims to their own nation. Episodes Episodes like The Painted Lady show us that the Fire Nation army isn't above leaving its own citizens in the dust if it meant an upper hand in the war, and it negatively affects their nation and the people living there. The headband is pretty direct about how kids are indoctrinated into serving the Fire Nation, and the Puppet Master shows us that the real evil isn't always in plain sight. In fact, much of the first half of Book 3 is about how the Fire Nation isn't really all that evil, and that though they are our enemies in the war, the goal is not to defeat them, but to make peace with them again. The 3 episodes I just mentioned display how the Fire Nation is a victim to itself a lot of the time, and other episodes serve to show this in other ways. My personal favorite of these is Episode 6, The Avatar and the Firelord. While on a more meta level, it's a great way to foreshadow Aang and Zuko teaming up and deconstructing their whole dichotomy throughout the series, which I will get to. It also details a time where the Fire Nation weren't our enemies. There was once a time where people from the Fire Nation and people from the other nations could coexist and be friends. This episode perfectly describes what this first half of the season is all about, and believe me, this is not the last time I'll be bringing it up. It's an episode about a lot of things, but in this particular context, it's about realizing that the Fire Nation is not the real enemy. The gang slowly learns this over the course of the season, and it foreshadows the second half really well.
If anything, their story proves anyone's capable of great good and great evil. Everyone, even the Firelord and the Fire Nation, have to be treated like they're worth giving a chance.
But more importantly than that, though, is that these episodes also serve as great character studies in their own right. The Awakening and the Headband are focused on Aang and how he deals with responsibility. The Painted Lady and the Puppet Master give us further insight into Katara's morality. Sokka's Master resolves some of Sokka's confidence issues, the Runaway deals with all of Toph's problems, and the Beach deconstructs Zuko and Azula's team in a way that's never really been done before. This is why I say that a lot of these episodes aren't actually filler, despite most of them not really progressing the plot toward the invasion. They further the characters in meaningful ways, therefore they are not filler. If it seems like I'm glossing over these episodes, that's because I kind of am, because I'm saving discussion for most of them for the character section that I've been teasing this whole time. Just trust me on this one, right? Have I ever let you down before? Has Daddy Matt ever let you down before? But then we get to the invasion, the Day of Black Sun 2-part mid-season finale. Bro, this episode goes so fucking hard, and if we're counting multi-part episodes as one episode, it's gotta be top 3 for me. There are a ton of great character moments in the first quarter. We get some fun moments with some returning characters that, in an inferior show, we would have probably never seen again. The fact that such minor characters that were in one episode 2 seasons ago can come back and you're still like, yo, fucking Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the screen and shit, is a sign at how great these characters really are. And believe me, again, we'll get to that. They get all the comedy out of the way in the beginning with all of these callbacks, and during the war meeting with Sokka. And though that scene is pretty funny, it almost immediately becomes a pivotal moment for Sokka's character and the episode as a whole, as now he's left feeling unconfident for messing up the speech and nervous about going into battle, and the whole tone of the episode just kind of changes. Aang and Katara later have what they fear might be their final goodbye, resulting in a kiss that was absolutely wild the first time around. Dude just gets on his glider and leaves without a word, bro. That is some fucking Riz right there, bro. Unspoken Riz. Bro, when he shaves his head, we get that new Avatar drip, I literally went, yo. I went in that exact intonation, by the way. I went, yo. Much of the second half of part 1 is all action, with the gang and their invasion force storming the Fire Nation right at the heart of the capital. There is so much cool shit here, whether it be action or character moments. I still get chills down my spine whenever Sokka yells, or the reveal at the end that the Firelord is nowhere to be found. It's just so fucking raw, dude. Part 2 is a bit more focused on the main cast, mostly focusing on Aang, Sokka, and Toph infiltrating the Firelord's secret underground base. They end up fighting Azula in a really great fight, which is just peak Azula with her manipulation and shit, revealing that she knew about the invasion the entire time, which is some crazy payoff from Book 2. Everything about Book 2 meant basically nothing because she knew the whole time. So the invasion is fucking useless. I love that. Meanwhile, we got Zuko telling his father to eat shit with his dope-ass speech and finally promising to join the gang, something they've been hinting at since almost the beginning. The invasion being a failure after being teased for 2 whole seasons was a massive plot twist, and that Appa moment at the end where the gang leaves their friends in defeat is just man, fuck. These episodes just fuck so hard, dude. I think my only genuine criticism of this episode is that Katara takes such a massive backseat for most of it, which sucks because I feel that her character would add so much to the scenes with Azula, though power-wise I can see why she was mostly written out. But the few times that she does see some action, she is clearing these Fire Nation guys, bro. Just wiping the floor with them, bro. If Bryke had let her loose, that war would have been over way quicker. That's all I'm saying. After the invasion, most of the big plot stuff is saved for the finale, and while the plot progresses in this second group of episodes, in some ways it's a lot more subtle, with character relationships taking the main spotlight. Which brings me to my, and I think a lot of other fans' biggest problems with Book 3, Zuko joined the group too late. Zuko and Sokka having rough gay sex. That's rough, buddy. These final few episodes are iconic and even joked about for each main character getting their own life-changing field trip with Zuko, and it's clear to see why. We haven't gotten to see them as friends yet, so if the finale and entire future of the franchise is to be believable, they obviously need to establish how that happens. I love these episodes, but it's super clear that it was the writers making up for lost time. They really needed to sell this idea that Zuko is one of the gang now, and while I do think they succeeded in that, you can see exactly how they did it, which kind of takes me out of it sometimes, you know what I mean? My problem isn't that these episodes are bad, it's that they follow a clear formula with an incredibly obvious intention. Even though he joined a little too late though, I still really like how Zuko joins the group and how their individual field trips help strengthen that bond. Zuko's trip with Aang solidified him as his firebending teacher, his trip with Sokka cemented him as a trustworthy ally, and Katara's trip resolved all the tension between them from the beginning of the show, all while bringing the whole group closer together so that by the finale, they feel like true friends. I've noticed though that they specifically only do this with the original trio, since they were the ones that have known Zuko for the longest. So Toph doesn't get one because she has never really met Zuko, so there's no real point in having it. So I see why they glazed over it, but I also don't like that they glazed over it. Give me that Toph field trip, baby. Come on, fuck. Much of the mid-season opener, the Western Air Temple, is focused on this dynamic, but they play with it in a really interesting way. Katara being the one most opposed to Zuko joining the group makes the most sense because of their history. Aang willing to give him a chance is super in character for him and calls back to book 1, and Sokka's apprehension but ultimate acceptance of Aang's decision displays not only his loyalty, but also how much of his xenophobia of the Fire Nation has eroded away. Toph not having any history with Zuko also throws a big wrench in this whole situation, and I love how the writers handle it. She doesn't see the problem because not only does she have no first-hand experience with Zuko, but she's also capable of seeing the bigger picture because of that. There's so much nuance in this situation, and I think it's written beautifully. But as much as I criticize the field trip episodes for being what they are, they still go pretty hard and are some of my absolute favorites in the whole show. First reason is that everybody has their absolute best fucking drip in these episodes. Everybody's got the sauce, bro. It's fucking great, dude. Nah, but seriously, the main reason I love these episodes is because they're the culmination of each character's arc. While I will get into the grittier details later when we talk about the characters, from a story standpoint, this is where the original trio's arcs end before the finale. Maybe except for Aang, so that I'm kind of a liar. I'm kind of lying to you, because I'm a filthy bitch. Firstly, the Firebending Masters, the Aang and Zuko field trip to learn the original source of firebending. While Aang still has a bit more to unpack in the finale, his attitude toward firebending has always been a lesser discussed arc. After burning Katara back in book 1, he made the promise to never firebend again. While he eventually came to peace with the idea that he'd eventually have to, you can tell throughout the show that he's continuously apprehensive about it, with the invasion plan being designed in such a way that Aang wouldn't even need it. This episode helps him to see that though fire can cause destruction like it has in the past, in the right hands it can also bring life, which I think is also probably more of a meta symbolic thing for the Fire Nation. That was very intelligent. There's also a bunch of world building in this episode where we learn the mythos behind the true origins of bending without ever outright giving an answer. We learn about an entirely new culture within the Fire Nation in the Sun Warriors. We find out that the dragons are still around, and we even get some more backstory on Iroh and how he became the Dragon of the West. It's very dense with information, and a lot of it is very indirect. It's also just visually beautiful, and you all know the exact scene I'm talking about. I don't know who came up with it, but I absolutely love the idea of Zuko and Aang keeping the rainbow fire. That would be so fucking cool. We see that gay fire. After this, we get the Zuko and Sokka field trip with the Boiling Rock two-parter, in which the two infiltrate a Fire Nation prison to rescue Sokka's father. At first, this seems to be a wash when they find out that Hakoda is not there, but then they find out this is where Suki has been, which for Sokka has been eating away at him ever since the invasion, and for the audience has been a long-standing question since back in Book 2. Through a display of resilience, they tough it out until Hakoda arrives, and after a few failed attempts and interference from Azula, they make it out alive. While these two episodes are filled with great character moments for Sokka and Zuko, they form a great bro dynamic. I think the stuff involving May is way more engaging. It's our first proper follow-up with her since before the invasion, and she is not having any of Zuko's shit, but through said shit, the two realize that they still do love each other, even if they show it in really weird ways. May and Ty Lee's betrayal of Azula was a long time coming, and it perfectly tees up her mental deterioration for the finale. Back to the topic at hand though, Sokka's growing trust for Zuko is the real key takeaway for this episode, because he doesn't really have any reason to trust him thus far, and Zuko seems to see helping him as proof of that trust. When they first start this adventure, they're making really awkward small talk, that's rough buddy, funny haha, but by the end of this adventure, they are more than on the same page, since they were able to bond over their shared experiences with failure. And lastly, and I think most iconically, is the Southern Raiders, the Zuko and Katara field trip, which is less of a field trip and more of a quest for revenge against the man who killed Sokka and Katara's mother. I would argue that this is probably the Katara episode, since you literally can't talk about her character without it. While I'll get into the character stuff when we get to it, it's narratively a fantastic episode. The use of flashbacks is immaculate here, where we see the events of the day of Kanna's death from 3 different perspectives. We see Sokka's, who more so remembers the battle, Katara's, who remembers the events leading up to it, and Yan-Ra's, who did the deed. Wait, that makes it sound sexual, but you get the point, he fucking killed her. By seeing these different perspectives, we get to see every angle of how things went down that day, and it provides us with a rather messy retelling of events, but is also the writers essentially drip feeding us the truth. It's just great storytelling, and combine that with the dreary visuals throughout most of the episode reflecting Katara's dark mental state, followed by either a sunrise or a sunset, which depending on how you look at it could either reflect how the sun has set on her lust for revenge, or how the sun has risen on her new friendship with Zuko. He does rise with the sun after all. See what I did there? See, did a little callback. We call that a motherfucking callback. We call that a motherfucking callback. I call that a motherfucking callback because I'm fucking sucking ass and I'm licking balls. I'm licking chode. Like I said, I'm getting ahead of myself because I do want to dedicate time to these characters on their own, but in the context of this being the final season, I fucks with it, but it also illustrates another problem with the season. Book 3 had this weird tendency to throw in new problems for these characters to face at the last minute, tackling new aspects of their personalities that have been otherwise glossed over in the past. For instance, in Sokka's master, he takes up swordsmanship because he feels the need to be more useful to the group. And while his motivations become a bit more selfish by the end of the episode, it kinda came out of nowhere for Sokka to suddenly feel this way when he has been perfectly fine with being who he was for the majority of the series. Or Toph's insistence on being a wild and free spirit in The Runaway, when she had already kind of tackled that issue back in Book 2. Book 3 occasionally likes to backtrack, so I like that these Zuko field trip episodes help to bring these arcs full circle before the end, so that it ties these new character arcs into their overarching arcs in a way that feels faithful to the characters. Did that make sense? I don't know, probably. In a season with a decent amount of backtracking, Zuko joining the group forced things to progress, and this stretch of episodes will always be goated for that. And like a million other reasons because they all bang, but you know what I mean. When you really look at it though, there are only 5 episodes proper of Zuko being a member of the group and interacting with everyone. The recap episode doesn't really count, and I personally view the finale as one episode, and the group isn't even together for most of it. I know I'm making it sound like a bad thing, but I don't think that it really necessarily is. While I personally would have loved to see Zuko on the team for a lot longer, the fact that he was part of it for such a short time yet has been this impactful of an arc is really telling of their quality of the writing. These episodes are so memorable that it feels longer than it is, and that's a good thing. After a hilarious recap episode, arguably the most unique recap episode in all of fiction, we finally get to the 4-part series finale, Sozin's Comet, one of the best finales in all of fiction. I will die on this hill, and I'm definitely not dying on this hill alone, but I will die on it nonetheless. I was born in this hole and I died in this hole. The finale opens on Ember Island, where the gang is taking the time to relax, which Zuko thinks is fucking stupid, since Sozin's Comet is soon approaching. After some shenanigans, Zuko learns that the gang were planning to wait for the comet to pass before fighting the Firelord, since Aang still needed time to master the elements and it would be too reckless to attack when the Firebenders are at their strongest. This seems to make sense at first, until Zuko drops the bomb on Ozai's real plan, which is to use the comet's power to wipe out the entire Earth Kingdom. This story beat is kinda dumb when you really think about it, since there has been no indication that Aang has been planning to wait. And even then, it seems that decision must have happened at some point after Zuko joined the group, so why the hell wouldn't he have known about it? And even if he didn't, Zuko could have at some point shared what he learned in the war meeting so that everybody was up to speed. So I mean, it's kind of dumb of him to assume everybody was on the same page with information that only he had. This is a really petty criticism, I'll admit, but when you've seen the show as many times as I have, then you start to pick up on shit like this. I mean, I don't hold it against the show or anything. In fact, it's a great way of building a sense of urgency, and it makes for a great final battle since they are literally fighting the enemy at their strongest, but logistically it doesn't really add up. At least to me. Because I'm fucking stupid, and I have brain damage and I have AIDS. Anyways, the topic eventually comes up that Aang will eventually have to kill the Firelord. So Aang goes missing, no doubt due to some Avatar spirit shenanigans that are also not explained at all. I'm obviously being facetious again because it doesn't really need explaining, because to quote Sokka,
That's Avatar stuff, that doesn't count.
Anyways, Aang is missing, so the plot of part 2 is to track him down. Zuko leads the gang to find him using Jun's Shirshu from all the way back in book 1, which is a piece of continuity that I honestly didn't think they would be brought back upon my first viewing. Granted, my first viewing was 15 fucking years ago, but sure. The Shirshu cannot find Aang, which makes no fucking sense, so Zuko opts for the next best thing, the most powerful firebender he knows, his uncle Iroh. They track him down and end up coming across the Order of the White Lotus, comprised of a bunch of their old friends and teachers from across the world. Emphasis on old, because these motherfuckers are geriatric. King Bumi, Master Pakku, Master Piandao, and Zhong the Deserter lead the gang to find Iroh, who then sends the gang on their new missions. Bro, I absolutely love seeing Iroh just be so chill with the gang. He fits right in, bro. It just doesn't feel forced or anything. We are absolutely absolutely robbed of more scenes between him and Sokka. I feel like those two in particular would get along real well. It's just a vibe I have, you know what I mean? Of course, we also get the scene where Zuko and Iroh finally reunite, which is fucking great, and it makes me tear up a little bit every time. But I'll talk about this more in depth later with their characters, because I'm a dick. I'm a dick. I'm a penis. Anyways, on the flip side, Aang wakes up in a strange place, so he tries to contact his past lives in order to find out where the hell he is and to find a solution to his problem. It's here that we have a big, fat, juicy Avatar lore dump, with Aang speaking with Roku, Kyoshi, Kuruk, and Yang Chen, who all give him advice from their own lives to help Aang with his no-killing problem. I love this scene from a pure lore perspective. It's fucking great anytime the past lives are brought into play, and I also like that story-wise, their advice isn't actually all that helpful. This is more so a thing with Aang's character arc, so I'll go more in depth with it later, but I believe that their advice was intentionally written to not be helpful, since it just reaffirms Aang's struggle even more. Anyways, I really love the title of part 2, The Old Masters, because it's just super on the nose. We meet the White Lotus, who are literally comprised of the gang's old masters, but we also have the past avatars showing up as well as the Lion Turtle, who are old masters in their own right. I felt smart pointing that out, but it's really fucking obvious now that I say it out loud. You're a fucking hack. You're a fucking bitch.
Stupid.
Moving on though, parts 3 and 4 of the finale are pretty much all action, with 4 main plots going on at once. We've got Sokka, Suki, and Toph taking out the air fleet, the White Lotus taking back Ba Sing Se, Katara and Zuko versus Azula, and of course Aang versus the Firelord. These are all fantastic, but I think the weakest of the 4 is definitely Sokka's group. While it still has some fantastic moments like Toph using metal bending armor or the airship slice, this moment with Sokka and Toph hanging by a thread fucks me up every single time. It's definitely a plotline that's only there for posterity's sake. Like, you can't skip over it because it shows how the air fleet goes down, and they offer some anime-esque commentary on the fight, and it gives these 3 something to do in a situation where they're otherwise pretty powerless. Toph might be the greatest earthbender in the world, but I think comet-powered Ozai would probably clap her, dude. Like, she doesn't really belong here. Honestly, I think Toph was criminally underutilized in the finale, and she only gets stuck on the airship mission because they literally did not know what to do with her. Literally half the Melon Lord joke is that she plays this role because Sokka had no plan for her, and it's clear that the writers just didn't either. Toph doesn't really get any important character moments here, and it kind of sucks wiener that she gets sidelined this way. But anywho, the other 3 plotlines are pretty fucking good, and I'm putting that extremely lightly. The one with the least screen time is the White Lotus at Ba Sing Se, but they do a lot with a little in that regard. It's pretty much all action just seeing these old dudes absolutely fuck up these Fire Nation troops. While it seemed like Paku and Piandao got the short end of the stick by not doing anything particularly cool, we had some great moments with Bumi, Zhong, and Iroh. This motherfucker just casually flying, Bumi being crazy, it fucks. But from a thematic perspective, seeing Iroh take back Ba Sing Se really brings his character full circle, but again, I'll talk about that later. I know I keep saying that, and I really hate doing it, but trust me, you'll fucking cry probably, I think. Of course, then we have Zuko versus Azula in the last Agni Kai. Many fans consider this fight to be the best fight in the series, and while I'm not sure if I quite agree with that or not, it undoubtedly fucks hard. There's just so much going on with this, from the contrasting red and blue flames representing the drive and dichotomy between these 2 characters, the music overtaking everything with all the diegetic sound being muffled in the background, just the general badassery on both sides. It's just fucking wild. There are firebending moves and techniques that Zuko does here that call back to previous episodes, showing how far that he's come. The symbolism behind this fight is insane, with both characters' fighting styles representing their states of mind at the time. Azula is very mentally unstable by this point, so her attacks are much more erratic and far less calculated than we're used to from her, while Zuko stands firm for most of the fight, showing that he's got his goal within his sights and is unwilling to budge or concede. Of course, the fight takes a huge shift halfway through, where Zuko is struck by Azula's lightning to protect Katara. While I wouldn't say this is the pinnacle of Zuko's arc, it's definitely a good point of reference for him, showing how much he's changed and how that's affected his new friendships. The fight then changes to become Katara versus Azula, and while having a much less emotional weight to it, it still goes pretty fucking hard. Katara is such a fucking badass, dude. She straight up freezes herself, moves around the ice, and just chains the bitch up. That is some baller ass shit, dude. I think this just reaffirms the idea of seeing these characters at their full power is just generally awesome, and Katara would have absolutely fucked shit up if she was allowed to let loose, bro. That's all I'm saying. But now we've got to talk about the piece de resistance. I speak of the French. Avatar Aang versus Firelord Ozai. The fight we've been waiting for since the very beginning. Well, technically episode 5, but that's beside the point. After being MIA for the first half of the movie, Aang finally appears to fight the Firelord, and though his bending skills are great, Mans gets his ass clapped. I'm fucking sorry, dude. Ozai is just fucking this kid up. It's just not looking good for him, bro. Sozin's comment has made this guy way too powerful, and Aang just does not have what it takes to beat him in this state. So he hides in a ball to buy himself some time. Ozai eventually breaks this ball, sending Aang flying. In what amounts to a sheer coincidence, he lands spinal wound first onto a conveniently placed jutting rock, activating the Avatar state for the first time since Ba Sing Se. Alright, and look, right, in hindsight, I think we can all agree that this is a little bit far-fetched. You know, he just so happens to land in this exact location in the exact right position for the rock to hit him right in the fucking wound, and this somehow reopens opens his 7th chakra, which if I recall correctly is located on the crown of the head, so what the fuck is going on? I'm sure there's some lore explanation for the latter that I'm not aware of, but as for the former, come the fuck on. Like, it's not impossible, but it's far too coincidental for this to be the thing that ends the fucking series, you know what I mean? You know, there's a rule in writing where you can use coincidence to get your character into a situation, but not to get them out, and this definitely breaks that rule to some degree. That being said, though, this is not a huge deal, and if you make a big deal out of it, shut the fuck up. I mean, if we're really gonna sit here and nitpick what basically amounts to a few frames of animation that explains how he gets the Avatar state again, a few frames that most people would probably not even consider giving any thought at all, then I think we've officially entered a not feeling the vibes zone, because this fight is not really about logic, it's about the fucking vibes. Immediately after gaining access to the Avatar state again, Aang proceeds to go absolutely sicko mode against Ozai, completely turning the tables of the fight in his favor. This shit is so fucking badass, yo. He is out here clapping cheeks. He's got the motherfucking Avatar ball. Bro gets all his past lives in unison and drops some fucking heat.
Firelord Ozai, you and your forefathers have devastated the balance of this world. And now you shall pay the ultimate price.
I am fully erect by this point. Just when it seems that victory is in sight, Aang lets out one final attack to finish the Firelord, but at the last minute, his tattoos stop glowing and he stops fighting.
No, I'm not gonna end it like this.
The audience is screaming at their screens right now, and Ozai is like, bro, you should have just killed me, you fucking idiot. But using the seismic sense that he learned from Toph, Aang avoids Ozai's attack and restrains him once again, now placing one hand on his head and another on his heart, and proceeds to take away his firebending in one of the most beautiful scenes in the entire show. The Firelord has been defeated, and the world can be at peace once more. I think one of the only flaws that can really be applied to this episode is the whole energy bending thing, and it's kind of understandable why. For those unaware of this pretty popular criticism, many fans think that the way Aang gets energy bending by the lion turtle just giving it to him, and then Aang somehow knowing exactly how to use it at the last minute, is a deus ex machina, and that there was probably a better way to handle it. And yeah, they would be correct to think that. It is, by definition, a deus ex machina. It is a random solution that came out of nowhere at the last minute to solve the problem, and to pretend that that's not what this is pretty disingenuous. I don't know if Bright had this planned the whole time or not. You know, I wasn't in the writer's room with them, and I've even heard conflicting things about how this idea made it to fruition, but it's a deus ex machina through and through. Yet I still kinda like it. The reasons for why I like it is mostly tied to Aang's character development, but for one, it's just fucking cool. My guy meets a giant-ass turtle, a fucking eldritch god who gives him special magic avatar powers and esoteric wisdom, which he then uses to shoot beams out of his face and beat the Firelord at literally the last possible second. Like, bro, I don't care if it makes sense or not at this point. That is fucking badass no matter how you airbending slice it. You know, sure, I do wish that it was set up a little bit more, you know, like those few throwaway lines about lion turtles in random episodes was definitely not enough, but even then, the fact that this does come out of nowhere still fits right in with what this means for Aang's character, which, and say it with me now, I'll get to later. Overall, energy bending was clearly the result of some kind of uncertainty within the writer's room, but they still managed to stick the landing with it, so I can't even really be too mad about it. After the battle has concluded, we get a montage showcasing the official end of the war. Zuko is crowned as Firelord and shares this moment alongside Aang as friends. Later, the gang celebrates back in Ba Sing Se, with everybody together finally able to have a moment of peace. Aang takes the time to appreciate this moment and is joined by Katara, where the two share a kiss and fading into the words, "The end." I honestly don't think I could have thought of a better final scene, because it brings everything full circle. It would make total sense if the final scene was the prior one where world peace is established. You know, this transition could have easily been made during this exact shot, but this has always been a show about friendship. To not end on a scene of the whole gang, including Mai and Iroh, would just be a disservice to these characters. The focus on Aang in these final moments is important in how it comes full circle though. When we first met Aang, he claimed that he never wanted to be the Avatar, and has displayed on many occasions that he would rather spend his life with the people he loves. But he went through with all of it anyways because that is his responsibility. Now that the Firelord has been defeated and the war has ended, he doesn't have to be the Avatar anymore, if only for a brief moment. After 100 years of conflict, the world is now at peace, so now Aang can be at peace as well. At the end of the day, Avatar is one of the most expertly crafted stories of all time. Each event flows into the next, and even when the transition isn't very seamless a la Book 1, there are still those connecting threads that remind you where in the story we are. And I'm not talking about previously on Avatar. Most episodes can stand entirely on their own if they need to, while still being in the middle of a larger story arc, which doesn't even matter because the show is just so fucking engaging. While I've tried to avoid recapping the plot of each season, it becomes kinda hard not to when the ideas alone are as compelling as they are. I've also tried to keep things as general as possible here, just so that when we get into the characters later on, I'm not repeating myself, because the story and characters go hand in hand on a level that other shows just dream they could achieve. It's hard to explain how well written the story is without talking about the characters that make the story as engaging as it is, which again, I'll get to it later. Soon, shortly, I know. Fuck you, eat a dick and die. To end this section off, I want to give massive props to all of the talented writers behind this show. People often send much of the very well-deserved praise to Mike and Brian, but they often forget that plenty of other writers also wrote for this show. Aaron Ehaz and his wife Elizabeth Welch Ehaz, Tim Hedrick, Josh Hamilton, John O'Brien, and pretty much anyone else who had a hand in crafting this story. You know, I know saying, hey, big ups my guy, is a bit lowbrow for the praise I'm expressing here, but you get the idea. Giving each of these writers their own time to shine, you get episodes that have their own unique style, which combined with the director's vision, results in a narratively and stylistically diverse show that, like I've been saying, works both as an episodic adventure or as an overarching story. It is not easy to make that kind of thing work, but when there's a will, there is a way. And you don't get something like this without some blood, sweat, and tears. And cum, but that's mine. That has nothing to do with it. But before we get into the characters that I've been promising to talk about for the past hour, let's first talk about something that I feel is incredibly important to the show. The lore. Oh, I can fucking do this. Hell yeah. Fuck it. We'll do it live. Fuck it. I'll write it and we'll do it live. The world of Avatar is this massive hodgepodge of all kinds of different influences. The series takes inspiration from numerous cultures and time periods, and because so much of it is based on real life, it serves to ground the series in a way that makes everything feel real. Obviously, it's not real, you know, I can't throw rocks with my mind, but the way everything in the show is portrayed makes it feel like I can. I have not been doing mushrooms, I swear. Hey man, you ever do fucking shrooms, bro? You ever suck a man's cock on shrooms? Firstly, let's start with culture, because I am a cultured man. As many of you already know, each of the 4 nations are modeled after real cultures from around the world. The air nomads are based on Tibetan monks in everything from the garb to their religious beliefs. It's a bunch of bald dudes who live in the mountains to meditate. Pretty self-explanatory. Monk Gyatso's name actually comes from the name of the Dalai Lama, who is kind of like low-key the real-life Avatar, because he's like reincarnated every fucking lifetime or something, and his real name is Tenzin Gyatso. This also serves as the namesake for Tenzin in The Legend of Korra. This inspiration has now aged very badly because apparently the Dalai Lama likes to tongue children.
Yeah, you lost me with that one, family.
The water tribes are based on the Inuit cultures of North America. These are tribal native cultures who typically live in the snowy tundra. Like a lot of native cultures, the Inuit have a very spiritual relationship with nature, which is reflected in the show with the Northern Water Tribe following the moon and ocean spirits. The Earth Kingdom is a hodgepodge of different inspirations, but is most clearly based on China. We got a big ass wall, I think that speaks for itself. There is no one particular place the Earth Kingdom is based on, so if you look for it, you'll find all kinds of East Asian cultures represented in it, which makes sense because it's just so huge. And lastly, the Fire Nation seems to be mostly based on Japan, seen with its honor-based culture and general imperialism displayed by the government. Firebenders rise with the sun, and so does Japan, with its flag meant to represent the rising sun. I mean, dude, come on, Zuko is basically a fucking ninja. Come on, like look at this guy. The Sun Warriors are based on the Aztecs, and the Swamp Benders are, well, I actually don't know what they're based on. We got some hillbilly representation, and I'm fucking here for it, I reckon. Boy, I tell you what! But this stuff all goes beyond just, the creators were inspired from this. Because there's actually way more care put into it than that.
It's a part of who we are. I was able to learn earthbending, not just as a martial art, but as an extension of my senses.
The cultures of the 4 nations perfectly reflect their element, with the 4 elements themselves also representing very specific things. As anybody who watched the show on Nickelodeon when it was airing will tell you, the 4 elements are based on real-world martial arts. Shouts out to creating the legend, those bumpers fucked hard. Each style of bending has its roots in a different martial art, and the philosophies of these fighting styles translate directly into the philosophy of the element and what they represent, and they also act as extensions of the cultures of these nations. Each element is also associated with one of the 4 seasons. In fact, the subtitles of each book correspond to the season in which the book takes place. It goes fucking really deep, bro. It's insane. Airbending is based on the art of Bagua Zhang, also known as circle walking. It's called circle walking because you literally walk in a circle, kind of on the nose. Those Chinese know how to name them. Bagua is a style based around circular motions, with the intent being to always have an idea of your surroundings and is intended for combat against multiple opponents. This style fits airbending quite well, as it is a very free-flowing style, which of course matches with air's association with the concept of freedom. The symbol for air is 3 spirals, which continues this circular motif. It's like spin jutsu if you catch my fucking vibe, dude. Fucking Bagua is not a very aggressive fighting style though, with the intent being to avoid strikes from opponents rather than striking yourself. This is right at home with Aang's general philosophy toward combat, which is to avoid it at all costs, but if he must fight, he rarely ever attacks outright, instead dodging and playing tricks on his opponents. He's a pacifist, you know how that shit works. It actually seems to be a rather well-known thing that airbenders are like this, with Bumi and Zhao both commenting on how much Aang evades attacks rather than throwing fists. The season associated with air is fall or autumn, and in many ways it's clear to see why. Fall is known to be a windy time of year where the leaves flow freely in the wind. While I'm getting a little ahead of myself by mentioning Korra here, it's important in airbending to be the leaf. The goal is not to spin around like a fucking Beyblade, but to move with the wind. Being free is the core concept, so it makes sense that it is the element of freedom.
Beyblade, let it rip.
Waterbending is based on Tai Chi, a martial art that is actually seldom used for combat. It's considered more of an internal martial art, with the intention being to allow one's energy to flow within them, serving more as a form of meditation. This style fits waterbending perfectly, with the flow of energy matching the flow of water, and the non-combativeness matching the merciful nature of waterbending. As a form of internal healing in many philosophies, it also draws parallels to how waterbenders are able to heal. Unlike the other fighting styles I'll be discussing, I've actually done a bit of Tai Chi myself. I did one session of it for a class I was taking in college, and while I wasn't very good at it, I legit felt like I was fucking waterbending. Like, it was awesome. Well, like, I knew that Tai Chi was waterbending going into it, so that's probably why, but you get the idea.
Prince Zuko, I am squirting, Prince Zuko.
I love that the Avatar team and Sifu Kisu took a martial art that wasn't intended for combat and adapted it into a combative form, since it really gives the waterbenders a unique way of moving. Water is the element of change and is most closely associated with the season of winter, and this makes a lot of sense. Winter is a time where things change a great deal, and of course snow is literally just frozen water flakes. Book 1 is titled Water, not just because that's the element Aang is learning, but also because it takes place during the winter, and a great deal of it takes place near bodies of water. And also, it's kind of a time of great change when you really think about it. Earthbending actually has two styles, with the majority of earthbenders using a style akin to Hung-Ga Kung Fu. Or is it Hung-Ga or Hung-Gar? I don't fucking know, but whatever it is, it's that. You know what it is. This style emphasizes staying close to the ground and not allowing your opponent to knock you over. In other words, you must be sturdy like a rock, so I think the parallels to earthbending are pretty clear. According to Iroh, earth is the element of substance, making earthbenders strong-willed with spirits that are hard to break. Earth is the element associated with spring, which makes sense when you view the seasons as the earth rebirthing itself. That sounded fucking gross. It was fucking vile. Toph is actually a special case though, since her unique use of earthbending causes her to utilize her own unique style, which is based on southern praying mantis kung fu. It also focuses on staying low to the ground, which fits Toph perfectly since she literally can only see on the ground. What's actually really interesting about this style and why it fits Toph so well though, is that it was supposedly invented by a blind woman, and the crew actually didn't know this until after the fact. Brian Konietzko revealed in an interview that Sifu Manny, one of the martial arts consultants on the show, suggested this style for Toph before knowing that the character was going to be blind. The fact that that worked out the way that it did is just wild to me, and it was just clearly meant to be. And lastly, firebending is based on Northern Shaolin Kung Fu, a rather aggressive style that focuses on being fast and fierce in your attacks with an emphasis on kicking.
I want to do some kicking.
This fits fire quite well because it can be dangerous but also quite hard to control. A flying kick can do some damage for sure, but there's no way to control yourself in the air, which can do more harm than good, much like how fire can be dangerous to both the opponents and the user. Like Iroh says in the very first episode, it's about the breath, not the muscle, and while this is a fundamental concept in any martial art, this is more so the case with Kung Fu and firebending. Fire itself is always breathing in a way, so to control your breath is to control fire. There's actually a really interesting concept shown throughout Zuko's firebending, and it's something that Zhong mentions back in Book 1. Throughout the series, whenever Zuko would firebend, he'd let out a grunt or make some kind of angry sound. This symbolizes how he draws his firepower from rage. After learning the true source of firebending, his bending is now completely silent, showing that he no longer views his firebending as a weapon, but as a deeper part of himself, and he has certainly mellowed out by this point. He's able to breathe more calmly instead of angrily. Anyways, fire is also the element of power, with firebenders being driven by a strong force of will, but in a different way from earthbenders. The will of an earthbender is to remain strong, while a firebender is the will to succeed. Fire is also the element associated with the summer. And for an element that's so closely related to the sun, it also makes sense that it'd be related to the time where the days are the longest. Also, it's fucking hot. I'm sweating my balls off filming this probably. I don't know, I'm recording the audio section right now, but if I'm filming, when I go to film the live action parts, bro, I'm gonna be sweating dick.
It should not be so damn hot that I'm up here having dreams about me being on fire.
But the thing that I love the most about the 4 elements and what they represent is that there's actually a lot of overlap between them. Air and water are both very free-flowing, while earth and fire are more rigid and strict. Earth and water are very grounded and slow, while air and fire are more acrobatic and fast. Even though air and earth are opposites to each other, there are still some similarities between their fighting styles, both of which involve waiting for the right time to strike, which both do in different ways. Earthbenders do it by standing their ground, while airbenders do it by avoiding and evading. The two are actually much more similar than many realize, with the ability to sense people around you, and more importantly, their emphasis on allowing your opponent to defeat themselves. As Aang explains in the drill, you shouldn't put all of your energy into one attack, and instead weaken your opponent until their own weight becomes their downfall. In other words, both styles have a way of using your opponent's attacks against them. Water and fire are the most diametrically opposed for obvious reasons, but that just makes them all the more similar when you look at the parallels. Both derive their power from celestial bodies in the sun and the moon, both lose that power during a type of eclipse, and both have an emphasis on a push and pull. For water, this is more literal, while for fire, this is seen in their breathing techniques. Even the designs of each nation's symbol have some connecting threads within them, with each one featuring a spiral design somewhere representing that they are all drawn from the same energy in some way. Or I'm a pretentious fuck looking way too much into this, which is probably the case. The overlap in bending can also be seen in the styles themselves, as there is actually a lot of merging of techniques. Iroh invented lightning redirection by applying the principles of water bending to his fire bending. Katara stands her ground like an earthbender in this scene, and Zuko sometimes wields his fire like it's water. Bending is not restricted to the martial art that it's associated with, and a user of one element can learn from the techniques and values of the others. The elements are more similar than many realize, and that is by design. In that same dick vein, let's talk about energy bending for a second. From a narrative standpoint, we can go back and forth about energy bending all day. Is it good? Isn't it ass pull? The whole 9 yards, right? But regardless, I love its inclusion because of what it adds to the lore. The Lion Turtle says,
"In the era before the Avatar, we bent not the elements, but the energy within ourselves."
And what this actually means has often been twisted by fans in the wake of Korra's lore additions. While I won't be touching Korra in this video, I will be looking at what the Lion Turtle's line implies about what energy bending actually is. When he says, "we bent not the elements, but the energy within ourselves," I don't think he's referring to people literally running around energy bending all over the place, but rather he is referring to how people's view of bending has changed. In the current time period, the 4 elements are 4 elements. They are viewed as separate entities that are not connected, no doubt due to the 4 nations remaining separate entities themselves. But as we all know, everything is connected. What the Lion Turtle is saying is that back then, there was no distinction between fire bending or air bending. They were not separated by element, but were all seen as one universal power, energy. And we actually know what this energy is. It's chi. All bending comes from one's control over their own chi. When someone is bending, they aren't really manipulating the element so much as they're manipulating their own chi. If chi is the real thing being manipulated, then technically all bending is energy bending, just specified to a particular element. The Avatar is the only person who can bend chi directly because mastery over the 4 elements gives them a more universal understanding over this energy and how it's the source of all bending. Chi is actually also a real concept in many different religions, philosophies, and martial arts. It's pretty universal overall, so I love that a concept so universal was brought into the world as the universal source of all bending. Chi, that's what my dad calls cheese for some reason. I don't know why. He's like, "Hey, yo, pass the chi." I'm like, why? Why would you? And speaking of chi and other fictional bullshit that doesn't exist, you can't talk about chi without mentioning the chakras, because the two go hand in hand. As Guru Patik says, the chakras are pools of chi in the body which are associated with different aspects of human nature. While ultimately I think this is all horseshit and doesn't actually exist, its presence in the show is based on real-world beliefs, and the belief is pretty much all that matters, right? These beliefs stem from old religions like Taoism and Buddhism, and also have been adopted in a modern way through a lot of New Age movements. These New Age motherfuckers are insane though. Like I almost fell for that shit. Like I should actually do a whole video about New Age bullshit. Like it's actually gay. Much like in the show, there are 7 main chakras, with each one dealing with a particular emotion, becoming more and more enlightening as you go up. In the Guru, each chakra meditation segment has a specific color filter to it, and these colors actually line up with the real life chakras and the colors associated with them. Starting from the bottom and going up, they are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, which also happens to be the order of the visible light spectrum. Alongside this, when Aang meditates on these chakras, he places his hands in very particular positions that are different from his typical 2 closed fists, which by the way, I don't think have any cultural significance. I think they just included it to look cool, and in fairness, it kinda does. These Naruto-ass hand signs are called mudras, with each chakra having a specific one associated with it. I'm gonna explain the chakras shortly, but just know that when you see Aang doing fucking jutsus, that shit's real.
Nobody practices
jutsus in the corner.
The chakras in the Avatar world also have a connection to the 4 elements, with the first 4 chakras corresponding to a particular element. The Earth chakra is located at the base of the spine, and it deals with survival and is blocked by fear. This makes a lot of sense when you understand earthbending as a philosophy, which we just discussed. The base of the spine is a point of stability, which fits Earth perfectly. Overcoming your fears makes you more likely to survive, or in other words, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That gay fucking Kelly Clarkson song. Was that Kelly Clarkson or was that Carrie Underwood? Doesn't kill you, makes you stronger, sucker motherfucker. The water chakra is next, and it deals with pleasure and is blocked by guilt. Water is all about the flow of energy within, and to many, this is a rather pleasurable feeling. The real chakra this is based on, the sacral chakra, is associated with sexuality, so that's also probably where the pleasure part comes in, but obviously a kid's show can't talk about sex. Water being the most feminine of the 4 elements also seems to emphasize this as well. Next is the fire chakra. As we established earlier, firebenders are driven by willpower, so it makes sense that willpower is this chakra's vibe, while it is blocked by shame. Its location, the stomach, calls back to some of Iroh's teachings throughout the series, where he mentions that firebending comes from the breath. In martial arts and meditation and all that shit, breathing from your stomach is very important, as it's believed that the stomach is the source of chi. Iroh even calls it the sea of chi at one point, and for him, it's more like a vast ocean. Haha, it's cause he's fat. Going back to the chakras, it's pretty clear why fire and willpower go together. Firebenders have a strong source of will, which is heavily impeded by shame, and this seems to be present in most of our resident firebenders. Zuko is ashamed of his banishment and wants to regain his honor to get rid of that shame, and Iroh is ashamed of a lot of his mistakes throughout his life, but both overcome that through their will to go on. For Aang, this chakra was blocked by the shame he felt when he burnt Katara, and he opened it, albeit anticlimactically, by accepting that he is a firebender. Before he even knew it, Aang had that motherfucking dog in him. And rounding out the elements is the air chakra, which deals with love and is blocked by grief, understandably located in the heart. This one is pretty self-explanatory. Aang opens this chakra by facing the grief felt by the loss of his people, and it's no coincidence that the air chakra involves the airbenders. The air nomads were a very loving and spiritually free people, and as they say, love shall set you free.
Who says things like that?
That was the gayest thing I've ever talked about in a video ever, and I make song parodies about guzzling penises. Go watch my gay parodies. The other 3 chakras are a lot more general than this, but are still rather deep. The sound chakra is located in the throat, which makes total sense, and deals with truth and is blocked by lies. Lying requires speaking, so again, it makes sense. This is definitely the weakest chakra in terms of real-life show parallels, because I'll be honest, it doesn't really make any sense in context. The lies in question are the ones we tell ourselves, and for Aang, this was his original apprehension about being the Avatar. Except he doesn't lie to himself about this. He knows he's the Avatar. He lies to everybody else because he wants to avoid it. They could have easily called back to any other time Aang has lied, and I think that would have been more effective, but my criticism was neither here nor there. Give me some of that throat chakra. I want some throat. The light chakra is the show's equivalent to the third eye chakra, which is arguably the most well-known. It's said that those who open their third eye are able to see past all the illusions that cloud our everyday lives, giving us better insight into the world. It stands to reason that the light chakra deals with insight and is blocked by illusion. One such example that the guru gives is the illusion of separation. Aang recognizes this philosophy from what he learned in the swamp, that everything is connected. It can also be argued that Toph has mastered this chakra in her own right, as the scene transitions to her seeing through the illusion of metal and earth being different as she invents metal bending. I also like the irony that Toph is blind, but has a third eye of her own in earth bending. I am a fucking genius for pointing that out, because I am a god. Lastly is the thought chakra, which corresponds to the crown chakra in real life. This chakra deals with pure cosmic energy, whatever the fuck that means, and is blocked by earthly attachments. I think this chakra is the most important in understanding the chakras as a whole, because when you think about it, it directly contradicts some of the other chakras. In order to open this chakra, one must detach themselves from everything that attaches them to the world, allowing them to tap into the cosmic energy of the universe. For Aang, this would mean giving up Katara, whom he already accepted his love for during a previous chakra. In fact, it was the air chakra, and I think that was intentional. He can't love Katara and let go of his attachment to her at the same time, as the two are directly contradictory. In a story sense, Aang's refusal to open the final chakra is indicative of his true desires, since he would rather keep the air chakra open and feel love than to detach himself from love and obtain a great power. It would go against his very nature as an airbender and as a person. But overall, this shows a philosophical flaw in the chakras, with the final one requiring you to forget everything you knew about the previous 6. Forget is probably the wrong word, as it's more so like rising above, but the fact remains that the final chakra ironically requires you to become detached from the very things you've come to accept in the previous chakras. This chakra is considered in real life and in the show out to be the hardest one to open, and I think it's for this very reason. Now, for those of you who have been with Avatar Month since the very beginning, this all might sound very familiar to you, since my very first Avatar video was talking about this aspect of the series, you know, all the fighting styles and the lore and shit. It's something that I've just always appreciated about it as somebody who once had a passing interest in martial arts, and though I wouldn't consider myself a very spiritual person, the spiritual side of Avatar is genuinely unironically deep. I actually have like a really hard time kind of explaining with words how the spiritual stuff in Avatar speaks to me personally, since I saw the show a lot as a child, and I really took in everything that it was teaching at a very young age, and I'm a very like conceptual kind of person, so a lot of these things just kind of exist in my head as like just abstract concepts, so I can't really explain them, you know what I mean? I have no way to describe these concepts because it's honestly just a vibe that you either feel or you don't. When I say that this show literally shaped my view of the world, I mean it, because it literally indoctrinated me at like fucking 6 or 7 years old. Like I legitimately actually thought this shit was real for a while. Like I'm not even kidding. Those new age motherfuckers are insane. My narcissism aside though, this show represents real ideas from real cultures and doesn't shy away from showing their downsides, which is not something you always get when it comes to representation. When I say that this show is a religious experience, this is what I'm talking about. I mean, not really, but it's still fucking goated. You know what I mean? Honestly, though, it's the little things, you know? There's just so much attention to detail in this show that is just genuinely impressive, and it really adds to the realism the show is going for. Whether it be dialogue that hints at something greater, small details hidden in the background, continuity nods to previous episodes, or foreshadowing for future ones, the series is just filled with tiny little details for freaks like me to dissect. So let's get into them. I'm gonna try to do this lightning round style, but just know that I will 100% go off the rails, and this will not be organized at all. Firstly, there are subtle indicators to the passage of time throughout the series. Characters' hair grows as the series progresses, and there are passive mentions of the seasons changing. Zuko and Sokka's hair are the easiest to point out since their shit gets a little unruly by the end. If you're observant enough, the twist that the king of Omashu was actually Aang's friend Bumi is hinted at quite a lot. As a child and an old man, Bumi has a lazy eye, and we see his kid version first, so it's possible that you could put two and two together if you're paying enough attention. Later during the dinner scene, it's pretty subtly alluded to that Bumi knows who Aang is, since he taunts him with meat knowing that he's a vegetarian. He also throws the meat at him knowing he'd airbend it away and reveal himself. And while this does get into fan theory territory, the fact that Bumi is one of the only opponents to be able to stand up to Aang and knows all of his tactics indicates how old he is and that he has potentially fought an airbender before. Just everything hints toward him knowing Aang, but is done so subtly that you definitely will not pick up on it on a first viewing. This next one is very specific, but did anyone else think that this background pirate with his shirt off was actually a woman with her tits out, or have I just been insane for the past 15 years? Nobody? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. When Aang is trying to get inside the fire temple to speak with Avatar Roku, he is unable to open the door because you either need 5 firebenders or a fully realized avatar in order to open it. In the final battle with Ozai, we see Aang shoot 5 balls of fire simultaneously, hinting at the fact that he is now a fully realized avatar. In The Deserter, as well as a few other episodes later on, you can see wanted posters of the Blue Spirit, who as we all know is Zuko's alter ego. It's also hinted at that the Blue Spirit might be real, with characters implying that he's some kind of urban myth. It's kind of unclear if this is because of Zuko's actions with the mask, or if the spirit actually had a reputation before then.
The Blue Spirit, he's real! Oh no, bro.
This next one is pretty well known, but in the Serpent's Pass, the cabbage merchant is denied entry to Ba Sing Se on the off chance that cabbage slugs could infect the city's ecosystem. If you pause during the shot right after the guard's platypus bear destroys his cart, you can actually see a cabbage slug fly out of the debris, meaning this bitch was kinda spitting. It's only in 19 frames, trust me, I counted, which is less than a second of screen time, so it is quite literally a blink and you'll miss it moment. The symbols of the Four Nations are seen all throughout the series on pretty much everything, and while air, water, and fire are all pretty on the nose, I've never really understood what the Earth symbol was supposed to be. But then it was pointed out to me that it's actually a badger mole. The bottom part here are its claws, while the spiral is meant to be its face. If you're an insane person like me, it also kinda looks like Goatsy. Speaking of symbols, Zuko's scar is a symbol in so many ways, and while I'll talk about that later in regards to his character, what I find interesting is that we never actually see how his father gave him the scar. The actual infliction of the wound is off-screen. Considering how the scar somewhat resembles a handprint, it's very likely that Ozai put his hand right on his face and just let fucking loose. Evidence of this can be seen throughout the series, where Zuko can't stand it when other people touch his scar, as there is without a doubt some trauma there that is yet to unpack. And speaking of scars, this one is also pretty well known, but after the Book 2 finale, Aang can be seen numerous times with a scar on the bottom of his foot. This is actually an exit wound where the lightning left his body after Azula shot him in the back. In the episode The Headband, Aang wears a school uniform and hides his arrow using a headband. He wears this all throughout Book 3, but if you notice, he's actually wearing it upside upside down. The triangle is supposed to be pointing up based on the school's logo, but his is pointing down. So even though he's hiding it, he still technically has his arrow. Nice little design choice there, I love that shit. I like how in book 3, it's implied that Zuko only recently learned the gang's names. Before then, he only ever refers to them with insults and only ever calls Aang the Avatar. It's super obvious in the Western Air Temple that he just straight up doesn't know anybody's name because he never actually uses them despite having every reason to know them. He only starts using them after this episode where they're now allies, so he kind of has to know now. You know, you kind of can't avoid it now. It's funny, but also a great way of showing how Zuko has avoided humanizing his enemies thus far, and how socially awkward it's made him. Or I'm just looking way too much into it, like a psychopath, which is probably the case. In that same episode, Aang makes reference to an all-day echo chamber somewhere in the temple.
Oh, and you're gonna love the all-day echo chamber.
I think this is neat foreshadowing for the remainder of the episode, since an echo chamber is what the gang finds themselves in when they discuss Zuko's offer. They don't want him to join, but when Aang attempts to rationalize the idea, he is shot down by his friends because they refuse to hear reason. Aang, Sokka, and Katara are keeping each other in an echo chamber by sitting around and rationalizing a decision that they've already made, while Toph seems to realize this is exactly the case. All the more reason for why Toph is absolutely fucking based. Based. Hello, base department, population, my balls. What are we doing? In the Southern Raiders, when Zuko is trying to talk to Sokka, they have this whole funny interaction where Sokka is mad horny and Suki is sneaking around his tent. It's pretty clear what's going on here. Sex. The next morning, we see Sokka crafting a necklace of some kind which bears a striking resemblance to a lei, which is a Polynesian wreath made of flowers. The implication here is that Sokka got laid and deflowered Suki. Fucking nice, dude. Let's go, dude. Hells yeah, brother. In the recap episode, Toph is portrayed as a big burly dude instead of a little girl. The implication is that when the playwright was interviewing people for research, nobody wanted to admit that they were beaten up by a little girl, so they lied and said that it was a big buff guy. Also, the playwright's name is Puan Tim, and I think that's fucking hilarious. What did Tim ever do to you? Who is Tim, and why did we Puan him? This one is also pretty well known, but in Aang's final battle with Ozai, he uses the dancing dragon technique that he learned back in the Firebending Masters. Except he does it really fast, so it's really easy to miss. Aang's new Air Nomad drip during Zuko's coronation is a clear visual callback to Monkey Gyatso and the other Air Nomad elders who wore a similar fit. This seems to represent how Aang has redeemed himself to Gyatso and the rest of his people, finally allowing himself to be the new leader of the Airbenders. Granted, there's only one of them at this point, but you know, you get the idea. Now, I don't know if you guys listen to Avatar Braving the Elements, the official podcast where Janet Varney, the voice of Korra, and Dante Bosco, the voice of Zuko, recap each episode and interview cast and crew members involved with the series. This sounds like an ad read, but I'm not sponsored, I swear. Trust me, Nickelodeon would not want to associate with me. But anyways, they have a segment / running joke on the pod called the Foreshadow Report, where they point out bits of foreshadowing present in earlier episodes. For this segment, I want to do my own little foreshadow report. I want to dedicate some of these little tidbits to just pieces of foreshadowing that I thought were interesting, because there's just so many examples, and because I'm a huge fucking dork. Fucking nerd. I feel like dork is so much meaner than nerd. I love it. Fucking dork. Like, oh, I just got stabbed by a nerd. No, I just got stabbed by a fucking dork. Fucking dork. Sounds like a slur. Right off the bat, the intro of every single episode has some pretty major foreshadowing in it. When Avatar Roku is shown during the opening narration, he is shown bending the elements in a locale made up of giant earth pillars. These bear a striking resemblance to the pillars where Aang would later fight the Firelord in the series finale. The show literally shows you where the final battle will take place from the very first episode. Also in the first episode, Aang awakes from the iceberg with a blue beam of light. He ends his final battle with the Firelord also with a blue beam of light. The Deserter begins with Aang saving Katara from a fancy firebending move called Taming the Dragon. This seems to foreshadow how later in the episode, Aang's recklessness with firebending accidentally burns Katara. This also serves to demonstrate the purpose of this episode, which was to teach Aang to tame the dragon, as it were, when it comes to his eagerness to firebend. In the Northern Air Temple, there is a brief shot where we can see schematics of the drill, which implies that it was the mechanist who developed it. In Zuko Alone, the first flashback showing Zuko and his mother has Ursa saying this line.
Zuko, that's what moms are like. If you mess with their babies, they're gonna bite you back.
This foreshadows what she later does in the episode, which is negotiating to spare Zuko's life at the cost of her own. The show doesn't actually provide much context for this, it's more so in the comics, but regardless, it still makes sense given the subtext. When talking to the Earth King while disguised as the Kyoshi warriors, Azula mentions how you can't trust the people closest to you. In the background, Meg and Ty Lee are seen glancing at each other, foreshadowing how they would later betray Azula in the Boiling Rock. While I don't think that these two are thinking about double-crossing her quite yet, it's certainly an interesting visual cue for the audience to keep an eye on these two. In the puppet master, Hama's backstory has a rather dark implication. When she breaks out of prison using bloodbending, it causes the Fire Nation to deem waterbenders too dangerous to keep alive, which potentially explains why Katara's mother was killed instead of captured. The implication is that Hama indirectly caused the death of Katara's mother, giving her yet another reason to hate bloodbending. The reason this is foreshadowing is because when we later see Katara's recounting of the day her mother died, it gives things a whole new meaning. It could be interpreted that they were looking for an escaped Hama. It's also worthy of noting that Katara willingly uses bloodbending in the Southern Raiders despite swearing it off as evil, which I think is meant to be a little cinematic breadcrumb to connect these two ideas. And speaking of special bending, metal bending is joked about all throughout the series, even as early as Book 1, which obviously comes to fruition at the end of Book 2. I think all the instances of this are pretty obvious, so I'm not going to bore you with the details, but you know. Come on, motherfucker. You motherfucking know. Come on, bro. You motherfucker get A's, bro. I mentioned earlier that early Book 2 features a lot of foreshadowing for Toph's introduction, but even earlier than that, we get a good idea of Bumi's philosophy and thereby Toph's philosophy when it comes to earthbending. In The King of Omashu, Bumi chastises Aang's tactics of avoiding and evading, claiming that he'll have to face things head-on eventually. The purpose of the episode is to force Aang to think from a different perspective, which foreshadows how he would later learn earthbending with Toph. But it also foreshadows how he'll defeat the Firelord by thinking outside the box. The Ember Island Players is the final episode before the finale, and while it's mostly a fun meta look back at the adventures thus far, the play actually goes beyond the present, showing us a propagandized version of the fated final battle. While the events shown in the play obviously do not happen, they leave out a crucial piece of the puzzle. In the play, Aang did not have his friends to help him out. In reality, he does, and that's how the day is truly won. That, and nobody could have predicted a fucking eldritch being rising from the depths, but you get the idea. By showing a version of events in which the gang loses, they are able to rethink their approach, and that's ultimately how they win. The White Lotus is teased all throughout the series as well. It's most clearly hinted at and mentioned in Book 2, but even in Book 1 there are subtle hints of it as well. It's implied that Monkey Yatso was somehow a part of it by his use of the Lotus tile against Aang, and Iroh is seen playing Pai Sho all the time, with the plot of an entire episode revolving around hunting down a Lotus tile. Iroh even claims that its value is underrated, which is a nod to the idea that it's definitely going to be important later. And now for another segment, because I'm still not done with this shit, let's talk about some firsts and lasts. Every season begins with Aang waking up in some way. In Book 1, it's obviously waking up from the iceberg, though in fairness there is also some stuff that happens before then, so sure, whatever, if you want to stretch it. In Book 2, he's awakened by a nightmare about the Avatar state, and in Book 3, he awakes from his coma after being killed by Azula. He also wakes up at the very end of Book 2, and the shot when he wakes up and looks at Katara mirrors the shot when the two first met. The first and last enemies that Katara fights are both frozen in ice. She freezes this random firebender by accident, and later displays extreme control over her abilities by freezing Azula and moving around in her own ice. What an absolute glow-up. Sokka's first big battle is defending his home from Zuko's ship, which he pretty clearly loses. In the finale, he takes out like 8 fucking airships, and that's gotta count for something. The first shot of the series shows a sunrise, symbolizing the beginning, and the last shot shows a sunset, symbolizing the end. Excluding the intro, the first proper line of dialogue spoken in the show is,
"It's not getting away from me this time."
The last line of dialogue in the finale is,
"Well, I think you all look perfect."
The first and last words of the show are, "It's perfect. I'm gay." When it comes to the little things though, I'm the kind of guy who, even on my fucking, 5 millionth rewatch, there are moments where I just need to bask in the vibes. The entrance to the Northern Water Tribe was an absolute game changer for the series, honestly. The everything is connected scene is fucking ethereal to me, dude. That's literally my religion. Zuko joining the group and that whole final stretch of episodes just has a particular vibe to it. I think the entirety of Zuko alone could probably be considered a whole ass vibe. Zuko's speech to Ozai during the invasion, now that's just some real firebender right there. He's spitting some fucking heat. Anytime there's some cinematic shot like this or this, it just fills me with serotonin. So that's all fine and dandy, but can we talk for a second about some of the more badass moments in this show? And I'm not even talking fight scenes, right? I'm talking moments with such big dick energy that I get hard as fuck every single time. When Roku appears to Zhong and hits him with that,
"You think I am weak?"
Fucking goated, bro. When Aang goes Avatar State of the North Pole,
No, it's not over.
I get literal fucking chills every time, I'm not kidding. Kyoshi pulling up,
I killed Chin the Conqueror.
Like, dude, that is a badass bitch right there. Anytime Aang speaks in the Avatar state just fucks me up, dude. Like, I'm down, I'm in, I'm fucking ready, bro. We are so back. There are just so many lines that gets me in this show, man. When Aang cries after seeing the birth of baby Hope, he hits us with this absolute heat.
I've been going through a really hard time lately, but you've made me hopeful again.
Dude, I need a fucking hug, bro.
Do you really think friendships can last more than one lifetime?
Bro, I'm literally fucking crying, bro. Why would you do this to me? Of course, you really can't top Leaves from the Vine. That just objectively needs to be mentioned in this conversation. Appa's sad moan as they fly away from the invasion isn't even words, but it just fucks me up. Very underrated in my opinion. Even when there is a lack of dialogue, the shit still fucks me up. When Katara gets Aang to calm down from the Avatar state without either of them saying a word, and the episode just ends with him crying in her lap, dog, I'm fucking crying too, bro. Appa's return has this mix of hype and relief that just brings a tear to my eye. Katara just breaking down at the end of the Puppet Master always gets me. And dude, that part in the finale after Aang wins and uses the Avatar state to fix the damage while the music just swells in the background is just super underrated, man. There's just so many moments in the show that instill so many different emotions, some even back to back, and it really goes to show how versatile the show really is. Of course, the reason why Avatar resonates with people isn't just because its story is iconic or the world building goes deep, but because it has such a robust, complex, and realistic cast of fun and endearing characters. A pretty sizable chunk of this video is going to be dedicated to fully analyzing every single main character, and because they are all so deep, we're gonna be here for a while. If you thought the first few sections of this video were long, then you were in for a fucking doozy, my friend. Avatar, a show so good that even an excessively long video essay can't keep shit brief. Like I said, we're gonna be here for a while, so grab yourself a snack and a glass of orange juice, and try not to reach through the screen because here we go!
Why didn't you tell us you were the Avatar?
Because I never wanted to be. I wasn't there when the Fire Nation attacked my people. I'm gonna make a difference this time. Anyone's capable of great good and great evil. We're all connected. Everything is connected.
The Avatar is back!
Our first character of the day is the guy who makes the title of this show make any fucking sense, the titular Avatar and the Last Airbender, Aang. The show introduces us to Aang with his awakening after being frozen in an iceberg for 100 years, and we soon find out that he is actually the Avatar, destined to master all 4 elements and bring balance to the world. Did we mention that he's 12? Jeffrey Epstein be like. Over the course of the series, Aang slowly learns and masters water, earth, and firebending, and by the end of his journey is able to defeat the Firelord, bring balance to the world, and become the Avatar that he was destined to be, even if he never wanted to be. Why am I telling you all this? You already know this. Why you even waste your waste of fucking space? I think the simplest way to describe Aang's character is that he is a carefree kid who must learn to be responsible. It's pretty damn simple when you boil it down like that, but I feel like a lot of people underestimate Aang's character for this exact reason. It's a simple and easy to understand arc, yet there's way more to it than people seem to realize. The divide between Aang's carefree personality and his duties as the Avatar is a really important, yet I think criminally underused aspect of his character. You know, it's there and it's obvious, most notably in the series premiere and the series finale, but it kind of fades into the background between them, and many indicators of this are much more subtle. Aside from when it's being directly addressed, there are numerous moments in which Aang puts off his responsibilities in favor of preserving his own happiness. We all know that he never wanted to be the Avatar, and though he makes the conscious choice to fulfill that responsibility, he will almost always put his own personal happiness above that. For instance, in The Fortune Teller, Aang is more curious about what his love life entails rather than what big world-changing things he'll do in his life. When he loses Appa in the desert, he does some things that are very unlike him, but he does them because he wants his oldest friend back, and that's disturbing his happiness. A good chunk of Book 1 is made up of detours that Aang takes on his journey to the North Pole because he'd rather be having fun instead. He'd rather live a happy, peaceful life, but because of this great power that he was unwillingly born into, he can never really have that. Aang finally grows up when he finds a way to combine those two things, where the only way to achieve the peace he so desires is also to fulfill his destiny. It really is a coming-of-age story in many ways, where Aang must put aside his childhood in order to fulfill the responsibility thrust upon him, even though he doesn't want it.
I don't really feel like it.
As the only airbender in a show called The Last Airbender, crazy concept I know, Aang is intentionally written to be the pinnacle of what airbenders are supposed to be. For the other 3 nations, we get a good idea of what the average person is like, but outside of flashbacks, we don't ever get to see what the airbenders were truly like. So of course, Aang is written to be as airbender as humanly possible to constantly remind the audience what airbenders are like and how they reflect their element. Airbenders are spiritual, peaceful, free, and fun-loving. Aang is also all of those things, arguably more so than most other airbenders. In fact, he's actually the youngest airbender to ever become a master, which he achieved by inventing the air scooter, not only displaying his aptitude for the element, but also his devotion to his culture. A culture that no longer exists because of the war. Of course, Aang is the last airbender, since the rest of his people were slaughtered by the Fire Nation during Sozin's Comet, kicking off the 100-Year War. As the last of his kind, Aang bears the weight of all air nomad culture on his shoulders alongside the fate of the whole world. He now has a responsibility to preserve his people and their teachings, and part of that is due to a sense of guilt. Aang happened to run away from home and freeze himself right before the genocide of his people, so he wasn't there to fight back and possibly make a difference in the matter. He feels guilty for his selfish decision getting him out of Dodge while the rest of his people suffered, and because of the love he had for his people, it cuts extra deep. It cuts extra deep when you realize that he left on pretty bad terms with the elders and without giving Monkey Yatso a proper goodbye. This was not just an event, but the event that shapes Aang's character in relation to his culture and his views on being the Avatar. He has to deal with the fact that he, Appa, and Momo are all that is left of the Airbenders. One of the darkest times in Aang's life is when Appa goes missing. He loses one of the only things left of his culture, causing him to feel unbelievable anger, sadness, and eventually nothing at all. To deal with this loss, he makes the best of his current situation, as you can't change the past and you can't restore the lives that were lost, but you can make things right now by embodying their ideals and spreading their teachings all over again.
I'm an airbender. I've been the air sometimes.
All of Aang's problems come to a head in the Book 2 finale, more specifically the final 2 episodes with the Guru and the Crossroads of Destiny. At this point, we've seen Aang go through all kinds of anguish after losing Appa, but now that he's finally back and the gang is back together and they've got the Earth King on their side for the invasion, things are looking on the up and up. He takes advantage of this moment of peace to learn to master the Avatar state with Guru Patik. I already talked about the thematic stuff with this earlier, but character-wise, this is one of the best Aang episodes. We literally see this kid deal with all of his remaining trauma, all his fear, guilt, shame, and everything in between, even coming to terms with the loss of his people. This episode honestly recontextualizes Aang in a lot of ways, because we don't often think of him as like this, tortured soul or whatever, but he's got a lot going on in that bald head of his, and he's pretty damn good at hiding it. They call back to events in previous episodes that haven't been mentioned in a long time, so it's kinda easy to forget that some of this stuff affected him the way that it did. Burning Katara and swearing off firebending hadn't been mentioned since the episode in which it occurred, and we've never quite seen him open up about his fears about facing the Firelord. This episode displays how mature Aang truly is for his age, since he is able to compartmentalize and properly deal with these inner demons in a way that leaves him more fulfilled with his life. But anyways, he goes through this whole spiritual process, but after learning that in order to open up the final chakra, he needs to let go of his love for Katara, he refuses and storms off. He learns that Katara is in trouble and reunites with everybody to save her. This then leads into the season finale. It's made quite clear that the Avatar state is meant to be a reflection of Aang's mental state, and this is most clearly seen throughout Book 2, which begins with Aang trying to manually unlock this power, but he determines that he can only do so when he is in real mortal danger or extreme emotional distress. There is no healthy way for him to use it yet, indicating that he is not yet ready for it. Fast forward to the Guru, where Aang tries to learn to master the Avatar state, this time in a healthy way, but he is again unable to because of his feelings for Katara. This comes to a head in the finale, where Aang makes the choice to let Katara go to enter the Avatar state and is swiftly punished for it. I also find it very interesting that every time the Avatar state is used in this season, it is always related to Katara in some way. The first time in Book 2, it's activated when Aang thinks Katara has been hurt or killed, so he goes sicko mode. The next time in the desert, Katara is the one to calm Aang down and bring him out of the Avatar state. And of course, in the finale, Aang's connection to Katara is directly tied to his mastery over the power. His great power and his love for her cannot seem to coexist, which puts him in a really interesting place for the remainder of the series.
Psych!
You just got zapped! Jokes aside though, it is not at all a coincidence that the literal moment that Aang goes against what he believes to be right, he literally fucking dies. As Iroh told him in that very episode, he made the right choice by choosing love over power, so choosing power in this instance was literally going against his own morals. At the crossroads of his destiny, he made the wrong choice, and it cost him his life. Luckily though, the love on the other side of that choice was strong enough to give him a second chance.
Bitch, I'm back on my coma.
After being revived with magic spirit water, Aang awakens to find that the whole world thinks that he is dead. He does not fucking like this. He hates not being able to help and feels that he has failed the world by losing at Ba Sing Se. He tries to take matters into his own hands by fighting the Firelord on his own in an effort to restore the honor he'd lost at that day in the catacombs. He accepted this responsibility and he fumbled it in arguably the worst way possible. After a pep talk from Roku and Yue, he realizes that it is okay to fail. It's even okay to feel shame over failing, but that he doesn't have to do this alone. He will always have have his friends to back him up, and there's more honor in that than there is in winning a battle. This perfectly contrasts Zuko, who at this point in the story is in the exact opposite position, but we'll get to that later. For the most part, that's kind of it for Aang, but in the series finale, he gets one last little moment of character growth. When presented with the moral conundrum of having to go against his non-violent ways and kill the Firelord, Aang is desperate for any way to stay true to his ideals while still accomplishing his goal. He refuses to take a life, as it is in his nature as an air nomad to respect all life, but at the same time he also knows that killing him is probably the safest option in saving the world. And side note, I know it's a common meme to point out how hypocritical Aang's dilemma is here, because while he expresses no desire to kill, there have been moments throughout the show where Aang does shit that could be easily interpreted as having killed people. I know, funny, haha, compilation, whatever the fuck, but as a man of the meme, I get it, but like, come the fuck on. We all know he has never knowingly killed anybody. Avatar state moments like this don't count since he is not in control of his actions, and in funny magic cartoon land where crackers can lift rocks with their mind and fall 2,000 feet and live, a guy getting blown down by a pressurized gust of wind ain't exactly a death blow. Aang has never, of his own volition, caused the death of another living being. Anyways, that's not the point. The point is, everybody wants him to kill this guy. His friends are telling him to do it, his past lives are telling him to do it, or they just tell him nothing of value. The whole world probably wants him to do it, but even when everybody is telling him to end another man's life and go against his moral code, Aang looks for any reason not to do it. Not a reason to avoid his responsibilities, but a way to fulfill his destiny and stay true to himself at the same time, when those two things are directly contradictory. Aang spends the majority of this finale looking for a solution to this impossible problem. And you know what? He does. I know it's kind of a common criticism that the lion turtle basically gives him the solution through energy bending, and in many ways that's totally fair. We discussed that a bit earlier.
Yeah, we did this already. That's what's so fucked up.
But at the same time, I find that many who make this criticism often miss the point of what it truly means for Aang. While sure, the lion turtle does give him the solution in a literal sense, it wasn't the ability itself that won the day. Aang simply having energy bending would not have allowed him to take the Firelord's bending. He could only do that if his own spirit was unbendable, or in other words, if he was dedicated enough to sticking to his guns and ideals no matter what the world told him. Energy bending is an analogy for Aang refusing to take the options given to him and reaffirming to him that there was always another way. The last time he reluctantly did the thing he didn't want to do for the greater good, it literally got him killed. But in his final battle, he is doing things on his own terms, and it ends up being one of his greatest acts as the Avatar. In being true to himself, he fulfills his destiny as the Avatar, two things that at the start seemed incredibly contradictory. In order to bring balance to the world, Aang first needed to bring balance to himself, and that is really what won the war. While Aang doesn't have the craziest character development out there, he ironically has some of the least development in his own show, the moral of his story is that your personal happiness and your personal beliefs should never take a backseat to your responsibilities, no matter how important those responsibilities might be. No matter the tragedies he experienced, no matter the feelings of unrequited love, no matter the weight of the world and his entire culture on his shoulders, and no matter how many times the world straight up told him to go fuck himself, he never let any of it break him, and he stayed true to who he was and what he believed in, and that's what truly makes him a legend. Quirked up Avatar with a little bit of genocidal trauma, busted down airbending style, is he goated with the sauce?
Niggas water whipping in a hot damn kitchen like a nigga Avatar or Katara for pimpin' high top.
If Aang serves to show the audience what the ideal airbender is and what airbender culture is like, then the rest of the main cast would also naturally be designed as representations of what their respective elements represent in their respective cultures. Representing water, the element of change, is Katara. One of the most admirable qualities of this water-whipping badass is her ability to turn her pain into strength, which is more or less the gist of her arc. The core thing that shapes who Katara is and strives to be is the untimely death of her mother at the hands of the Fire Nation. Though we only ever see her once in the entire show in one of the final episodes, the way that Katara describes her mother from the very beginning gives you a pretty good idea of how much she meant to her. Much like how Sokka strives to be like his father, Katara strives to be like her mother. She is caring and protective, all qualities you'd find in a mother, and Katara admires those qualities.
She's attractive and is the size of an average human mother.
But with the death of her mother, that meant that somebody would have to step up and take her place both in her family and for the rest of the village, and that person would end up being Katara. At such a young age, she was essentially forced into a motherly role in her household, and this carries over into her personality as she grows up. She's very caring and nurturing and always wants the best for those she loves, even if that means blowing up at them. Helping people is just second nature to her, and she does it in honor of her mother. But to shift gears a bit, and bear with me because this is vaguely related, Katara is a character who will always fight for what's right, even if what she's fighting for starts off with some rather selfish motivations. And I don't mean selfish in a negative context necessarily, because I think that Katara can be described as selfishly selfless, if that makes any sense. She is selfless to a fault, as she holds too much pride in helping others that any attempt to take that away from her just drives her to want to do it more. She helps people out of the goodness of her own heart, and she gets some kind of gratification from it, and because she loves that feeling so much, she can act rather selfishly to feel it. She acts selfish by being selfless, and there are a few examples of this throughout the series. The first is the episode Imprisoned, in which Katara sneaks into a Fire Nation prison in order to help Haru and a bunch of earthbending prisoners. She sneaks in with the intention of grabbing Haru and getting out, but when she finds all the other people that are suffering there, she makes it her goal to save everybody, much to Sokka's chagrin. She feels so strongly about helping these people and inspiring hope in them that it would just feel wrong for her to leave them like this, even when Tyro and the other prisoners seem to be fine with it at first. These people do not want to be saved, but she will not take no for an answer. It is her persistence on not giving up hope in spite of this hopeless situation that inspires the prisoners to finally rise up. Katara was able to find hope in her darkest times, so it's only natural that she wants to inspire others to feel that hope as well. Another obvious example of this is in The Painted Lady, where she essentially does the same thing. She comes across people who are suffering and tries to help them by any means that she can, and refuses to leave until she's helped everyone. However, this time she's a lot more sneaky about it by tricking her friends in order to stick around, since by this point they're probably sick of her shit. Sokka essentially tells her that she cannot save everyone, but motherfucker, she's gonna goddamn try. She is so dead set on helping these people that she deceives her friends and brings more potential harm to the village in order to do so. Her willingness to help almost backfires on her and does more harm than good, but she also realizes that she can't help everyone alone. Emphasis on alone, because she can help everyone with the help of her friends. She needs help to give help, and I think there's something in that. But I think that a very underrated example of Katara's selfish selflessness comes from Book 1's The Waterbending Master. In this episode, Katara is turned away from learning waterbending by Master Pakku, since the Northern Water Tribe's culture does not allow women to learn waterbending for combat. Katara is understandably furious about this and makes efforts to learn in other ways, which eventually backfires. This comes to a head when she challenges Pakku to a fight, which she clearly only does in order to vent her frustration. This whole fight is basically all for her own gratification, but in fighting Pakku, she essentially changed the Northern Water Tribe's entire culture by becoming Pakku's student. She unknowingly helped everybody by helping herself, and I'd like to think she's pretty proud of that. This actually leads into an interesting tangent regarding Katara though, her healing abilities and the irony of that. After being burned by Aang, Katara learns that she has the ability to heal wounds using waterbending, and it's a power she seems to take pride in. She has yet another way to help people, which she loves. But it's kind of ironic that she gets mad about this at the Northern Water Tribe because it's something that she loves doing, but at the same time, she's the type of person who knows what she wants and where she's needed most. She likes having the ability to heal, but she didn't come here to learn to heal. She came to learn to fight. Her desire to not be seen as the weak little girl she's felt like her whole life overrides her desire to help people, and I think it's interesting how her priorities change. She wants to learn to fight so that she can help more people and be on par with her peers, so again, she's being selfishly selfless. It's great that she is able to inspire people and help the world heal, both literally and metaphorically, but her upbringing also had a few negative side effects. She had to grow up a little bit too fast, and through some of her more jovial actions, you can see that she does want to act like a kid again, but she really can't because that time has long passed, and for that she seems to hold a bit of resentment. She was essentially robbed of a normal, happy childhood and a normal family life, so she holds a bit of resentment toward her mother's death. She harbors anger at her father for years for leaving the village at such a vulnerable time for their family, and naturally desires revenge on the man who took her mother away, as one typically would. The former is resolved rather quickly by having an open conversation with her father. Hakoda is so fucking wholesome, bro. He just loves his kids so much. I fucking love it. What a fucking legend. Anyways, back to Katara. The latter source of anger, though, is the man who killed her mother, which of course leads her to want revenge, which comes to a head in the iconic episode, The Southern Raiders. I mentioned this episode briefly earlier, but I haven't even scratched the surface yet. While we've seen throughout the series that Katara is constantly reminded of her mother's death and holds her memory very close to her heart, both literally and metaphorically, we have never seen her become viscerally mad about it. The closest we've gotten was back in the catacombs of Ba Sing Se, but that was more so anger at Zuko, not so much the killer. This episode begins quite similarly to that. She takes her anger out on Zuko, but this anger becomes much more focused when she learns that Zuko can help her find the killer. Knowing that there is even a chance to get revenge on this guy causes Katara to be able to channel her rage, which shows the audience a side of her that we really haven't seen before. We've seen Katara get mad and we've seen her be determined, but neither to this degree. I've seen people claim that Katara acts a bit out of character in this episode, and I both agree and disagree. She does act very uncharacteristically angry and cruel, but that's kind of the point. She's so emotionally distraught by all of this that she would do things like bloodbend a guy after swearing it off, or say to Sokka something as awful as this.
Then you didn't love her the way I did.
Katara!
This is something that means so much to her for so many reasons that of course she'll go off the deep end to get closure for it. Seeing this kind and mild-mannered girl go crazy psycho-sicko mode is prime juxtaposition and it really demonstrates her pain in a way we've never seen from her before. Now let's fast forward to the climax of the episode. Katara's decision to spare her mother's killer is one of the defining moments of her character, as I'm sure we all know, but in more ways than one. Despite having every reason to kill this guy in retaliation, she chooses not to for several reasons. The first is pretty obvious, since she literally says it during that scene. She sees how shitty this guy's life is and realizes that killing him would just be doing him a favor. He is a pathetic old man who hates his life, and I'd probably want to die too if I were him. Well, I want to die now, but that's beside the point. Anyways, the second reason is that Katara knows deep down that this just isn't her. She is not a killer. While she is more than capable of ending this man's life, she'd just be doing to someone else what he did to her, and that just continues the cycle of violence. You know, we don't know a whole lot about Kaya, but I doubt that she'd want to see her daughter impaling dudes with fucking icicles. And I don't say this in a cliche Batman kind of way, right? The whole like, oh, if you kill a killer, the number of killers stays the same. You're just as bad as them. You know, that type beat. But when you think about it, what would killing him really solve? If anything, it would just create more problems for herself by now having to live with this new part of herself that would cement her from being the kind yet strong person she strives so hard to be. She says at the end of the episode that the reason she didn't go through with killing him was because
I don't know if it's because I'm too weak to do it, or if it's because I'm strong enough not to.
But knowing what we know about Katara, I am inclined to believe it was the latter. Katara is a character who turns her pain into strength. And while revenge killing this guy might feel cathartic to some degree, it's not gonna bring her mom back, and it certainly won't make the pain go away. And I think Katara knew that deep down in this moment. Nothing can make that pain go away, but as long as that pain is present, she can channel it into bettering herself and the world around her so that what happened to her doesn't have to happen to anyone else ever again. Shifting gears a bit, many characters have important symbols associated with them, like Zuko's scarf for example. And for Katara, this symbol is her mother's necklace that she wears all throughout the series. It represents various facets of Katara's character. In being something owned by her mother, it is a way of keeping her memory close to her chest. Like, literally. The primary meaning of the necklace is that it's Katara's only thing left of her mother, so it's her way of feeling connected to her. Whenever she thinks of her, she reaches for it. And it's to the point where she takes great sadness in ever having to take it off. As we later find out, this necklace was originally made by Master Pakku to solidify his engagement with Kana, who we know as Gran Gran. The history of the necklace ties her family to her culture. Pakku taught her waterbending, which brings her closer to it, and now that he's technically family, her family is now tied to the pinnacle of the element. Culturally, it also represents how Katara was able to rise above the social norms of this culture, and like we discussed earlier, brought great change to it. The betrothal necklace is intended as a symbol of engagement to a man, but Katara wears it as a family heirloom, showing that she does not care for its original intention because its original intention was backwards and stupid, as seen with both Pakku and Yue's stories. It's portrayed as, and is, a negative thing to be forced into an arranged marriage with a person you do not love. So by Katara wearing her necklace the way that she does, she is essentially saying that she does not owe her allegiance to any man. Now this is a girl boss, and that's why we love her. But to sum this up, like I said, Katara is a character who turns her pain into strength. The waterbending is her main shtick. Her true power is the ability to inspire hope in others. This is something that often gets memed on in the community. The show itself even pokes fun at this, but I don't think the show is even really that heavy-handed with it. Katara was actually one of the hardest characters for me to write this section for while writing this video, and I've seen the show more times than most, so I think I know what I'm talking about. So the fact that it was difficult for me, I think, is really saying something, but I think that largely goes to how her growth is a lot more subtle, save for the few episodes where it's on full display. She's not a difficult character to understand at her core, but to really get a full sense of her complexity, you have to dive a little bit deeper. There was probably a water pun to be made there, but I am not going to be the one to do it. Do not mistake her kindness for weakness, because the second you do is the second she kicks your fucking ass. Quirked up hair loopy with a little bit of spirit water, bust it down waterbending style, is she goated with the sauce. The other person who first greets Aang after he awakens from his 100-year slumber is the guy we all know and love. It's your boy, Sokka. It rhymes with an aka. Young ladies, I rock ya.
That's called motherfucking bars, nigga!
I know it's kind of redundant to call him a fan favorite character in a show where every character is a fan favorite, but this dude's presence alone just elevates the show in so many ways. Sokka is such a versatile character that the writers were really able to play around with, because while he is the de facto comic relief of the cast, he also has the same level of character depth as anyone else, and neither of those things detract from the other in any way. In fact, I would argue that they enhance each other. He's a character whose growth honestly goes underappreciated, and I'm here to put some respect on his name. Not that he needs it, but you get the vibe, fuck you. One thing is made very clear very early on. Sokka's a bit of a goofy guy. I've got a wacky
dad,
Sokka.
goofy guy.
He's the obvious comic relief of the group, with his sarcastic demeanor allowing for some so bad it's funny one-liners, and his bad luck resulting in some classic slapstick funny ha-has. Sokka being as funny as he is great, since it's comic relief for a show that without it would be pretty bleak all things considered. But as we all know, the saddest people... I forgot I wrote that. But as we all know, the saddest people come the hardest. So it should be of no surprise that in a show with such realistic characters, that Sokka's constant wisecracking is indicative of some deeper emotional problems that he has yet to confront. While moments like the iconic cactus juice bit will lead you to believe that the character is just here for epic meme faces and shit, Sokka is actually a character plagued by his insecurities, of which he has a few, some that he doesn't even know about at first. I think another important thing to note is that though he is not a bender, Sokka represents another crucial part of the Water Tribe, their warriors' pride. How this pride affects his views on what it means to be a warrior and as a man is the crux of his arc. The key thing to appreciate about Sokka's character is that his views of the world change throughout the series, and he's one of the only characters to do so this blatantly. At first, this all manifests itself in a lot of chauvinistic ideals that he only really believes because of his culture and his own misunderstandings of it. His belief in the nobility of being a strong warrior, his admiration of his father, and the general gender roles of Water Tribe culture shaped him into a guy who, though he doesn't really mean anything by it, is kind of misogynistic. And I don't say this with any buzzword bullshit meaning. Like, this ain't some dumb bitch on Tumblr calling everything problematic, right? It's just part of his character, right? As early as the 4th episode, Sokka's misogynistic ideals that he doesn't really know that he has are put to the test. After being beaten by Suki multiple times, he humbles himself and allows himself to be trained by her. And while this results in some funny cross-dressing antics, it ultimately does show us how Sokka slowly starts to realize that women can be just as capable as men, and in a way where the show isn't talking down to the audience. Sokka just kind of naturally comes to this conclusion without the show making a big deal out of it, right? He grows a genuine respect for Suki and the other warriors, and thereby gains respect for women and other cultures as a whole.
I'm sorry, women.
I also think it's very important to see how his relationships develop over the course of the series in this regard. First, he gets with Princess Yue, literally the bad bitch he pulled by being goofy. This is his first real romantic encounter, and it's clear he has no fucking clue what he's doing. You'd think that he would default on his tribe's customs of forcing women into arranged marriages, but due to having a wider perspective from his travels, namely his humbling experience with Suki, he doesn't treat her that way. He treats Yue as a person whom he truly cares about, not a prize to be won. After it's revealed that Yue is engaged to somebody else, Sokka is still open to continuing their relationship, even if it is just as friends, showing that he's capable of being platonic friends with a girl other than his own sister. However, his later failure to protect Yue eats away at him, which then affects the way he treats Suki the next time she comes around. He's very overprotective, but realizes that he shouldn't be, because 1, that's not who Suki is, she is a bad bitch who don't need no man, 2, that what happened at the North Pole wasn't his fault and it was Yue's decision, and 3, that to act like this would be to revert back to the guy he was before he met Suki, who viewed women as weak and needing protection. His first interaction with Suki shapes his relationship with Yue, which in turn shapes his next interaction with Suki, culminating in them making it official. It just comes full circle. Plus, side note on this topic, Sokka's a loyal guy. Even when Ty Lee hits on him, he still denies her advances because he's with Suki, even though it's been established that he has at least some interest in her. An absolute gentleman, an absolute Chad, if you will. On the inverse though, Sokka is also pretty xenophobic, specifically against the Fire Nation, and while completely understandable given his circumstances, it sticks around for a lot longer than some of the other ideals that he grows out of. While he clearly understands that there are innocent people from the Fire Nation who have nothing to do with the war, there are still moments where he dehumanizes his enemies, though it's unclear as to if he truly believes that or not. There are moments when he does, and moments when he doesn't. It's kind of inconsistent. As early as Book 1, he is seen caring about innocent Fire Nation civilians, but as late as Book 3, with the gang's entrance to the Fire Nation, it's shown that he still has a rather shallow view of its people. He seems to unironically believe that every Fire Nation citizen is just like Ozai or his soldiers, so he doesn't trust anything around him. While this is played for laughs, and in fairness, it is pretty funny, it does illustrate that Sokka still does not view his enemies as people. While he does see the value in people from the Fire Nation, respecting Master P and Down and acknowledging that Zuko is changed, he still harbors some generalizations toward them that even in the finale, he doesn't seem to have grown out of, and if he did, it was certainly not addressed. I think that, in his heart of hearts, Sokka doesn't actually think that everyone in the Fire Nation is bad, he just says that as a way of convincing himself that his actions are noble, and of course, for comedy. Because let's be honest, racism is kind of funny sometimes. I've noticed that a lot of the humor that comes from Sokka's ignorance is often unintentional on his part, since he'll often be saying shit that could be deemed as offensive, and he realizes it like right away and then panics, but even when it is intentional, he's never mean-spirited about it, which I think shows that he really does not have any hate in his heart. In fact, Sokka actually learns all of the non-bending fighting styles from each of the 4 nations, showing that he is open to learning things from new cultures, no doubt influenced by his curious mind. Of course, he's a Water Tribe native, so that much is obvious, but he also learns some moves from Suki, representing the Earth Kingdom. He learns the way of the sword from Master Piandao in the Fire Nation, and he embraces the creativity of the Airbenders to invent the war balloon and win through an indirect confrontation. He's a pretty cultured guy, even if he doesn't act like it sometimes. But above all else, and bringing this back to the topic at hand, Sokka's primary insecurity that drives almost all of his actions stems from his relationship with his father.
What's your relationship like with your father?
As we learn throughout the series, Sokka has always looked up to his father and strives to be just like him, viewing his act of going to war as the bravest act one could do. As a child, Sokka wants to go to war as well, but is clearly too young and is left to watch over the village. He obviously takes this to heart, so he takes this last request to protect the village and makes it his entire purpose in life. He seems to become overtaken by this task as a way of compensating for not being able to be a man the way that he thinks he should. Then we fast forward a bit, and Sokka finally has the opportunity to reunite with his dad. The entire time, he tries to prove himself to be just as capable as the rest of the men, but what he didn't consider is that to his father and his people at large, he already is a man. He's already gained their respect by protecting the village in their stead and helping the Avatar save the world, and he realizes that he's gotten his own culture all wrong. What Sokka learns is that he doesn't need to prove himself, as there is more than one way to gain the respect of your people. His culture does place value on masculinity, but being a man doesn't mean just doing manly things. It means doing what needs to be done for the betterment of your people. Sokka became a man the day his father entrusted him with the safety of the village. He just didn't realize it until he grew up a little. However, this doesn't end here, because even after being acknowledged as an equal, Sokka still carries a level of insecurity that stems from his admiration of his father, specifically in regards to leadership.
I'm the oldest, and I'm a warrior, so I'm the leader.
This is best seen during the invasion. Before the battle, Sokka fumbles while going over the plan, to which Hakoda takes over and crushes it like the Chad that he is. This is a major blow to Sokka's ego, since after all this planning, he can't even explain his own plan to people and then proceeds to make a fool out of himself. His dad had to bail him out like a child, which I would say is pretty emasculating. Sokka feels that he's just playing second fiddle to his dad and that he can't live up to that level of leadership. Aang helps reassure him that just because his dad is good at something doesn't mean that he isn't good at anything, and that there are other ways to make a difference and lead. Fast forward to during the battle, and Hakoda is injured and is unable to lead, prompting Sokka to take control of the troops, even managing to get them where they need to be for the plan to work. It's in this moment that Sokka realizes that he was always just as capable of being a leader as his dad is. The ability to be a leader, not just in war, but in general, comes from your ability to guide people to where they are needed most, but more importantly, is to inspire people to do what they need to do. By guiding the troops to change formations and win this phase of the battle, he boosts everybody's morale, which then makes everyone fight even better. Without his leadership in the situation, the invasion force would not have gotten as far as they did. But even then, Sokka is still not satisfied. When the invasion fails and everybody left behind is imprisoned, Sokka makes it his mission to rescue his father as a way to atone for his failure. Even when my guy wins, he still feels like he loses. Well, I mean, he didn't win the invasion, but you knew what I meant. Anyways, the point here is that Sokka feels that even when he fucks up, it's his responsibility as a man to make it right. He feels like he let his father down, so he goes to extreme lengths to make it up to him, even if he really doesn't have to. This is actually an instance of Sokka being right about his views of manliness from the get-go, rather than having his views changed. In fact, it's actually the other way around, as Sokka's insistence on helping his father is seen as stupid and risky, but he goes through with it regardless because it's the right thing to do, and he even changes a few minds by doing so. He will not rest until he fixes what he perceives as his mistake, and that's the manliest thing of all, right next to eating steak and having sex.
Sex with men.
Character development aside though, Sokka's ingenuity is part of what makes him such a great leader, since he is able to come up with plans on the spot and even invent never-before-seen contraptions to aid in those plans. His intelligence often comes in stark contrast to his generally goofy nature, but I think that's quite fitting in the sense that if Sokka were not as macho as he is, he would totally be a mad scientist like the Mechanist. This dude helped invent war balloons, which have become a staple in the Avatar universe. He single-handedly invented submarines. He came up with the entire invasion plan on his own after seeing one eclipse, and this plan was only thwarted by the use of his own invention. The motherfucker created a unique sleek space sword and was praised by Master Piandao for his creativity. He manages to think of not one, but 2 escape plans from the most secure prison in the Fire Nation, the second of which actually worked, and the first of which would have worked had Chit Sang not been a dumbass.
You stupid.
And I think most importantly, Sokka is the one who devises the plan to take out the Firelord, and it works flawlessly. Bro takes out a shit ton of comet-enhanced firebenders with just a boomerang, a sword, and a broken leg, all while saving Toph's life. This dude is a certified BAMF. Overall, it's easy to pin Sokka as the goofy comic relief guy, especially if you were watching this as a kid, but when you grow up, you see a lot more depth to this guy than you might realize. Sokka has proven time and time again that you don't need bending to be a badass in this world, and that if you're smart enough, you can overcome that disadvantage in other ways. Sokka shows us that everybody has a special power, and sometimes that power is your own mind. Quirked up non-bender with a little bit of swag, buzz it down boomerang style, is he goated with the sauce.
That's called Sokka style. Learn it.
Ladies and gentlemen, introducing the greatest earthbender in the world, Toph motherfucking Bayfog!
I am the greatest earthbender in the world. Don't you two dunderheads ever forget.
As far as the main gang goes, Toph is certainly the one with the least character development, which is kind of strange when you consider that in a show known for its character building, she is still one of, if not the most popular character on the show. I know of plenty of people who, don't like Katara or, may not care for Aang very much, but I have never met or even seen a person who doesn't like Toph. She's such a beloved character, which for somebody introduced partway through the second season is kind of unheard of. That being said though, I don't want to downplay how well written of a character Toph is, because she is just as deep as any other character on the show, yet I haven't seen many people looking that deep into her beyond her disability. Hey guys, you want to see my Toph impression? I'm fucking blind. I've been making a big point with each of the main gang representing the pinnacle of their respective element, with Aang embodying the ideals of the air nomads and Katara living by the philosophy of water, and even Sokka represents water tribe culture in a way. Toph is a bit of an interesting case here, because while in many ways her personality does fit Earth and what it represents to a T, she actually shares a lot of similarities with airbenders, with much of her character arc throughout Book 2 being about understanding freedom and what that truly means. When we first meet Toph, she is seen wiping the floor with grown-ass men during an earthbending wrestling match. This is a great display of her fighting style and gets the audience up to speed on what kind of person she is pretty quickly. After being defeated by Aang, she storms off, but the gang later tracks her down as the secret child of the wealthy Beifong family, a complete departure from her introduction. It's here that we understand a few core elements of Toph's character. Her parents are the only thing between her and living the life she wants to live, so it's safe to say that she isn't too fond of them. She suppresses who she is around her parents in order to keep them from worrying, which shows that she does care about her parents' feelings on some level, but is also fucking miserable living like that, hence why she needs an outlet to express herself and to feel some form of agency over her own life. She values her own independence so greatly because she has never been allowed to be independent, and this often comes at a cost. Once Toph officially joins the gang, she changes the dynamic completely. She has something in common with each member of the group, which makes her pretty malleable in terms of her role on the team. Her and Sokka are both pretty snarky, so now all of Sokka's quips and other gaffes that would have been fine in Season 1 are now made way funnier by Toph's even snarkier quips. Toph and Aang are both around the same age and have a similar philosophy towards personal freedom, but the two clash a lot due to almost everything about their personalities being completely opposite. This is most present when Aang is learning earthbending, where Toph is very harsh with him, and later when the Sandbenders take Appa, which Aang blames her for because he knows that she never liked him. As for the other girl of the group, Toph and Katara have a very tumultuous relationship. It's literally this meme. As you can tell, Toph has a somewhat antagonistic role within the group at first, which is to say that she clashes with everyone in some way. While she does not do this maliciously or even intentionally, her presence and personality challenges the rest of the group in ways that even their own enemies could not induce. Without even meaning to, she pushes her friends to improve. She forces Sokka to be funnier, which also helps him become more generally clever. Her harsh teaching style teaches Aang to not be so much of a pushover, which undoubtedly played a role in his decision in the finale. A man can only tolerate being called Twinkle Toes so many times.
Don't answer to Twinkle Toes, it's not manly.
You're the one whose bag matches his belt.
And I think most importantly, her and Katara challenge each other in almost every other interaction, since Katara wants Toph to become more responsible, while Toph wants Katara to become less strict, both of which end up working. She becomes an asset to the group because of her skill set, but also because she helps bring out the best in everyone just by being herself, and that's pretty fucking admirable. The Last Airbender 2, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. starring Toph Grace as Toph. Like I mentioned, Toph is the quintessential Earthbender, with her personality reflecting everything the element represents. As she herself explains in the episode Bitter Work, an Earthbender must be sturdy both mentally and physically. Your enemy must not be able to knock you down or get into your head, and this is without a doubt Toph's personality. She is stubborn and refuses to let anyone change who she is, and while she does change over the course of the series, it's only when she allows herself to change, never letting her enemies persuade or manipulate her. Even Azula, the master manipulator, is unable to get into her head, and that's saying something. That being said, her stubbornness and desire to be independent and free can often be a bad thing, as she will rarely allow herself to receive help from others. She is so dead set on carrying her own weight and improving herself that she perceives any attempt to help her with any task to be them looking down on her. She often takes this to heart and either pushes people away or gets herself into deeper trouble. I would honestly say that this is a rather defining aspect of Toph's character arc. She's definitely the gang member with the least going on character-wise, but because of that, her arc is rather simple. Her arc is learning that she doesn't need to do everything alone. She does learn this very lesson from Iroh in The Chase, and seems to take it to heart. But there are also points afterward where she acts in such a way to avoid having people help her, if you know what I mean. In situations like crossing the ice bridge in the Serpent's Pass, or jumping inside the Fire Nation's drill, she tries to avoid being a burden by not putting herself into situations where she knows that she'll need assistance. She can't swim and she can't bend inside the giant drill, so she's a pretty big liability in both of those situations. Though she's no longer consumed with the idea of independence, she still has trouble accepting help even when it's necessary, and over time grows to be more comfortable with it. She accepts that there are some things that she just can't do, whether it be because of her disability or her own principles, and that there is nothing wrong with asking a friend for help when she needs it. Of course, a decent chunk of this independence thing does come from her disability. Being born blind, Toph has found her own unique way of seeing using earthbending. Many view her as just a helpless little blind girl, but by the time we meet her, she has already found a way to overcome this disability, and she seems to take pride in that. She turned her disability into a superpower, a unique part of her that nobody else has. Yeah, and this is without a doubt a testament to her pride and confidence in herself and her abilities. The fact that she's willing to joke about her own blindness and even take jokes from other people about it is a pretty textbook example of not letting her disability affect the way she lives her life. However, much like Aang, some of Toph's character growth revolves around freedom, which is weird, right? Because Toph is an earthbender, and with Earth being the de facto opposite of air, you'd think that freedom would be the last thing on Toph's mind. However, I think it's a much more interesting part of her character than people realize. The bulk of this can be seen in her relationship with her parents. She was never allowed any freedom as a child, but now that she's traveling the world, she often goes overboard with her disdain for rules, sometimes intentionally breaking them if they get in the way of her living her own life. What she learns in episodes like The Runaway is that while it can be fun to break the rules and be a free spirit, sometimes that shit can get you into some major trouble, and not necessarily with the law. Her relationship with Katara is a massive focus of this episode, and it's understandable why, because their interactions expose some hypocrisy within each of their points of view. For example, when Katara finds the wanted poster with Toph's belongings, it's clearly because she was looking through her stuff, invading her privacy. Toph gets mad at this and claims that she had no right to do so, which is pretty ironic since she's been out being a fucking criminal all day. I'd actually argue that The Runaway is the episode that truly ties Toph's character arc together, because it seems to wrap up all of her problems at once. She spends the episode scamming people and breaking rules for money in what she believes is a true expression of her free will. It's mentioned by Katara that she's clearly only doing this to rebel against her parents, and Toph, being Toph, stubbornly refuses to stop and ends up getting herself into some deeper shit. At the end of the episode, she needs to rely on Katara, a person who in this episode acts as a stand-in for her parents and is generally antagonistic toward her. After escaping, she asks Katara to help her write a letter to her parents, seemingly ready to patch things up with them. The end of this episode resolves every character flaw that she's had so far. She's always been stubborn to change, but does so when she learns that her actions had negative effects on her friends. She often refuses to be helped by others, but is the one to ask Katara for help in writing a letter. She's had a rocky relationship with her parents, pun very much intended, but now she's ready to look past all that and see that they always wanted the best for her, even if they went a little overboard with it. And most importantly, she sees that it's important to be free, but that there is a limit to how far you should take your freedom, as there can be negative consequences to overdoing it. While it is often fun to break the rules, rules are there for a reason, and the argument of expressing my free will isn't gonna get you out of that. Sovereign citizen motherfuckers seething right now. At the end of the day, Toph is a much more complex character than many people realize. While she is the funny, snarky, badass earthbender of the group, she also carries with her a lot of emotional vulnerability that many don't often think of when they think of the character because of her other, more surface-level traits. As gay as this is gonna sound, Toph teaches us that there's a lot more to a person than what we see on the surface. Quirked up blind girl with a little bit of swag, bust-it down earthbending style, is she goated with the sauce?
You just stood your ground against the crazy beast. And even more impressive, you stood your ground against me. Yeah, let's break some rules!
Where are the men who ambushed us?
There were no men. We ambushed you.
This could be our most important mission yet. This is a rematch I've been waiting for.
You know, I wasn't originally gonna do a segment on Suki, but fuck it. It's Suki time, baby! I feel like Suki is often neglected when it comes to Team Avatar, because by the end of the series, she is 100% a part of the team, but the marketing never seems to treat her as such. Like, the most acknowledgement she's gotten post-war is a brief cameo in Korra's intro, yet we still have absolutely no clue what happened to her. She recently got her own solo comic, but even then, she's often left out of discussion regarding this adult gang movie coming out in the next few years, or any of the other expanded universe material. I mean, she's on the title screen for the fucking mobile game, so that's a W, I'll take what I can get here. Even though she's not in the series very much, she is still a part of the gang, and y'all better put some respect on a name. Suki time, baby! When she's first introduced in the 4th episode of the series, Suki is the leader of the Kyoshi Warriors, a group of badass women who protect their home island. Something to note about Suki is that her character does not have much of an arc, but it is her lack of a larger change that makes her so important, as her character is deeply intertwined with Sokka's. Like we discussed earlier, Sokka begins the series as chauvinistic due to his culture, so it is a major wake-up call for him to be beaten up, captured, and humiliated by a group of female warriors, which low-key sounds kinda hot.
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
He grows out of his misogynistic ways when he learns that women can be just as badass and capable as men. We already talked about that at length, but this also says a lot about Suki's character. There is a line at the end of the episode where this exchange happens.
I treated you like a girl when I should have treated you like a warrior.
I am a warrior. But I'm a girl, too.
I think that this is a really underrated line because I think it's the perfect take on gender equality in media. A lot of shows nowadays will try really hard to be feminist and progressive by making these girl boss type characters, right? Where the whole point is that they try to prove that they can do the same things that men can. That often comes across as really preachy and to many people makes these characters unlikable. I will not name specifics, but I know you've all got an example in your head right now. Suki's line is that same concept but done with nuance, and I know this is such a cliche thing to say, but it doesn't talk down to the audience. Suki is a warrior who can fight on the same level as any man, arguably on an even higher level, but she's also a girl who wants the same things that any other girl does. She is a badass fighter who happens to be a girl, and she does not set out with the goal of proving herself to anyone, but rather lets her actions speak for themselves, cementing her as a true feminist icon. While Suki is not the most prominent character in the series, she's only in like a single-digit number of episodes, and the majority of her appearances serve to further the plot or arcs of other characters, she is definitely underappreciated. The fact that she is still a fan-favorite character despite having so little presence in the story is a testament to how good these characters truly are. Just one episode got the fanbase and the writers themselves invested enough in her that they brought her back for subsequent appearances, and if not for that, we'd have been robbed of a beloved member of Team Avatar. Like I said, y'all better be putting some respect on Suki's name. Quirked up warrior with a little bit of face paint, bust it down Kyoshi style. Is she goated with the sauce?
I've always had to struggle and fight, and that's made me strong. My honor, my throne, my country. The only way to regain my honor is to find the Avatar. Finally. You can't quit because you're afraid you might fail. I used to think this scar marked me. The mark of the banished prince, cursed to chase the Avatar forever. My name is Zuko. Just a scar.
Oh good god, where do I begin with this one? It is a common talking point that Zuko is basically the second protagonist of Avatar. Some would even argue that he's actually the true protagonist over Aang. And while I don't quite agree with the latter, being a deuteragonist I think is a pretty apt description. He is without a doubt the most complex character in all of Avatar, potentially all of animation, and he probably even contends with some of the best in all of media, if we're being honest. I'm making a multiple hour-long video right now about the series in general, but I know damn well that people have filled this exact time frame just talking about Zuko. It's fucking wild. It's become a bit of a meme to say that Zuko has the best redemption arc of all time, but I think the only reason it's become a meme is because it's fucking true. There's often a lot of talk in general about redemption arcs in fiction. Redemption arcs are some of the most romanticized tropes in storytelling these days, but in many ways it's for the complete wrong reasons. A lot of people really want some villains to be redeemed because they just like the character, right? Whether that be for superficial reasons or not, when not many characters who go through redemption arcs were necessarily designed to do so in the first place. Zuko is one of the few characters who was, and though I say this with a very limited knowledge of all media ever since I beat off the fucking cartoons and anime all day, I think he genuinely, no meme, does have the greatest redemption arc of all time. So I reiterate, where the fuck do I even begin with this guy? Well, I think it only makes sense to start from the beginning. Zuko was the firstborn child of Ursa and the then Fire Prince Ozai, making him as full-blooded Fire Nation as one could get. As a member of the royal family, Zuko had a relatively high-class upbringing, but as we all know, it wasn't all fire flakes and turtle ducks. Due to the internal political conflicts of the royal family, specifically between his mother, father, and grandfather, Zuko essentially ended up caught in the crossfire. His father resented him for not living up to his expectations and for taking after his mother, viewing him as a failure. Zuko was kind of doomed from the start, since Ozai clearly had it out for him since the day he became Firelord. Of course, Zuko was very close with his mother. She was the only positive role model he had around at the time since Iroh was off fighting in the war, and don't worry, we'll get to him. So when she disappeared, he was left in an unloving household where his own family was literally out to get him. While he did what he could to be a good prince, Ozai still had it out for him, looking for any excuse to get rid of him, resulting in the Agni Kai that scarred him and being banished until he could complete an impossible task. I refuse to believe that this whole war meeting was not a setup somehow. Like, Ozai planned this somehow. I believe it 100%. After years of neglect from your father and harassment by your sister, I think being kicked out of your own home for doing the right thing would probably turn anyone into a doomer, and that is exactly what happens to our boy. Zuko is consumed by anger in his years of searching for the Avatar. Anger at who? Well shit, motherfucker, even he doesn't know. Let's see, well he's gonna be mad at his father for deep frying his fucking face. He's definitely mad at his sister for being a psycho cunt. There's probably some resentment for the fact that he's literally been banished from his home and sent on a pointless quest to hunt down a guy the whole world thinks doesn't exist anymore. That's usually a good one. He's also dealing with all of this mid-puberty, so that also likely plays a factor. Point is, a lot of things for Zuko to be mad about. So much so that anger becomes his default emotion and the source of his firebending. The source of Zuko's anger changes as the series progresses. First he's mad about his years at sea hunting the Avatar, then his anger at the Avatar for getting away from him time and time again, anger at Zhao for trying to take the Avatar for himself, anger at Azula for forcing him into exile in the Earth Kingdom, and anger at himself for being confused, all of which among some more general moments that would probably piss anyone off. But this brings us to one of the most important episodes in the entire series, some would even argue is one of the best, Zuko Alone, an intricate character study of Zuko. As most fans know, this episode is fucking packed. It's instrumental in understanding Zuko's character, and I've already gotten a bit ahead of myself by mentioning the events of it. It's that important, right? The thing that makes it so important though is that it poses a very important question. What is Zuko's identity?
Does this guy have a name?
While that seems like a question with a really obvious answer, it certainly plays into this identity crisis part of his character. Every time something changes in his life, he questions different parts of himself and changes accordingly, sometimes in the wrong ways. Getting into it though, we learn a lot about Zuko's past, specifically in his relationship with his family and how those things have affected him in the present, both positively and negatively. Through flashbacks, we learn that Azula has always had it out for him, which definitely puts their present-day interactions thus far into perspective. They have never had a good relationship, but even so, Zuko still accepts her as his sister. He has every reason to write her off and dissociate from her, but he believes in family, so he thinks they can work it out somehow, even if he doesn't directly say that. We also learn that Zuko had a very close relationship with his mother, like we mentioned, with her final words to him being,
"No matter how things may seem to change, never forget who you are."
This is something that Zuko embraces, but in a very misguided way. In the final fight of the episode, Zuko reveals his true identity to the village in a fiery display of anger. He's embracing who he is, but in the most literal way possible, which was clearly not what Ursa meant. He is embracing his lineage and the anger that he's currently feeling, but not who he truly is deep down. And this is reflected by the villagers not fearing Zuko, but rather pitying him. Zuko embraced who he thought he was, only to be met with discontent, indicating this was not how he was supposed to do it, which is ironic because we do see his true self shine through during the present-day story of the episode. Though he tries to keep his distance from the Earth Kingdom family, he befriends Lee, clearly because he sees a lot of his younger self in him. The fact that he has the same name as his Earth Kingdom alias is pretty on the nose, and the constant flashbacks to young Zuko are definitely meant to accentuate this. He sees Lee as the bright-eyed kid that he used to be, and seems to want to keep him from making the same mistake that he has. He attempts to give him a knife engraved with the phrase, "Never give up without a fight," which I think perfectly describes this aspect of Zuko's character. He was once told that his sister was born lucky, and that he was lucky to be born, embracing the fact that he's had to fight as hard as he has in order to make it in life. His mother even comments that he is the type to keep fighting even at his lowest moments. He wants that for Lee, but hopefully in a much healthier way. But which Lee are we talking about here? Kid Lee or alter ego Lee? Zuko protecting the Earth Kingdom family against the soldiers is another moment where his true nature shines through. He truly does want to defend the innocent, or at the very least has some concept of right and wrong. We also see this in the opening scene of the episode, where he thinks about robbing this family, but doesn't go through with it when he sees that Ying is pregnant. He seems to have a soft spot for children and doesn't want to see them suffer, since most of his childhood was made up of suffering. The reason I bring this episode up out of order, and not that we were really going in order to begin with, is that everything in this episode accentuates a part of Zuko's character. He has familial issues, but still takes pride in his heritage and believes in the importance of family. He does villainous things throughout the series, but still has a heart and a sense of right and wrong by protecting the innocent. Despite all that he's been through, he never gives up without a fight. But most importantly, he was told never to forget who he is, but doesn't know who he is in the first place. This is the premise of Zuko's arc. It is a redemption arc, yes, because it's about somebody who did bad things trying to atone, but it's more about a troubled person figuring out who he is. It is an arc about identity. Throughout the series, Zuko has a severe identity crisis, a few of them in fact. In Book 1, he goes against his own nation in disguise as the Blue Spirit in order to achieve his goal. He does this out of desperation for not wanting to lose to Zhao, but he also does it to reclaim his status as the prince. Fast forward a bit after the siege at the North Pole, where after a run-in with Azula that marks him and Iroh wanted men, the two go into hiding in the Earth Kingdom. They begin this journey by cutting off their royal top knots, symbolizing them washing away their old identities. They are no longer Zuko and Iroh of the Fire Nation, they are Lee and Mushi, refugees from the Earth Kingdom. Upon arriving in Ba Sing Se, Zuko wants nothing to do with the place, but he makes it work since he's basically out of options. He tries to be Lee, working a normal job, dating a normal girl, living in a normal apartment, but that thirst for his honor is still eating away at him, preventing him from truly accepting this new humble lifestyle. He dons the Blue Spirit mask once again, this time to steal Appa from the Dai Li. It's here that it becomes clear that the Blue Spirit persona is meant to be Zuko attempting to disconnect his own morally reprehensible actions from himself. He had no reason to wear the mask inside the Dai Li headquarters, but he did because he knows that stealing Appa is wrong, but just can't force himself to do it. But he can totally do it under somebody else's name and not feel guilty about it. A speech from Iroh leads him to do the right thing by setting him free and letting go of the Blue Spirit persona for good. Two decisions that were so in conflict with his own view of himself that it made him physically ill. If that's not evidence of this dude's inner confusion about who he is, then I don't know what is, bro. He views himself as such a bad dude that doing the right thing is the most opposite he can get from this perception. The dreams he has during the sickness are fucking insane, and they truly give us insight as to how exactly he is conflicted. Firstly, there's the scene of the two dragons, one blue and one red, acting as the angel and devil on Zuko's shoulders. The blue dragon, who represents Azula, goads him into joining her, while the red dragon, who represents Iroh, advises Zuko to do the opposite and fight for peace. I think it's pretty on the nose what the scene is trying to foreshadow, but we'll get to that when we get to it. The other hallucination where Zuko looks in the mirror and sees Aang's face is also incredibly important, but in a completely different way, so put a pin in that for now as well. Zuko eventually overcomes this sickness and grows to accept his new life in Ba Sing Se, but this is very short-lived as almost immediately his inner conflict returns upon seeing Azula again. He is then confronted with an ultimatum that was hinted at in his dream. Does he choose good and go with his uncle and thereby Team Avatar, or does he go with Azula and regain his honor? You might even call this the crossroads of his destiny. At this moment, Zuko values achieving his goal and regaining his honor and the love of his father more than anything else, so of course he double-crosses Iroh and sides with Azula. From a writing standpoint, Zuko's decision is an absolute 180 for what many fans expected to go down. But honestly, it makes perfect sense why he made this choice. The whole season has been building up to the idea that Zuko is slowly coming to terms with his true purpose in the world, and the finale completely flips that on its head by having him relapse into his evil ways. It's supposed to feel wrong because by this point, everyone but him knows what's right. It's a classic case of he's gonna get worse before he gets better, because this dude still has a ton of demons eating away at him that simply serving tea in the city isn't gonna deal with. This pivotal decision brings him back home to the Fire Nation, where he is welcomed home with open arms. Even though he now has everything he's ever wanted, a nice quiet life with May, the respect of his father, and the promise of the throne, something is still missing. He's still unsure about who he is because he still feels without honor. This confusion comes from a variety of sources, including but not limited to his disbelief that the Avatar was truly dead, Azula lying that he was the one who killed the Avatar and forcing some stolen valor upon him, and his guilt for imprisoning his own uncle, the only person who he knows still truly cares for him. These things all weigh on him throughout the majority of Book 3, and he pretty directly explains this in The Beach. He claims he's angry at himself for not knowing the difference between right and wrong anymore. At first I thought that this didn't make any fucking sense, but then I thought about it a little bit more. Throughout Book 3, he is torn about his decision at Ba Sing Se. He's finally achieved this goal after all these years, but it still doesn't feel right. He's conflicted about whether or not he made the right choice that day because he seems to know deep down that he might have done the wrong thing. After learning the truth about the start of the war and his true heritage, along with some pep talks from his uncle, Zuko realizes that he definitely did the wrong thing, so now he seeks to make it right, even if that means betraying the very nation he wishes to rule and the father he's wanted to please since the very beginning. As we've seen, Zuko makes wrong choice after wrong choice, mistake after mistake, and every time he does, he just gets more confused and thereby more angry. story. By realizing the mistakes he's made and trying to fix them, he starts to truly understand who he truly is, and that is where his redemption begins.
Maybe if you got rid of that old ass haircut, you'd get some bitches on your dick. Better yet.
Uncle, you don't understand! My future Tradcath waifu wouldn't fucking approve of my OnlyFans subscription!
A lot of the time, Zuko's scar is the ultimate symbol for his character, since almost every important scene for him involves the scar in some way. There are numerous shots throughout the show where his scar is shown when referencing the Fire Nation in a negative context, such as Zuko's interaction with Katara at Ba Sing Se. But I think this is most effectively seen in shots where the scar is used to contrast the good side of his face. When Iroh reveals to Zuko his true heritage, there is a shot where Zuko's face is split by a prison bar, which in and of itself symbolizes Zuko being proverbially imprisoned by his inner conflict. When Iroh mentions Firelord Ozai, Zuko's left side with the scar is shown, and as he mentions Avatar Roku, the camera pans to hide the scar and reveal the unharmed side of his face. It's almost like a Two-Face type situation, right? Where the asymmetry in his design is used to describe the character's struggles, and there are plenty of moments in the series that are exactly like this. I just explained one of the more well-known and in my opinion best examples of this, but if you pay attention to any moment where Zuko's scar is a visual focal point, I'm sure you'll be able to extrapolate some meaning from it.
There's scars on the wrong side.
I think one of the more underrated things about Zuko's growth is that he learns from his mistakes, and pretty frequently at that. This man's entire life has essentially been defined by making mistakes and learning from them the hard way. And while I think this can be said for most of the main cast in varying capacities, it's especially prevalent with Zuko's arc. The very thing that set him on his journey was making a severe lapse in judgment at the wrong time, and he has a permanent reminder of that mistake. Siding with Azula at Ba Sing Se later proved to be a huge mistake since it just caused him more anguish. However, it's in making mistakes like this that Zuko is able to come out of it as a better person. In The Boiling Rock, there is a really interesting exchange between him and Sokka. In fact, it's two exchanges that go hand in hand. The first is the iconic Silver Sandwich line, where Zuko tries to mimic his uncle's classic wisdom, but it falls pretty flat because he was clearly just trying to tell Sokka what he wanted to hear and kinda bullshitted his way through it. Fast forward to later in the episode where Sokka is feeling unsure of if he should stay and see if his dad will arrive or if he should just take the safe chance to leave. Zuko gives him some advice and tells him this.
Even though you'll probably fail over and over and over again.
Seriously, not helping.
You have to try every time. You can't quit because you're afraid you might fail.
Unlike earlier, this is actually some very sound and wise advice, and the reason for this is because unlike the Silver Sandwich, Zuko is actually speaking from experience here. This dude has fucked up time and time again, but he never gave up on anything because to him, failure was never an option. The only way you truly fail is by not learning from your mistakes and giving up, and Zuko has experienced this firsthand. If there is one thing that remains constant about Zuko, is that he's always had the mentality from his knife.
Never give up without a fight.
As we all know, Zuko's goal since the very first episode has been to regain his honor. But what exactly does that mean? Every episode he's in, he goes on and on about honor, but its definition is left pretty vague for the most part. If I wanted to be a really pretentious YouTuber, I could reach you on the dictionary definition of honor, in the context of Zuko, is the respect of his nation, and more importantly, the love of his father. When Zuko was banished, he lost any and all respect that the citizens of the Fire Nation had for him. Nobody else respects him. They all view him as a spoiled brat who got what he deserved, and nobody outside of the war room even knows why. Zhao treats him like this, his own crew doesn't even seem to like him all that much, and his own sister even sees him like this. Well, I guess the bar wasn't very high on that last one, but you get the gist. In this context, when Zuko says that he wants to regain his honor, he really means that he wants his nation to respect him again and see him as the prince and eventual Fire Lord. But that's just one facet of it though, since the other thing Zuko means by honor is that he really just wants his dad to love him again. We know that Ozai always had it out for him and that Zuko was much closer with his mother, so it stands to reason that after she disappeared, Zuko would want some form of parental bond. He wants to become the prince that his father can be proud of, but is denied that when he speaks out. His banishment pretty much set this in stone, with the stipulation being that if he found the Avatar, he'd love him again. No wonder this kid is so fucked up. We have discussed what honor means, but something I've always wondered was this. When was the exact moment that Zuko restored his honor? There are a few contenders. Firstly, there's his speech to his father during the invasion, where he declares that he is joining the Avatar to help end the war. This shows great wisdom on his part, because he's come to realize that there was nothing honorable about what he's done thus far, and his experiences in the Earth Kingdom have shown him how horrible this war truly is. He regains his honor by denying his honor in front of the man who's been trying to please this whole time. Second contender, his apology to Iroh in the finale. When it comes to Zuko's mistakes, his betrayal of Iroh at Ba Sing Se was one of his most personal. He's had to live with that mistake for a long time and feels really fucking bad about it. When he apologizes to Iroh, he is demonstrating that he feels remorse for what he did, and there's more honor honor in admitting that than anything else that he's done. Lastly is his coronation. When Zuko becomes the Firelord, he has officially regained the honor he once lost. He was once a banished prince, but has now returned to take the throne with more noble intentions than he started with. Arguments can also be made for other moments as well, such as Zuko protecting Katara, joining the gang, or even helping his lieutenant during the storm. But the real answer to the question of when did Zuko regain his honor is that he never lost his honor in the first place. While he has done some dishonorable things and made numerous mistakes, he always fixes them and does the right thing in the end. This was something that he has always done, and that's because he always had his honor. From the very first episode where he promises not to hurt anyone, the third episode where he spares Zhao, or any noble choice he makes in between then and his coronation, Zuko was always honorable, he just didn't know it yet. Zuko had to learn that honor does not come from someone else, it's something that you need to earn for yourself. Like we established, Zuko is, in many ways, a deuteragonist of the series. He gets almost just as much screen time as Aang does with way more character development. However, this is a part of the series that I feel that many fans understand, but never go deep enough into, that most discussion of it feels incredibly shallow when it is one of the deepest things about the series. Of course, I'm talking about how Aang and Zuko are designed to parallel each other. This is seen all throughout the series, from the very beginning all the way to the very end, and it is even the driving force of several episodes. Starting from just episode 1, the parallels are already pretty clear. We've got two characters with two bodily markings with two opposing color schemes. Aang's bright blue arrow on his forehead, representing peace, and Zuko's scar on his left eye, representing hatred, conflict, and turmoil. Aang's arrows also represent his mastery over airbending, while Zuko's scar reflects his view of firebending, both of which are integral to their personalities. Like I said earlier, Zuko's scar has a lot of different meanings. You're gonna hear me talk about this a lot in this section. I think one of the earliest indicators that these two have any parallels at all comes in the third episode, which is funnily enough an episode where the two don't even interact. During the climax of the episode, Aang is having an Avatar state meltdown after finding out that his entire race has been killed. Meanwhile, Zuko is fighting Zhao in an Agni Kai. These two events don't seem similar at first until you think of their shared meaning. Aang is obviously upset because the closest thing he's had to a family has been wiped out and taken from him. Zuko is upset because Zhao is trying to keep him from returning to his family that he wants to return to so desperately. One had a loving family that is no longer around, and the other has a family that doesn't care about him. Through these two events, they both learn that their true family are the ones that are there for them through thick and thin, with Aang accepting Sokka, Katara, Appa, and Momo as his new family, and with Zuko and Iroh bonding over Zhao's defeat. These two stories also serve as foreshadowing for where these two end up in the finale. Aang experiences the Avatar state after finding out that his people were killed, and in the finale activates it in order to avenge them by ending the war. Zuko's first major fight is an Agni Kai against Zhao, and his last fight that determines the fate of his nation is also an Agni Kai, this time against his sister. The fact that the two events that foreshadow their final acts in the series are both happening at the same time is not a coincidence. Later on in Book 1, we get two of the most pivotal episodes for the Aang-Zuko dichotomy, and while I have done a dedicated video on them before, I'm gonna talk about them again because fuck it. The Storm and the Blue Spirit. If the earlier episodes weren't enough to convince you that this is a thing, then these two kind of basically cement this idea. The Storm, as we all know, establishes the backstories of Aang and Zuko. It details Aang's life with the monks shortly before and after being revealed as the Avatar, leading up to him running away and freezing himself, and Zuko's life a few years before the start of the series, being scarred and banished to complete an impossible task by his own father just for doing the right thing. In a narrative sense, it is very clear that this episode is meant to display the similarities between these two and their backstories, since they are very similar in their setup and outcome. Their stories also show the importance of family for these two characters, more specifically how their respective father figures treated them in the face of their mistakes. Aang had nothing but love and support from Monkey Gyatso, the closest thing he's ever had to a father figure, but still couldn't take the pressure and ran away, while Zuko's own father sent him away when he was more than willing to join the cause. I'd like to believe that Gyatso forgave Aang for running away, because while I doubt that he knew this entire race would be killed shortly after, he knew that Aang being the Avatar hasn't been a very positive experience so far. He wants the best for him, but is also a bit selfish and doesn't want him to leave either. Ozai, on the other hand, had it out for Zuko from the very beginning. When he finally did something wrong, he used it as an opportunity to hurt and banish his own son. Zuko and Aang had entirely different experiences with their fathers, and it makes sense that the one who taught love and compassion resulted in Aang, and the one who taught pain and anguish resulted in Zuko. Part of Zuko's journey in terms of fathers is finding that his blood father was not good for him. He found a father figure in his uncle Iroh, who was the very thing that Zuko needed. Iroh is Zuko's Gyatso, and I think part of the parallel is Zuko learning to find the thing that Aang had.
This staff will make an excellent gift for my father. I suppose you wouldn't know of fathers. being raised by monks.
But above all else, these two backstories share a common motif: shame and its relation to honor. Aang feels shame for running away from the world when he was needed the most, while Zuko feels shame for having been banished and being seen as a loser by his whole nation. They both feel that they have fucked up in some way and are ashamed of the actions that caused them to lose their honor, so every action they take from that point forward is an attempt to regain that honor. Aang's honor as the Avatar, and Zuko's honor as heir to the Fire Nation. They cannot change the past, so the best they can do to atone for their mistakes and regain their honor is to do the right thing and achieve their goals, with the difference being that Zuko's goals are not very noble quite yet. However, the end of the storm hints at this not always being the case, since these two lock eyes at the very end, symbolizing that their paths are destined to cross, with neither chasing after the other for this same reason. The next episode, The Blue Spirit, takes these parallels a bit further, and it now raises a great question. We now know that these two are very similar, but what if they were friends? Throughout the episode, we see that these two do have the capacity to be friends, as not only do they fight side by side quite well, but they save each other's lives multiple times despite knowing who the other is. Zuko saves Aang from Zhao's clutches, even though he just wants to capture him for himself, while Aang saves Zuko from Zhao because it would feel wrong to leave him. But at the same time, he also sees that there's good in him. At the end of the episode, Aang proposes the idea that the two could become friends if circumstances were different, showing both great wisdom and great naivete on Aang's part. This was something that Zuko was not ready to hear quite yet, as he responds with violence, which is the only thing he's ever really known. The two part ways on pretty bad terms, with one of the final shots showing this parallel yet again. Both are seen going to sleep and rolling on their sides, each thinking about what Aang said about being friends. Zuko looks at the Fire Nation flag in his room, then turns away to sleep on his side with his back now facing the flag. The camera zooms into the flag as if to emphasize its importance. I think this is pretty clearly alluding to Zuko genuinely considering Aang's offer, if only just for a moment, as he literally turns his back on the very nation he was so concerned about losing at the beginning of the episode. Both seem to be quite sad about how things turned out, and while I think it's ultimately for different reasons, the idea that they both end up sad at a time when they are not friends is some pretty subtle foreshadowing. The idea of these two working together is then played around with in Book 2, Episode 8, The Chase, where Aang and Zuko have a three-way fight against Azula that eventually transitions into the two teaming up against her, with the rest of Team Avatar later joining. While it's not focused on very heavily in this episode, the fact that these two are willing to fight alongside each other against a common enemy is somewhat of a microcosm of what the Blue Spirit established. They are willing to team up, but Zuko's selfishness, and let's be honest, teenage angst, prevents them from doing so. Immediately following this episode is another ripe with parallels, and one of my personal favorites, Bitter Work. Both plotlines in the episode deal with seeing things from a different perspective, with Aang's personality making it hard for him to earthbend, and Zuko's making it hard to bend lightning. While the episode is not about their dichotomy inherently, the fact that they both learn what is essentially Avatar stuff makes the parallel pretty clear. They each learn Avatar stuff because it's the writers instilling this idea again that their lives are interconnected. Aang needs to learn to stand his ground and be more head-on, which is one of his biggest character flaws keeping him from fulfilling his destiny. To be the Avatar, he needs to look at a different perspective, which is kind of his whole job. Zuko needs to learn to stop viewing the world so black and white and to take from other sources as well, but is so angry at everything all the time that it's kind of all he knows. Aang succeeds in this while Zuko does not, showing that Aang is able to progress because he accepts different parts of himself, while Zuko fails because he cannot accept those same things. Lightning generation only being possible when one's mind is free of inner turmoil shows us that Zuko is still filled with inner turmoil, and the final scene of this episode reaffirms that shit has been pent up for far too long. Fast forwarding to Ba Sing Se, and Zuko's dream during the Earth King contains another very important parallel. Zuko awakens from his slumber and goes to the bathroom, but when he looks in the mirror, he is now dripped out with airbender tats. It's pretty clear that this symbolizes how Zuko sees, or at least knows, that he sees a bit of the Avatar in himself, and based on his reaction, it's something that he does not want to admit. Much like Aang, he is scared of facing his destiny and the choices he must make to do so. By doing something good, he sees that he has the potential to be like the Avatar, but is so afraid of that idea because not only is this the guy he's supposed to be hunting down, but because much like Aang, he also plays a role in restoring balance to the world, and it's a responsibility he's not ready for yet. The Crossroads of Destiny offers another parallel, as it quite literally puts both of these characters at the titular crossroads of their destiny. Aang must make the choice to put aside his love for the sake of achieving power, while Zuko must choose whether he wants to regain his honor through Azula or through Iroh. These two decisions, like we discussed earlier, are pivotal to their arcs, since these two choices cause them to struggle, and from that struggle they come out of it with a better outlook that leads to their final victories. Then we get to the episode that's probably the most on the nose when it comes to this parallel, Book 3, Episode 6, The Avatar and the Firelord, which details the shared backstories of Avatar Roku and Firelord Sozin. Throughout the episode, we learn that Avatar Roku and Firelord Sozin were once best friends, but became estranged when Roku had to put a stop to Sozin's plan for the 100-year war. This culminates in Sozin betraying Roku and leaving him to die in order to enact his plan, ending their relationship on very bad terms and thereby starting the war. The purpose of our protagonists learning about their prospective predecessors is to show that history does not need to repeat itself. The falling out of the Avatar and the Firelord started the war, so by learning their stories, Aang and Zuko learn that coming together is the only way way to end the war, when Aang says,
"Their story proves anyone's capable of great good and great evil."
it's foreshadowing Zuko's official turn to the good side, as well as being a general understanding that the Fire Nation needs to be saved too. Meanwhile, Zuko learns that his great-grandfather on his mother's side was Avatar Roku, and he becomes more engrossed by this idea that his destiny is intertwined with the Avatar, which no doubt pushes him toward joining him. This also technically means that Aang is Zuko's great-grandfather, and he can and will use that to his advantage whenever he's losing an argument.
You are my dad. You're my dad. Wookie, wookie, wookie.
The episode that brings the parallel between Aang and Zuko full circle is the Firebending Masters. Aang and Zuko go off to find the original source of firebending, and in doing so learn the Dancing Dragon, a technique that requires two people to perform as intended. Later, when they meet Ran and Shaw, they are able to appease them by using the same technique. The Sun Warrior Chief claims that the dragons will read their hearts, souls, and ancestry in order to deem them worthy, and I think they can see a little bit more than that. They can obviously see the heinous actions of Zuko's forefathers, and that the Avatar has been absent for the past century, and can probably also see some of the shitty actions of the past Avatars. More importantly, they can tell that the historical conflict between these two, as seen in the Avatar and the Firelord, has had disastrous consequences to the entire world. It ain't looking too hot, pun very much intended. But when these two use the Dancing Dragon, they are demonstrating their ability to become friends in spite of their ancestors' actions, and that their intentions were pure. The dragons accepted them and agreed to show them because they could tell that these two would be the ones to break the cycle, and people like that are truly worthy of being enlightened by the true meaning of firebending. They also each learned an important lesson from this. Aang is apprehensive about firebending because of how he burned Katara, while Zuko is a bit more aggressive about learning it because aggression is all that he's known. Zuko's flame is too big and Aang's is too small, and I don't mean that literally. The dragons show them that fire is more than just destruction, which leads Aang to be more accepting of it and Zuko to not be so focused on anger all the time. They come out of this adventure more similar than ever before, with their new fire being friendship. And one last small but very important parallel can be seen in the finale. We already mentioned how Aang versus Ozai in the last Agni Kai were foreshadowed from the very start, but there's actually another way that Aang mirrors Zuko here. As we all know, Zuko's scar is on his left side, as was obviously given to him by his father. In the final battle, Ozai goes straight for Aang's left side, implying that it's the same move he used on Zuko. These two faced the same attack, but Aang was able to come out of it unharmed because he learned from Zuko's mistakes. Such a small detail, but it's way too important to have included earlier. Overall, there are plenty of other cinematic parallels between these two, like the fact that both of them have been hit by Azula's lightning while trying to save Katara. Both have unique markings on their bodies, both left their homes and are unable to return, and hell, even their names probably have something to them. Aang starts with A, Zuko starts with Z, beginning and the end, there's something there probably. Anyways, the purpose of explaining all of the ways that Aang and Zuko are mirrors of each other is to make clear one very important thing about this show that many people seem to either overlook or take at face value. As much as this is Aang's story, it's Zuko's story as well, but neither one works without the other, because it's the way that their stories intertwine and eventually combine that makes them such great characters, and that is a severe understatement. What's even crazier is that Aang isn't the only character that Zuko parallels in some way either, though he is the most blatant. Zuko also draws similarities with the rest of Team Avatar as well, with him and Katara both having mommy issues that turn them into people pleasers, him and Sokka both desiring the respect of their fathers, and even him and Toph have had the opportunity to indulge in Iroh's wisdom. I think you get my point by now. Zuko is an incredibly complex character because he is essentially written to serve two main purposes: to have a satisfying redemption arc on his own, and is meant to be a deuteragonist by paralleling Aang. When people call him the true protagonist of the show, I sometimes have a hard time disagreeing because there's way more to him than probably any other character in this series alone. Like look at the time frame, bro. If you time how long I've been talking about Zuko compared to the other characters in this section, Zuko's section fucking dwarfs everybody else, bro, even Aang, and I think that's saying something. Zuko truly is the most fleshed out character in the show, and I would honestly argue one of the greatest characters in all of fiction. And while I'm definitely not alone in thinking that, I think he definitely deserves the title of greatest redemption arc of all time. Quirked up Firelord with a little bit of depression, busted down firebending style, is he goated with the sauce?
And now we're friends.
Yeah, we are friends.
While it is always best to believe in oneself, a little help from others can be a great blessing. No, Zuko. You must never give in to despair. It's more of a demonstration, really.
X gon' give it to you. Fuck, wait for you to get it on your own. X gon' deliver to you.
As for the rest of the Fire Nation royal family, each of them seem to represent a particular aspect of the Fire Nation in relation to the war. Ozai represents the imperialistic ways of his forefathers, Azula represents how these ideals are indoctrinated into young people of the nation, and Iroh and Zuko represent all of the good still left in the Fire Nation. We just talked about Zuko, so guess which one's next? It's Iroh. I realize I didn't narrow that down enough. It'd be an understatement to say that Iroh is a fan favorite character. Well, you know, every character is a fan favorite, but this dude just transcends the show itself in a lot of ways. Iroh is used in all kinds of shitty Reddit memes, and for internet culture as a whole, is used as the face of wise old guys everywhere. Many fans see Uncle Iroh as their actual uncle, and it makes sense why, because he's such an endearing character in so many ways. To truly understand Iroh, we of course need to understand his backstory, which at the start of the show is basically non-existent. When the audience first meets him, he comes across as a goofy old geezer with the occasional bout of wisdom here and there. He's comic relief, but with moments where he shows that he truly cares for Zuko, which makes him pretty endearing from the jump. Pretty much everything he does throughout the series is to help Zuko, so from the very start he's made out to be super likable even when he's on the bad guy side. But of course, as we're all probably aware, one of the defining moments for Iroh is the untimely death of his son. Years before the start of the series, Iroh was a renowned war general for the Fire Nation and next in line for the throne, with his biggest achievement being his 600-day siege of Ba Sing Se, the closest anyone has ever gotten to infiltrating the city. However, on the precipice of victory, Iroh receives the news that his son, Lu Ten, has been killed in action, which utterly destroys him, causing him to concede defeat at Ba Sing Se and return home from war. It's here that I think there is a key change in Iroh as a person. Up until this point, he had been a warmongering imperialist general, but learning that his son had died in the war that he helped to perpetuate when he just as easily could have stopped it probably made his feelings of loss 10 times worse. He feels immense guilt for not being there to help his son, and because of what he views as his own inaction, his little soldier boy can never come marching home. While he was clearly a very wise and well-traveled guy before this, his son's death really flips a switch in him, and that maybe he shouldn't be fighting for the Fire Nation anymore, and that maybe perpetuating this war was the wrong call. So, in his retirement, he opts to take on a more peaceful lifestyle, where he can be unbothered by things like war and conflict, and instead focus on making what's left of his life worth living. For him, this is also an opportunity to atone for his mistakes by helping guide Zuko in a way that he never could for Lu Ten. Iroh's relationship with Zuko is actually very interesting when you get into the subtext of it all, and it makes him all the more tragic of a character in a way. While this is not immediately obvious on a first viewing or without any outside material, which again, I'm trying to avoid, Iroh's primary goal in his relationship with Zuko is trying to cheer him up. In a brief flashback in the beach, we see a shot of what appears to be Iroh playing with his son and baby Zuko, which implies that he had a strong relationship with Zuko long before the show. Other flashbacks also confirm this, such as in The Storm and later the Western Air Temple. The latter is actually very important, because it shows us the first moment where Iroh realizes how much Zuko has been consumed by this quest of his and that it's negatively impacting him. He tries to help, but Zuko is too stubborn and will not accept it. Throughout the entire show, we see how Iroh makes it his goal to help Zuko through this, and at first this manifests itself in some rather shallow ways. He constantly tries to get him to join in on fun activities on the ship like music night, and just wants him to take it easy. For a real deep cut, check this shit out, right? In the third episode of the show, Iroh claims that ginseng tea is his favorite.
Did you really mean that, Uncle?
Of course. I told you ginseng tea is my favorite.
Yet almost any time he offers tea to Zuko, he offers him jasmine tea.
Why don't you enjoy a cup of calming jasmine tea?
I don't need any calming tea!
Which seems to be the most common flavor of tea seen throughout the series, most of which being scenes of Iroh making the stuff. This begs the question though, with how frequently this guy makes tea, why would he not be making his own favorite? Because he's not making it for himself. He's making it for Zuko, because he knows that's what Zuko likes. He names his tea shop the Jasmine Dragon, not because jasmine is his favorite, but because it's Zuko's. So he is indirectly naming his tea shop after his nephew. Anyways though, once Iroh sees that these gestures aren't working, he tries a more indirect method with Zuko, which is just letting him make his own decisions. Whether or not he takes his advice is up to him, and the only times he intervenes are when Zuko makes a decision that's too off the rails, as seen in Lake Laogai. You can lead a firebender to the Avatar, but you can't make him drink tea. That made sense, I think. The point is, Iroh realized that he can't force Zuko to do anything, that going down the right path must be his own decision. Luckily, this all worked out in the end, and this only happened because Iroh was so persistent with his wisdom, but more importantly, that he never gave up on Zuko. When this dude had his whole family and eventually his whole country against him, Iroh still stuck by him because he truly believed that Zuko was the hope of the Fire Nation, and in some ways, the whole world.
Nigga, you are gay!
Throughout the course of the series, it's shown that Iroh is a deeply zen guy, with a connection to the spirits on a level only topped by the Avatar. How he achieved this spiritual connection is not mentioned in the show, but it's mentioned that he has visited the spirit world before and is even able to see spirits when they enter the physical world when no one else can. I know I've been trying to avoid this kind of stuff for this video, but material outside of the show has suggested that Iroh developed his spiritual connection after the death of his son, with his journeys into the spirit world being attempts to find and reconnect with him. On top of this, he is also one of the few outsiders to have been blessed with the knowledge of the true source and meaning of firebending, which he achieved by protecting the lives of the last dragons instead of killing telling them, so it's safe to say that he's pretty damn enlightened. Most of his wisdom comes from experience, and this dude is old, so he's got a lot of experience, and that's why it's always so profound. Despite his demeanor, he's made a lot of mistakes and has faced a lot of hardship throughout his life, but he was able to find meaning in all of that and became better for it. Without even seeing the events of his life, you can still track his off-screen character development through his wise words, and that's just straight up fucking genius. This is all great, but I think one of the most underrated aspects of Iroh's character is that much like his nephew, Iroh has a bit of a redemption arc of his own that he goes through. While this is certainly true in the years leading up to the series, I'm more so referring to his actions in the series finale, and this is the case in two ways. The first is his touching reunion with Zuko, in which he forgives him for all the harm that he caused. The reason I consider this a redemption is because, in his own eyes, Iroh felt like he failed Zuko when he teamed up with Azula. He realizes that he pushed him too hard to join the good side, and because of that he doubled back towards evil. Then while in prison, Zuko says plenty of harsh things to him where he reaffirms his choice, and Iroh was constantly sad and disappointed. Not in Zuko, but in himself for allowing him to go down this path. In seeing Zuko on the right side again, he is relieved to know that he didn't fail him after all, and that his teachings and wisdom truly did get through to him. Iroh redeems himself to himself by seeing that Zuko has redeemed himself. Did that make any sense? Yeah, probably not. The other way in which Iroh has a redemption arc is during the final battle, in which he takes back Ba Sing Se in the name of the Earth Kingdom. The 600-day siege of Ba Sing Se was his greatest military achievement, but also his greatest military failure, as the death of his son forced him to quit during such a pivotal moment, leaving the Fire Nation without the capital after so much effort. This was undoubtedly made worse by the fact that he was unable to stop Azula from taking over the city the second time around. His relationship with the city of Ba Sing Se is actually really interesting, because he clearly loves it a lot and has a ton of respect for it. Despite being Fire Nation royalty, he is more than happy to live in the slums making tea, and is honored to serve tea to the king. And with his former escapades in the city, it's clear that his destiny is intertwined with that of the Great Walls. During Sozon's Comet, he and the White Lotus take back Ba Sing Se, which is a huge strategic and symbolic victory in many ways. My favorite part of this battle, though, is not the fighting itself, though that shit is very cool, but rather this moment right here, where Iroh burns down the flag of his own nation, symbolically freeing Ba Sing Se from its control. In this moment, Iroh is redeemed by now being the liberator of this city when he was once trying to be its conqueror. After this, he spends the rest of his days making tea at the Jasmine Dragon, relishing in the fact that he brought peace to this city. Until Korra comes along, but that's a different story. All that being said though, this guy is just chill as fuck, and I think that's why a lot of people love him. He is a wholesome, wise old man, and whether he's giving you advice, telling you awful dad jokes, or just shooting the shit, he is simply just a welcoming presence. This is kind of a wild thing to say about a fictional character who literally does not exist, but the fact that so many people look to this guy for wisdom when they need it in their own lives, or turn to him as their comfort character, is truly the mark of a great mentor. Quirked up dragon with a little bit of tea, busted down Western style. Is he goated with the sauce?
My uncle in Christ, I've converted to Orthodoxy. I'm not about that life anymore.
Nonsense, young Jit. It's as I always say, smoking weed, eating Cheetos, and masturbating can turn a corny nigga into a trap star.
You will never rise from the ashes of your shame and humiliation.
Maybe you should worry less about the tides who've already made up their mind about killing you, and worry more about me, who's still mulling it over. Are you sure? I'm a pretty good liar. Don't flatter yourself. You were never even a player.
Dominate the earth!
Azula. But on the darker side of the Fire Nation royal family, no one represents it better than Princess Azula. Serving as a primary antagonist throughout books 2 and 3, Azula displays everything wrong with the Fire Nation royal family, and to a lesser extent, the way the war has altered the minds of Fire Nation citizens. But first, can we appreciate how much of a badass this chick is? Azula lives her entire life with an inhuman level of precision. Being the only character in the series to wield blue fire is indicative of her immense focus, since the blue means that it's hotter than regular fire, meaning every strike of hers is meticulously built up and planned in just an instant. Plus, it just fits her name. Azula, Azul, Blue, there's something going on there probably. It's also no wonder she's the youngest known user of Lightning Generation, a skill that takes a vast amount of control and discipline to master. Her knack for trickery and deceit make her a master manipulator, and she is just a generally intimidating presence all around. This chick literally took over the entire Earth Kingdom with just words. She knows what she's fucking doing. The key to telling if she's lying is to see if her lips are moving, because as we all know, Azula always lies. But how does a girl so young become so psychotic? Key word, Mommy issues. It's no secret that Azula was the favorite child of Ozai, but because of that, she never really connected with her mother as well as Zuko did. While Ursa did not neglect her daughter in any way, Azula seemed to refuse her mother's love and support in favor of the praise she was already getting from her father. Drinking her father's Kool-Aid from such a young age turned her into a child prodigy, believing herself to be superior to others and the rightful heir to the throne. She viewed Zuko as weak for being open with his feelings, while she viewed herself as strong for ignoring them. She manipulated her own friends for fun and rejected the lifestyles of the average person. Ursa saw all of this brewing in Azula, believing her to be a problem child who needed better guidance. And she was right, of course, but it still hurt, because Azula was very aware of how her mother saw her, with this perception shaping how she would act going forward. She seems to double down on this spite she has for her mother's opinion of her, which manifests in her sadistic actions getting way worse. After her mother disappeared, she had no one to dissuade her from this lifestyle. Without anyone to stop her from going down the dark path her father was leading her down, she ends up going all in with him, cementing her as an egotistical, narcissistic sociopath.
My father is a gamer.
I think the biggest thing to note about Azula is that she's crazy, but she didn't have to be. What I mean by this is that she already had some kind of disposition to this kind of personality. There was clearly already something wrong with her, but had she been raised right in a more loving and complete family, she probably wouldn't have gone off the deep end. But I think this overall begs the question, was she actually born this way, or was this developed? Personally, I think it's a little bit of both. While the show as a whole teaches us that nobody is born evil, I think an exception can certainly be made for Azula, who's been acting like this ever since she was a child. It can't just be the Fire Nation indoctrination because Mai and Ty Lee weren't like that, and it's not for lack of her mother trying to raise her because Zuko isn't like that. So I think it's safe to say she was born with a screw loose. It's just in her nature to want power, and there was no amount of parenting that could have stopped her from that. If that is the case though, then this was the very thing that made her putty in her father's hands, since he could use that thirst for power to his own advantage. Azula manipulates a lot of people, but she's also being manipulated herself. Like I've said in previous videos, and maybe this one, I don't know, it's been too fucking long at this point, but I think that seeing what characters do in their downtime is a perfect way to get to know them more intimately than the standard plot stuff. For Azula, the only time we get to see this is in Book 3's The Beach. It's one of the most important Azula episodes because it shows us a much more human side of her that we've never seen before. Her goal in this episode is to see how people would treat her if they didn't know she was royalty. She wants to know what it's like to be a regular teenager because she's never had that. She's always been treated like she's above everyone else, so of course she thinks that she is, but at the same time is a bit curious as to what us peons are like. Interestingly, she struggles to fit in with everyone else, likely because she still sees herself as above them, so her social skills leave a bit to be desired. By the end of the episode, I think she's come to the conclusion that being normal just isn't for her, which leads her to spiral even further into her eventual insanity. Now she actually has an excuse to be a narcissistic and firm leader because she's tried the other way, and she don't like it. This episode cements something that other episodes thus far have not yet established. As crazy and evil as Azula is, she is still human just like anyone else. She still has feelings and trauma, but her biggest gift and her biggest curse is her ability to suppress that shit. This serves to her advantage in a lot of ways, since it's the very thing that makes her so precise in combat and is no doubt the reason she's able to bend lightning, but at the same time, if you can push her buttons just the right way, you take her down completely, and it's the thing that causes her downfall. As much as she doesn't want to admit it, Azula greatly values Mai and Ty Lee and secretly does love her mother, but at the same time she feels betrayed by them. Betrayal is actually an important motif for her character, since she can dish it out but cannot take it at all. She'll buddy up with and betray her enemies for a tactical advantage all fucking day, but as soon as somebody on her side tells her no, it's off to the fucking gulag. Let's start with her mother. Deep down, Azula was deeply hurt by her mother's disappearance, but just could not admit it. She holds a lot of resentment towards her for leaving, and this resentment was likely a lot more general, as she comments on how she believed Ursa loved Zuko more than her, which likely wasn't true, and as she puts it, saw her as a monster, which totally was true. Suffice to say, she has a pretty rocky relationship with her mother, but she undoubtedly felt some kind of love for her, so it eats away at her that she left so abruptly. When she is betrayed by Mai and Ty Lee, her only friends, she feels that same hurt all over again. She recruited these two because they were the only people she could trust due to their childhood and their unique talents, but as Azula's actions became more sinister, their conscience came into play and told them to draw the fucking line. Her subsequent anger in this situation comes from a few different sources, but at its core, it's a cover for her feelings of true betrayal. All this talk about how Mai should have feared her more than she loved Zuko was bullshit. She's just saying that to avoid expressing her true pain that her own friend would do something like this, no doubt exacerbated by her controlling nature. Over time, the pain of these two betrayals built up within Azula until she can no longer suppress it the way she always has. All of her pent-up emotions begin flowing out, and because she suppressed them for so long, she doesn't know how to handle any of it. She becomes paranoid that everyone is out to get her, but instead of composing herself like she always has, she instead banishes everyone who challenges her. The worst of this comes in the form of hallucinations, namely of her mother. I've seen a fan theory that the servant feeding her the cherry pit was actually a hallucination as well, but I think that's stretching it a bit, though I could totally see an argument for it, and it doesn't really change the concept. Anyways, in her argument with her mother's hallucination, she claims,
"Trust is for fools. Fear fear is the only reliable way.
Of course, she has no reason to trust anyone or anything, since trust has always led her to betrayal, yet fear and intimidation have never failed her. This is key in how Azula has developed socially, which is to say, she hasn't at all. Fear and intimidation did not have to fail her, since if she had just treated her supposed friends with the same respect they showed her, without the scare tactics, if she had actually trusted them, they would have likely stayed by her side. This also demonstrates how Azula would actually have been a terrible leader, since, as they say, it's better to be loved than to be feared. Or is it the other way around? I don't know, pick one and make it work, whatever, fuck you. The point is, trust is viewed as a weakness by Azula, to the point where she doesn't even trust her own people. Again, she can dish it, but can't take it, as she refuses to trust anyone, yet wants everyone else to trust her unconditionally.
You're acting like a psycho bitch!
An interesting motif that comes up with Azula is her hair. Much like Zuko's scar, Azula's hair is used as a way to symbolize her mental state at the time. Most of the time, Azula's hair is tied up nicely and neatly, but when that shit comes down for any reason, you know it's about to fucking go down. This is made apparent from her very first appearance. Well, technically her second. Or is it her third? Whatever. In which she is seen practicing lightning bending under her mentors. Lo and Lee comment,
"Almost perfect. One hair out of place."
Showing one single strand of Azula's hair falling in front of her face. She looks at it with anger, exclaiming,
"Almost isn't good enough."
This quickly establishes her perfectionism, but also cements her hair as something to look out for. The one hair out of place was both literal and metaphorical. This can next be seen in her fight with Katara in the Crossroads of Destiny, where she narrowly avoids Katara's waterbending slice. The only thing that couldn't avoid it was her hair, and when this happens, things go into slow motion, and we see Azula's face as she becomes enraged. It makes sense that she'd follow this up by doing something as insane as killing the Avatar. Of course, when she is betrayed by May and Ty Lee at the Boiling Rock, her hair is all kinds of messy.
So that was a fucking lie.
And in the following episode, when she attacks Zuko, the thing that saves her life is her hair tie. She saves herself by letting all the craziness out, which is no doubt also some kind of parallel with Katara, since this is primarily her episode. But the most obvious instance of this motif is in the series finale, in which Azula's hair is directly addressed. After her paranoia leads her to banish everyone in the palace, she tries to cut her own hair, but fails miserably at it. Her mother appears in a hallucination, commenting on how it's a shame because she always had such beautiful hair. The more she fucks with it, the worse it gets, which not only shows her ineptitude with basic human tasks, but also that she's slipping further and further off the deep end. In their Agni Kai, Zuko makes note of this, and I think the rest kind of explains itself. This bitch is fucking crazy. Something that I recently learned to appreciate about the last Agni Kai is that the Katara versus Azula segment of the fight is actually a really great parallel. These characters have had basically no interaction, but they're way more similar than they seem. Both are around the same age and lost their mothers as children. Their relationships with their mothers are very different though, and it's a major factor in how they turned out the way that they did. Katara's mother was loving and supportive, so Katara grew up to be the same, but Azula's mother was largely absent even before she went missing, so she grew up to become insane. Azula was always a prodigy with natural bending talent, but Katara had no skill at first and had to work for her mastery. By Katara defeating her, it symbolizes how properly dealing with your problems will make you a more well-rounded person, unlike Azula. There's been a lot of talk within the fandom about whether or not Azula deserves to get a redemption arc. One was apparently supposedly planned by Aaron Ehaz at some point, but personally, I think she works much better without one. At least as far as the main show goes. Post-series? Sure, do whatever the fuck you want, but I don't think this was something that was needed in the show itself. In many ways, Azula is meant to be a direct parallel to Zuko in that she is what would happen if Zuko did not have Iroh in his life to be a good role model. These two had every reason to end up in the same situation, but because Zuko had Iroh to guide him, he was able to come out a better person. Azula had nobody to guide her and had no positive role models in her life, so of course she came out fucked up. Azula does not need a redemption arc because the purpose of her arc in the series is to show that when you push love away, you will always lose. Team Avatar won that day because they were a family who believed in each other, and Azula lost because she was all alone and it drove her mad. Redemption debate aside though, Azula is definitely up there with Zuko as one of the most complex characters in all of Avatar. There's so much intention behind everything that she does, and seeing that intention be slowly lost over time is what makes her descent into madness so intriguing. Quirked up girl boss with a little bit of mommy issues, busted down psychopath style, is she goated with the sauce?
Zoom, I would get pregnant.
We need to destroy their hope.
Generations of Firelords failed to find you.
Now the universe delivers you to me as an act of providence. I do have the power. I have all the power in the world!
The final boss of the 100-Year War is, of course, Firelord Ozai. A lot of fans actually don't like Ozai, because while he functions pretty well as a villain, many fans believe him to be rather bland in comparison to the show's other villains like Azula and Zhao. While I can definitely agree with that, I think most people don't give Ozai enough credit because he's actually a really well-written character. The show just never focuses on it very much. Which is to say, is he really that well-written? I don't know. I'm autistic. Hey guys, autistic guy here. Looking at his lineage, it's no wonder he grew up to be a psychotic warmongering tyrant. After Firelord Sozin started the war and Azulon perpetuated it for many years, Ozai would inherit an important role, as it would be during his reign that Sozin's comet would return, giving him the chance to finish what his grandfather started a century ago. This guy was born and raised to be a killing machine, unfeeling and uncaring for anyone or anything other than his own motives. He was willing to kill his own son in order to take the throne from Iroh, was later complicit in killing his own father to take the throne for himself, and he fights, maims, and banishes his own son just for speaking when he wasn't supposed to. With family like him, who the fuck needs enemies, am I right? He is a narcissistic megalomaniac out for power and nothing more. And with a life like he's had, can you really blame him? I mean, yeah, actually, you can. Like, he could have just stopped this at any time and just chose not to. But knowing the situation he's in, it makes sense that he's a psychopath, is my point. This is a man so evil that he literally laughs at the concept of peace and kindness. There's just no fucking turning back at this point. So that's kind of it for him. But I'm still gonna find a reason to pad this out. I don't need to, but I'm gonna anyway, so fuck you. It's commonly known that Ozai's face is never actually shown until Book 3. In the first 2 seasons, his face is always obscured in shadow. I've never found a reason for why they decided to do this, but it does imply that there's some big mystery behind what he looks like. You know, oh, maybe he's got scars all over his face, just like Zuko. Maybe he's actually a character we already know. You know, something to that effect, right? We've also seen artist renditions of him as well, which also implies that he's much more intimidating than he lets on. But then it's revealed. And not only is a big deal not made about it, he's also just some fucking guy.
Boom! Big reveal!
There's nothing particularly special about his face, he just looks like some fucking dude. But I actually think that's somewhat overlooked. By showing Ozai's face and having it be relatively normal, it just goes to show that any regular person could have become an insane warmongering dictator like him given the circumstances. It's also definitely a storytelling tool where not showing his face builds him up as more of a force than a person, and showing his face humanizes him in a way. The fact that his face is so normal also gives off the impression that he's never actually faced any hardship in his entire life. This guy is leading his nation in a century-long war, yet has clearly never actually seen combat in said war. This makes him come across more as a spoiled rich kid than a war-hungry villain, even though both of those things are definitely true at the same time. He's thirsty for power, but is spoiled and narcissistic, and these things combine to make him callous and uncaring for anyone other than himself. Overall though, while I do think he's a much better written character than fans give him credit for, I think Ozai works best as a symbol because he represents everything wrong with the Fire Nation. Well, I think I said that with Azula earlier too, but he's a little worse. Everything that's wrong with this world. Nothing. You know, his character isn't really that deep. As a person, he's not that interesting, and anything you need to know about him is either mentioned in passing or just heavily implied. The comics do give some additional context, but it's mostly nothing we didn't already know. Again, he works more as a symbol than he does as a character, and that's perfectly fine because what he represents on a grander scale makes up for the lack of character that he truly has, which for an ultimate villain seems to serve its purpose. Quirked up Phoenix King with a little bit of imperialism, busted down child abuse style, is he goated with the sauce.
Prepare to die!
So we've just gone through every single main character, and if you look at the timestamp we started with and where we are now, I think it's clear to see how much depth and complexity is truly there. And I haven't even gotten into some of the side characters either, and I easily could. In fact, let's do it right now, lightning round. Like, bro, Ty Lee has some wholesome ass background character development where she joins the circus to differentiate herself from her identical sisters, but ends up joining a group that, while they dress identically, each bring their own unique ideas and skills to the table. It's great to see May come out of her shell with Zuko, and learning where her lack of emotion comes from makes that all the more satisfying. Jet's paranoia just goes so fucking raw, dude. He is so hurt by what happened to him that callousness and vengeance are the only thing he knows anymore. Nuance becomes so lost on him that he stopped being who he thought he was, and then he gets brainwashed and he really forgets who he thought he was before truly turning over a new leaf. Even Appa and Momo have some level of character depth where entire stories can be carried by just them and they don't even fucking talk. Bro, do I even need to mention the cabbage guy? Okay, maybe not the cabbage guy, but like honestly, yeah, even still the cabbage guy. I mean, I know I said I wouldn't mention Korra in this video, but Cabbage Corp. glow up of the century. Unfunny cliche joke aside though, there are no badly written characters in this show. There is something to appreciate about every named character, to the point where even the ones who show up for like an episode and then disappear have become fan favorites and are still actively talked about in the fandom today. Not a whole lot of shows can do that, and that's what makes Avatar so unique. One of Brike's main design philosophies with this show is that it had to be from a kid's point of view. While they do a pretty good job at this, it's easy to forget that most of these characters are literal children. This was basically forced upon them by the network, who required the show to be from a kid's point of view, and I think that the restriction made it way better, honestly. These characters are written in such a way where they have childlike traits, but more often than not are written with a level of maturity that many would attribute to adults. I think that's a pretty obvious reason for why this show resonates with so many people from completely different generations. These characters are children that kids can relate to, but with more adult problems that adults can also relate to. They actually get better with age, since as an adult you can relate even more to them and understand them on a much deeper level. On top of all of that, there's just so much that we can learn from each of these characters and their respective journeys. Whether it's learning from Sokka that there's more to being a man, learning from Katara to be kind and caring, learning from Zuko to choose your own destiny, or just some of Iroh's classic quotes, we can all see ourselves in each of them. These characters have a way of teaching the viewer things about themselves that they didn't even know, and I think it's the best outcome they could possibly have. So you might have noticed that I've been ending my analysis of each character by asking the question, are they goated with the sauce? And the answer to that question is yes. Every character in this show is goated with the sauce, or for the boomers out there, they are all the best. There are still Who said you could speak? Who said you could speak? Who the fuck said you could fucking listen or speak to me, you daft bitch? There are still discussions to this day about who the best character is, and the answer is whoever you like, whoever you vibe with, whoever you see yourself in, and whoever inspires you to become a better person. Every character is the best character because their journeys are unique to them and them alone, so there is no way and no reason to compare them to each other. As wishy-washy as that sounds, these characters are that well written, and there's not many shows out there that can achieve something like this. Quirked up gang with a little bit of villains, bust it down bending style, and yes, they're all goated with the sauce. But now for the main reason I love this show so dearly, the themes. If you've made it this far into this excessively long video, I like to think that we're pretty close, you and me, you know? Not that close, put your genitals away, fucking weirdo. Unless you got a fat pussy. Anyways, I didn't mean close like that. I meant it like this. Let's get political. We're political close, not fuck each other close. Again, unless you got a fat pussy. Get them fat pussy lips. From episode 1, it is made very clear. Avatar is a story about war. While war in and of itself is not a theme, we can extrapolate a few important things about war from the show. How did war start and how do they end? How does war affect the people involved, whether they be on one side or the other, young or old? The show explores this in a lot of different ways, whether it be through the various Earth Kingdom villages being ravaged by the Fire Nation, the Fire Nation's numerous conquests into other nations, and even how the war negatively affects the Fire Nation's own citizens when the war isn't even being fought there. Adults are affected by being drafted into battle away from their families, and many are killed. Kids are being caught in the crossfire and left to fend for themselves, or are being indoctrinated to continue the conflict. Families are torn apart. It's just a whole ass mess, and nobody wins, even when they do. The thing about war is that its consequences are very long-lasting. The genocide of the air nomads was a horrific event that can never be undone, yet. People are displaced from their homes and eventually start new lives. Traditions and cultures are destroyed in the name of military advancements. Sometimes the effect can be positive in that new inventions like hot air balloons become commonplace and change the way people function. Even when no combat is taking place, the effects of war can still be seen on things like the ecosystem. In the winter solstice, we see a forest burnt down by the Fire Nation, and Sokka responds that
it's like a scar.
Wars leave scars, both physical and emotional. The thing about physical and emotional scars, though, is that they are often interchangeable. The burned down forest is a physical scar on the world, but that also leaves an emotional scar on all the living things that once lived there, manifested in Heibai's rage. Song, this girl from the Cave of Two Lovers, has a scar on her leg that she received from the Fire Nation, and it's clear that she also has to carry some emotional weight along with that, even though she's no longer in the shit. And dude, come on, Zuko's scar literally represents how the war has caused its aggressors to become so power hungry that they maim their own kids. The point is, very little good comes from war, and there is so much more to it than just people killing each other. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. That was fucking gay. In being a story about a war, Avatar is also very much a show that displays generational sins, how the terrible actions of one generation affect the next one, and how the current generation can rise above that. We can see this most clearly with Aang and Zuko. Zuko's family has a pretty long history of doing very bad shit, with his great-grandfather Sozin committing a genocide on an entire race of people, his grandfather Azula perpetuating the resulting war, and his father Ozai making underhanded deals and using him as a bargaining chip for more power with the intention of ending the war as Sozin began it. The actions of these guys resulted in a century of war and suffering, and when Zuko becomes Firelord, he inherits all the consequences of their actions. On the flip side, Aang's predecessor, Avatar Roku, was partially the reason the war began, as he could not put aside his friendship with Sozin to stop the war before it could begin. His mistake led to Sozin starting the war, and he's definitely not alone in this, as other past avatars weren't exactly perfect either. Avatar Kuruk was implied to have caused or at least perpetuated a tumultuous relationship with the spirits that outside material is currently expanding on, and Kyoshi just didn't take anybody's shit. The actions of Aang's past lives have a direct impact on him, as it is their mistakes that cause him trouble all these years later. Both Aang and Zuko have inherited a lot of problems from their predecessors simply by being born into their respective lineages, so now it is up to them to atone for these sins so that future generations will not have to deal with them. Zuko does this by ending the war that his ancestors began, and Aang does this by ending the war that Roku failed to stop. Zuko chose to end the sin that his family created, and Aang fixed Roku's greatest mistake. We do not get to choose which kind of problems we are born into, so the best we can do is solve them so that future generations will not have them. However, the new generation inheriting problems from the previous is something that will never go away, as solutions often lead to different problems. In this vein, Avatar is a show about cycles. The Avatar cycle, the cycle of the seasons, the cycle of death and rebirth, among others, are all pretty obvious, but one of its bigger underlying themes is that of ending the cycle of violence. Yes, conflict will arise, wars will be fought, and people will die, which only leads to further resentment and more conflict. Violence is quite literally a cycle that only feeds into itself. Though it is impossible to fully stop conflict altogether, the best we can do collectively is stop the cycle. Like Zuko says in his speech to Ozai, the Fire Nation's imperialism is the reason the world is so broken. It's why this animosity has continued for over a century, and that if this war continues, the world will destroy itself. The only way to break the cycle of violence is to overpower hate and anger with peace and kindness, which, while easier said than done, all starts with setting the past aside. It will not be easy, but if violence just begets more violence, then the only way to stop that cycle is to just stop. When we meet hatred with kindness, despite having every reason to meet it with more hatred, the cycle is broken. Zuko was able to restore his honor not by capturing the Avatar, but by befriending him and taking over his family's hateful reign, replacing it with a reign of compassion and understanding. Aang redefined what it meant to fulfill his duties as the Avatar by ignoring what his predecessor told him and by meeting Ozai's cruelty with mercy. Katara had every reason to revenge kill Yan-Ra, but she chose not to. Iroh saw this cycle in action long ago with his own eyes, so it makes sense that he became one of the first to try and break it. The Lion Turtle says,
"Since beginningless time, darkness thrives in the void, but always yields to purifying light."
And I think one of the ways this can be interpreted is that it's about ending the cycle of violence. When this cycle is in place, it creates a metaphorical darkness, but this darkness, and thereby the cycle, can be broken with the purifying light of kindness. Earlier in the video, I mentioned how a lot of the spiritual stuff in the show just kind of speaks to me on a level that I find very difficult to describe with words, and one of those concepts is the idea that everything is connected. You may have also noticed that I repeated this phrase a metric shit ton throughout this video, no doubt padding out the runtime. And while I usually try to avoid redundancy like this, I also do it for a specific reason. Everything is connected, and this is true for the series itself. Everything in the story connects to something else. The narrative, the character arcs, and all the themes are all intertwined with one another in such a way that to talk about one thing, you gotta talk about a bunch of other things, and you end up going on a bunch of tangents that it's impossible to not repeat shit. This is part of what makes the series so great in a meta sense, but this also works to its benefit on a thematic level. This is without a doubt my favorite idea presented in Avatar. Hugh points out how the swamp is just one big tree, and while in this case I think it's pretty fucking literal, I think it's easier to look at it more like a forest. There's a shit ton of trees, but none of them are independent of each other. Their roots intertwine and connect with each other and can spread pretty wide. This is a metaphor for people. We may seem like individuals, but we are more connected than we might think. The roots that connect us are ever present, even though they might not be visible to the human eye. I'm connected to you, you're connected to someone else, and they're connected to another person, and that might even connect back around to me. There are invisible roots that connect us all together, even if we don't know it. Like Hugh says,
"We're all living together, even if most folks don't act like it. We all have the same roots, and we are all branches of the same tree."
But everything being connected doesn't just stop at people. The guru points out that the four nations exist as if they are different when there isn't really any fundamental difference between them. The thing that separates them are the cultures that live there and some imaginary borders, but they are still connected both physically, spiritually, and culturally. The guru and the lion turtle both imply that the four elements are one and the same. They are derived from the same energy, and there are commonalities between all four, and the avatar connects them even further. It's important for the avatar to learn this lesson, since in understanding that everything is connected, they become far more enlightened toward the world and their true purpose. Which leads me into the final theme that I'd like to discuss today. Avatar is a series about balance. I know, fucking obvious, right? But it's about balance in more ways than the obvious. Of course, the avatar's job is to maintain balance in the world, which involves a lot of things. Keeping the four nations at peace with each other, being the bridge between humans and spirits, and bringing justice to anyone who threatens the balance. There are those who wish to upset the balance and those who wish to maintain it, so there will always be a constant struggle for the avatar to overcome. In the most literal sense, this is why the avatar exists, because balance will always need to be maintained. But the avatar also exists for another reason. The avatar also represents the pinnacle of how a person should be. The avatar must be balanced in their sources of knowledge, their treatment of others, and their views on the world, and so should you. The process of learning each element serves to teach the avatar to learn from other cultures and form a more complete and nuanced view of the world and the people in it. We must get our knowledge from a wealth of different sources, otherwise life becomes rigid and stale, as Iroh puts it. If you learn from only one source or live in only one culture, then you do not have a balanced view of the world. The avatar needs to be fair and balanced in the way they handle conflict and how they generally treat others. Each side of a conflict has a story, and it's important to hear each side out and see what their needs are so that a compromise can be made. By understanding that everyone has a story and a reason for being who they are, we become more compassionate towards everyone and can better diagnose the problems and help. But most importantly, the show is about balance within ourselves. As Guru Patik says, life is messy, and to paraphrase him, shit happens. So when shit does happen, we as individuals need to be able to deal with that. Bad things will happen to you in your life. It's just inevitable, and these things will threaten your inner balance. We need to learn how to deal with our problems in a healthy way that maintains that balance. In order to bring balance to the world, the avatar needs to bring balance to themselves, but this really should go for everybody. So I think that above all else, Avatar is a series about what it means to be human. This goes for Avatar, of course, but this also applies to Korra and the rest of the franchise as a whole. I know I've been trying to intentionally avoid any of the expanded universe material in this video because I want it to be focused solely on the show, but I'd like to allow myself to reference one thing outside the show. If you have a problem with that, I'd also like to allow you to suck my fucking balls. Anyways, there's a line in Avatar's Lost episode, Escape from the Spirit World, that really resonates with me. In the final part, Avatar Yang Chen tells Aang this: the Avatar must be compassionate towards all people, and the only way to do that is to live with them. The Avatar must experience sadness, anger, joy, and happiness. By feeling all these emotions, it helps you understand how precious human life is, so you will do anything to protect it. If you were an all-powerful spirit living at the top of some mountain, you wouldn't have much in common with an ordinary person. So, the Avatar continues to take human rebirth, and with each life, learns what it means to be human. To be the Avatar, or analogously a well-rounded person, you need to experience the full spectrum of emotions. The only way to understand others and achieve this so-called inner balance is to relate to them in the most human way possible: empathy. As uncomfortable as it might be to experience anger or sadness, we need to feel that in order to understand how brutal those feelings really are and how they drive people to do what they do. It may seem great to experience bliss and happiness all the time, but those who do are often spoiled and unappreciative of life. As wishy-washy as this is going to sound, taking the good with the bad and understanding that they're both equally as important is the key to becoming a better person. To understand others, you must empathize with them, and when you empathize with them, you will truly understand what it is that you're fighting for. For Aang, Korra, and every other Avatar, that's the balance of the world. And honestly, it should be for us too. This show and what it teaches people has literally shaped an entire generation of kids who grew up with it to become better people. And much like the Avatar, it will do it again and again. So to wrap this section up, I've mentioned a few times throughout this video that this series speaks to me on such a unique level, and I don't want it to come across as me saying I like this series better than anyone else, because that's just kind of stupid, right? In fact, I think it's great that every person seems to have a different take on it in some way, and that's honestly the beauty of it. You know, I've just spent a decent chunk of time explaining what I believe to be the most prevalent and meaningful themes and messages that the show is trying to convey, but the fact that some people are going to see something else that I didn't see is truly the mark of a great show. The whole point of Avatar is that each person is shaped by their own personal life experiences, and all of those experiences are completely different. So I think it's pretty fitting that the show itself also has that on a much more meta level. That's the beauty of Avatar. It is so publicly widespread and filled with so much stuff to dissect that of course fans are going to have different experiences and interpretations of it. Every person who has seen this show has a different answer for what it means to them. Some deeper than others, some more surface level, but that's completely okay because it works both ways like that. The fact that people like me and the rest of the Avatar community are still talking about it 15 years after its conclusion is truly the mark of a legendary show. So, I just talked about Avatar for several hours straight, but now I kind of want to talk about myself and my relationship with this show for a second. We're gonna get gay and sappy for a minute, so bear with me with the lack of funny memes. I'll still probably put some in here. Like, here's a couple right here. Here's some funny ones. I can't remember my first time watching Avatar, but I do remember being there for the final season. I remember watching reruns on Nicktoons leading up to it every single night, and I think I have to have seen the show over 100 times by that time because of that. Even back then, I would notice tiny little details and stuff that nobody else really seemed to, and I felt that I understood these characters in ways that most others didn't really seem to, and the things I learned from this show have literally changed me as a person. I had no concept of the greater fan base of the show at the time, I was like literally fucking 8, so for all I knew, I was the biggest Avatar fan of all, And honestly, I unironically do consider myself the biggest Avatar fan of all, because even today, with all the talk there is about the series, all the video essays, all the podcasts, all the Tumblr posts that get reposted as memes everywhere, even with all of that existing, there are still things I have never seen people talk about in regards to this show. I have never seen anybody point out how weird Aang sounds in this one specific line. I've never seen anybody be able to describe the meanings behind the 4 elements to the levels that I have, and I've definitely never seen a video as extensive as this one that hits on literally everything in the series. Now, I don't mean to sound pretentious when I say this, I don't think that I'm actually a bigger fan than anybody else, and I'm definitely not trying to degrade anyone for not knowing the series as intimately as others. I'm not saying any of that. What I am saying is that I feel I have a deeper relationship with this show that goes much deeper than just being a show that I liked. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Probably not. It doesn't have to, because that's just how I feel. I don't give a fuck. When I started Avatar Month back in 2017, it was honestly something that I did on a complete whim. I was 17 at the time, and I had just rewatched the show properly for the first time in years, and I watched Korra in full for the very first time. My love for the series had been reignited, and it gave me so many ideas that I wanted to share with the world. There surprisingly weren't a whole lot of Avatar videos out there at the time, so I unintentionally kind of broke into a niche of Avatar content that I didn't even know existed. Avatar has become such an important part of my channel, and I think if not for that, it might not have become as important to my life as it is. I'd still think back on it fondly, and it would probably still be my favorite show of all time, and I'd probably rewatch it once a year like I still do, but I don't know that I'd have the same appreciation for it that I have now had I not been making videos on it. But to be kind of a downer for a second, I think it's this very lifelong appreciation of Avatar that makes it really hard for me to accept that it's becoming a more robust multimedia franchise now. As a kid, it kinda wasn't. You had the show, maybe a few video games or something, but now we've got a sequel show with more on the way, a slate of animated movies for the next few years, a live-action adaptation that's trying really hard to not be the other live-action adaptation, an open-world RPG, and all of this shit out there trying to capitalize on a show that Nickelodeon themselves seemingly abandoned when it was still around. Don't get me wrong, I like Korra and the comics and stuff, and I'm sure the upcoming stuff is going to be great, but I struggle with getting excited for new Avatar stuff because as talented as Mike and Brian are, I don't think that any of these expanded universe things are going to hit me the same way that Avatar did. And I don't think it's even a nostalgia thing either, because now that Avatar is a household name, it's gotten too big to the point where it'll be impossible to recapture that lightning in a bottle that they had with the original series. The new stuff out there will probably be great, but it'll just never beat the one that started it all. I realize I sound like those Gen 1er types that I make fun of all the time, and I probably deserve to be called a hypocrite, but I know y'all secretly agree with me. You know what I mean? Well, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, today, the day this video goes live, is July 19th, 2023, which marks 15 years since the airing of the series finale. I think one of the best indicators of how much this show means to me is the fact that I remember exactly where I was when I watched this episode for the first time. I remember being dragged by my parents to my grandfather's house for whatever reason, and he was nice enough to let me and my brother use the TV to watch the finale. I remember being teased at some point that those girls are pretty hot when a clip of iCarly came on at some point.
What did he say?
And then the finale eventually began. Midway through the movie, we had to go home, and I remember being really upset because I thought I was going to miss the episode. But by the time we got back, I don't think I really missed a whole lot, and I remember being really enthralled with the rest of it. I don't really remember anything after that, but the fact that I can even remember that day at all is pretty telling of how important this show was to me, because I have a real shit-ass memory. Most of my childhood was a fucking blur, but I remember that night watching the finale pretty intimately, and I cannot say that for a lot of shows. Maybe the Gravity Falls finale was about the same, but even then, Doesn't even come close, you know what I mean? Avatar has gained a reputation for being one of, if not the greatest animated series of all time. Some would even say series in general of all time. And if this video is any indication, it's clear to see why. It has revolutionary animation, a beautiful soundtrack, a great voice cast, tons of inspirations from a ton of different cultures, a gripping story, and some of the most grounded and realistic characters you will ever see in a TV show. Avatar: The Last Airbender is truly a timeless masterpiece, and I mean this wholeheartedly. You love Avatar, I love Avatar. I always have, and I always will. But let me tell you, ain't nobody loved this shit the way that I love it. I've been MattCMG, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. You fucker.
Why didn't you tell us you were the Avatar?
Because I never wanted to be.
Their honor didn't hinge on the Avatar's capture. Mine does.
You're looking at the only waterbender in the whole South Pole.
I'm going home to where stuff makes sense.
Do people really want to see two little girls fighting out here?
I ran away.
As punishment, he was banished and sent to capture the Avatar.
My father says she was born lucky. He says I was lucky to be born.
What? Why would I let go of Katara? I love her.
I messed up, Aang. Because I'm confused. Because I'm not sure I know the difference between right and wrong anymore.
I lost my mother in a Fire Nation raid. I try not to think about it, but when I left, I probably really hurt them.
I can't do it. I can't do it.
There's no hope now. It's over.
No, it's not over.
It's Aang! He's back!
Learn there was another way to defeat him and restore balance.
The true mind can weather all the lies and illusions without being lost. The true heart can tough the poison of hatred without being harmed. Since beginningless time, darkness thrives in the void, but always yields to purifying light.
The world's so different now.
And it's gonna be even more different. We'll rebuild it together.
Do you really think friendships can last more than one lifetime?
You think we could have been friends too? This is about finding my friend. And now we're friends. I don't see why not.